Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Naruto Became Successor of Elemental Nations. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. I fear no gods or man, but that thing he scares me. How can he keep smiling? A new Archon. Why, be it by luck or misfortune, a giant tree broke Naruto's fall from the heavens. Well, relatively speaking. Broke was the operative word here. He hit every branch and bough on the way down. Always, leaves, branches, brambles, you name it. Keep hell happening. Yup, he hit them all. To me, every last one. Swear, and spitting in a manner that would have made even the staunchest sailor blush, he flung out an arm and grabbed blindly for something, anything at all, to slow his fall. For the first time his chakra faltered, tearing his grip away against the sheer momentum of his descent. Not far below the ground rushed up to greet him like a long-lost friend, ready to render him a greasy red smear upon the grass. Really, it wasn't fair. He didn't even know why he was falling in the first place. Come on, body, he roared, work, damn it. Blue eyes flashed red and he flung out an arm. Here at last, the last dregs of his chakra responded. His body flashed into a shimmering shade of golden black. A trio of truth-seeking balls burst from his back and violently arrested his momentum at the last instant. As when they hauled him back from the brink, turning a wild fall into a gentle gliding descent. Bare feet touched down against windswept grass, sending him stumbling forward 3 paces, no more. His knees soon joined them as his forehead kissed the ground. Urgh! A low groan muffled itself against the dirt. Kurama, what happened? The growl that answers was nothing short of irate. What always happens? Bad luck. How did we even get here? Naruto opened his mouth to answer, closed it again. He didn't remember. He distinctly recalled one final clash with Sasuke. A horrible burning sensation in his right arm. A cursory inspection confirmed that it was relatively intact, albeit bloodied, then lying sprawled out on the ground beside him. After that, darkness. He cast a fretful glance at the sky, but whatever portal had deposited him here was nowhere to be seen. Something shifted in his peripherals. He looked up again, up some more. That's a really big tree. Absolutely gigantic, more like. Oh, a voice plucked at his ears. I thought I heard someone. Naruto whirled and found himself staring at a young boy clad in green and white. Striking eyes gazed back at him from within a battered face. He didn't look to be in a good way himself. His clothes battered and torn, one hand leaning heavily against the mighty oak he'd come to rest upon. And for all that concern, he balked further still when he saw his wounds. What happened to you? Thank you for your concern, but there's no need for alarm. Despite his injuries, the boy managed a weary smile. I just had a bit off trouble with the Fatui. I didn't think they'd manage to find my resting place. Naruto blinked. Forehead, no. You don't know them? Have you been living under a rock, Oro? The boy tilted his head a fraction of a degree to the right, regarding him anew. Something bright flashed through his gaze, something ancient and unknowable. Naruto didn't much like that gaze. It saw him, pierced him, knew him in a way no mortal being possibly could. Just as well, then. The boy before him wasn't mortal at all. I see. The green-clad boy's smile grew another inch. You're not from this world, are you? Did you fall out of yours? Perchance it would make for a lovely tale, I suppose. Naruto's hope shriveled up and died like a flower in the desert. Another world. And you're clearly strong, too. The boy prattled on, paying him no mind. After a fall like that, you should have a few broken bones at the least, internal bleeding at the worst. An impish gleam danced through his gaze as a breeze might through a sunny sky. There's a strong sense of freedom about you, too. Just how strong would you say you are? A seed of doubt took root in his heart. I don't much like the look you're giving me. The stranger ignored him anew. You might be just the one I'm looking for. A placeholder, if nothing else. Said seed sprouted. Boy, I'm talking. And I'm not listening, the boy chirruped. Relax, I'm not your enemy. As a matter of fact, a hand swept down, touching his green vest. I have a gift for you. With a whirl of windy light, he pulled something forth from his body and held it out for him to see. An intricate shimmering white and green chest piece, fashioned in the shape of a queen. It looked harmless enough, yet his mind told him it was so much more than that. His sixth sense bridled in the presence of it, not affronted, but alarmed all the same. His frown redoubled. What is that? I've been keeping this for a long time now, the youth confessed, holding it up for him to see. Maybe it's time I passed it on. Naruto edged back. You've lost me. Yeah, the stranger scratched the back of his head. I know, it's a lot to take in. Basically, I'm not as strong as I used to be. I'm probably the weakest Archon out there now, especially after just waking up. I won't be able to keep this from them forever. But you once more, that gaze of blue-green found his, narrow and intent. You're strong, even without this gnosis. Tell me, you wouldn't be interested in ruling a certain nearby city, would you? Not a chance. He crossed his arms in an X-shaped formation. People should rule themselves. I don't know this first thing about this place. Surprisingly, it was the right answer. A true wanderer, then. Here at last, his smile turned sly. I'll admit, I have ulterior reasons for doing this. If I give this gnosis to you, the Fatui will never get their mitts on it and I'll be free to live my life as I wish, unmolested by their agents so unbidden. He found himself leaning in as the bard presented the piece to him. Would you mind looking after this for me? I know it's a lot to ask, but I'm out of options. Kurama, little help here. I'm as lost as you are. But if you do take whatever that is, wary. You keep using all those words. Naruto frowned. Archon, Fadui, Gnosis, what are you talking about? Don't worry. The boy closed his fingers around the shimmering piece of himself, a piece that Naruto was beginning to realize was his very soul. All will be made clear in time. You know I never did get your name. I have plenty of those. But for Noya. The dark-haired youth nodded once, almost as if he were speaking to himself. Venti, that'll do. Here. He held up the chess piece once more. Won't you take it? Naruto considered the Gnosis anew. Such a tiny little thing. It didn't feel malevolent or malign, no, not at all. If anything, it felt that the lone fingers reached out, giving it a jab. Nothing happened. There was no spark, no rush of memories, maybe the faint stirring of the wind, but he might have imagined that. The boy giggled. It's not going to bite you, silly, says the stranger, offering me a weird piece of jewelry. So you just want me to hold on to this? It didn't sound so hard. He could just stow in a scroll or something. Seemed like a harmless errand. That's all I have to do, nothing else. Well, when you say hold, I'm thinking more along the lines of. Then he moved with startling speed, slipping out of his grasp to ram an open palm into his chest. Naruto doubled over with a hiss and clutched at himself. He glimpsed a fair flicker of light, time enough to see the Gnosis slip into his ribs, and then the deed was done. Numbness pervaded the core of his being, but only for a moment. A strange weightlessness soon followed, bringing with it a faint feeling of something. He didn't know how to describe it, only that it was. Oh, he heard Kurama mutter. That's certainly something. I feel good, really good. Hey, he straightened with a snarl and batted the bard away. That hurt, you know. Sorry, not sorry. Then he wriggled out of his grasp. I thought it might not, for a minute there. He danced back and sketched a low bow. With that gone, I should be able to move freely for a little while. Look after Devalen if he causes trouble, won't you? I'll be wanting that Gnosis back someday. A sudden swirl of wind swept across the tree, kicking up leaves. Naruto raised an arm to ward it off, and much to his surprise, the wind answered him in kind. It lashed out, wild and free, not with chakra, but another element altogether. When he looked up, the boy in green was nowhere to be seen. His world swam at the edges. I don't feel so good. Everything went black. So this green guy gave you his, what did you say it was? Gnosis. Naruto held up his hand, scowling at it when the odd chess piece failed to materialize. He called it that. Haven't been able to control it properly since. His reflection gazed back at him from the waters of the beach where he'd awoken, anger burning bright in his eyes. 3 days of this, 72 hours of wandering the wilds and foraging for food, all the while trying to make sense of this new, uncontrollable power. His chakra was fine, make no mistake. Kurama had never been stronger. But when one started conjuring windstorms just by sneezing, yeah, that was a problem. A beat of silence passed between him and his traveling companion. Her little nose wrinkled. Payman doesn't get it. He stole a glance at her from the corner of his eye. She was a tiny little thing, rather reminding him of some fairy from a certain storybook. Dark purple eyes shone like the stars from a pale face, regarding him beneath a man of thick white hair cropped short just above her tiny shoulders. Her clothing was just as outlandish as her appearance, for she wore a long-sleeved white jumper and a night blue cape flecked with stars, coupled with white stockings alongside matching boots. Odd rose-gold embroidery flowed across her boots, the color of which matched nicely with her dark hairpin and the strange little crown floating above her head. Almost looked like a halo, that did. Was she an angel or something? Such a strange girl. And to think he'd fished her out of the water only a few hours ago. Wait, she snapped her fingers. He made you an Archon. As he looked on, she performed a little twirl in the air. Like one of the 7, that's amazing. Naruto shrugged. The hell are the 7? The tiny sprite recoiled as if he'd struck her across the face. You don't even know about the 7, wow, you really aren't from this world, are you? No, he drawled, favoring her with a bland look. I've only said that half a dozen times since we met. And really, a finger flitted out, poking her head in mild rebuke. For a self-proclaimed guide, you're not very good at fighting, are you? That last slime nearly gobbled you up. Hey, she stamped a foot in the air. Heyman's been a very good guide, you wouldn't know half the things you know without her. And I fished you out of the ocean. Naruto leaned back, hiding a smile behind one palm. That makes us even. HRRNGH. Her stomach growled piteously, cutting off anything she might have said. A blonde brow quirked at her. When was the last time you ate anything? She looked away, whistling innocently. Heyman doesn't remember, she was too busy arguing with her. All right, I can take a hint. He climbed to his feet, reached over and ruffled her hair, drawing an indignant squawk from the childlike being. Which way to the nearest city, Impai? She sputtered. Don't call me an imp. She really is one, though. Naruto's snigger sent Payman into a paroxysm of angry squeaks. Really, she was just too cute not to tease. Still, it was time to be off. Nudging the thought away, he turned his gaze down the sandy shoal, picked a direction at random, and started walking. With a destination in mind, his thoughts became clearer, less opaque with every step. He didn't have a particular destination in mind at the moment, nor a goal to speak of. For now he could only move forward. 7 gods. He thumbed his chin as his feet dug into the sand. All right, good to remember. Heyman doesn't like the look on your face, we focus on them. Oh, no particular reason. Now was his turn to whistle as he set off down the path. Just 7 arses I may or may not need to kick in the foreseeable future. His brow twitched, including the little bastard who put this thing in my chest without telling me what it would do. His traveling companion pursed her lips, but floated after him nevertheless. Payman, starting to think you're a little touched in the head. He quirked a brow. Only a little. She huffed. Food first, bucko argument later. It was the start of a grand journey. Laughter and tears awaited them, joy and sorrow alike. But it would be a beautiful journey nevertheless, one the world wouldn't soon forget. For better or worse, Teyvat would never be the same. Long live the new Archon. Clearly, the following chapters are going to be absolutely massive in size and scope. Once more, the Ember's rule remains. If folks don't like this story, poof, gone deleted for keeps. That's no joke, folks. I'm so busy these days, basically, I don't have time off. Not anymore. My free time is limited, and as such, I can't afford to focus on something folks don't like. Reviews keep me writing in these times, and keep the daily updates flowing. Silence only hurts. I hate having to beg for feedback, but without it, well, it feels like I'm not making an impact. Must protect emergency food. Payman. Definitely Payman. To Mondstadt we go, then Liu, and one mustn't forget an Azuma madness and mayhem await. Right then, as ever, reviews are love, reviews are life. Reviews keep me safe from any and all strife. So in the immortal words of Atlas, review, would you kindly? Every bit helps out. Some are very far out indeed. Hope you enjoy the taste of what's to come. Boom. Naruto coughed once. Oh, please, done for, the culprit wailed. I broke the rules. Whoa, hey, he flailed his arms, startled by her tears. It's fine, you didn't hurt me. Well, aren't you a cutie? A giant fox slammed into a raging beast and slammed it to the ground. Calm down, you damn dragon. Say what you will about this Gnosis thing, but it's made us more powerful. Naruto flung out a hand and the wind answered. Seems like this. Might have to experiment a bit. Where is it? Veni grinned. Yeah, I don't have it. Senora absolutely seethed. You little rodent. Lumine touched a hand to her forehead. Oh, wrong. This country was wrong, all of it, every bit of it. Naruto inhaled deeply, chest swelling with wind and air. Hey, Payman must have felt it, because she jerked back. Now wait just a second, calm down, don't do anything rash. Beidou sighed. Too late. Kikin yelped. Duck and cover. Raid, and his head snapped back as he howled at the skies of Inazuma. I want a word with you. Lightning answered. Still he snarled up into the heavens. This is not how a god should rule her people, the clouds answered, swelling with thunder. Get your ass down here, or so help me, I will drag you out. Something stirred in the air behind him. You know me. I am Naruto Uzumaki, Archon of Wind. He turned to face her as she stepped forth from the portal, unfazed by her beauty. Zhongli told me all about you. He told me more. Finding and fighting things like you is what I do. And you are absolutely a thing. Watch your words. Her expression was nothing short of thunderous. I promise my people eternity. I am not a thing. No, you're only a thing. He stabbed a finger at her, jabbing her in the chest, much to her surprise. You're a puppet. While the real you hides away, you don't do anything, you don't live, you just hide in that sword like a child. You're afraid. I am not. A scowl wrought her face as she stifled the words. Is there a point to this prattle? Are you dictating your obituary to me? Balls of steel. Beidou muttered behind him. Big blasted bronze balls of steel. Listen, Naruto ignored her, spread his arms, and stepped forward. It's time to give this country back to its people. This is your one and only chance to do so peacefully. This world doesn't need gods, it's time to give this world back to people. You and me, it's time for us to go. Her lance rose. You would stand in the way of eternity. No, he summoned his staff and matched her. Just you. Let me show you what life looks like. Two gods collided in a shower of joyous jade wind and violent violet lightning. Are you a god? No, and no, don't you start that. Wind of change. Treasure. Truly there was no greater battle cry than this. Well, it was certainly the fiercest thing Payman could muster. Naruto stifled a smile behind one hand as his travel guide all but flung herself into yet another wooden chest. Perhaps flung wasn't the right word. Payman dove into that thing. Indeed, she delightedly delved into its depths with an enthusiasm that would have made even the staunchest of treasure hoarders blanch with fear. Kurama scoffed in the back of his head. How many does that make, now? Dunno. The blonde shrugged. Lost count hours ago. We're never getting to the city at this rate. Inwardly he agreed, this was taking more time than expected. Payman's never-ending quest for so-called treasure had slowed them a bit. Ideally he could simply run there himself, but that would mean leaving her out here for the wolves. Outwardly he said otherwise. Wouldn't do to torment the poor thing too much. You're a greedy little Luke Goblin, aren't you? Merely speaking the words drew a chortle from his old friend, and an indignant squawk from the tiny girl still slumming through the luxurious chest. Maybe I should call you Paygoblin instead of Payman. What was that? Her retort was muffled within the wood, but audible nonetheless. A merry smile tugged at his whiskered cheeks. All too easy. You heard me. Really, she was too easy to tease. Hey, sure enough, her head burst forth from the wooden vault, snowy hair showered in all manner of trinkets. There was even a second, larger circlet dangling off her tiara. Cheeks puffed out, lips pursed, and starry eyes fixed firmly on him. She'd surely heard every word he'd just said. Naruto pondered the matter for a moment. Is this what it's like to have a younger sibling? Payman's not a goblin, she winked, said, circlet at him, to which he nimbly dodged. Besides, there's all sorts of useful stuff in here, stuff that can help us. A blonde brow quirked, such as, her face scrunched up, treasure. Naruto's other eyebrow rose to join the first. Payman made angry Payman noises. Payman will show you. Before he could think to ask what, she dove down and came up with a hefty sack in one hand. It made an unfamiliar clinking sound as she showed it to him. It almost sounded like coins, a great many coins. Naruto felt his throat go dry at the sight. Who in their right mind left their life savings lying around in an unlocked chest? Loot is loot. See, his guide held up said sack and waved it like an almighty war banner. You said it yourself, we needed money, now we have some. I did, he relented with a rueful sigh. Still, is that any reason to run around opening strange chests in the wilderness? Give it here. Payman clutched it close and floated back with narrow eyes, suddenly afraid he'd take it from her. No finders keepers. I'm not going to throw it away. He chuckled. If you keep flailing it about like that, you'll rip the bag. Oh, her mood did a 180 in an instant. Here you go, then. The little fairy flung the sack of Mora at him in an overhand toss. He caught it with ease, bounced it once in his hand, then unbound the string just to be sure. Under any other circumstance he might have something to say about her trusting nature. He certainly intended to, until he got a look at the contents of the pouch. Huh, he muttered. This really is a lot. Payman hovered over his shoulder and touched a finger to her lips. He could hear her salivating from here. Enough for a whole bag of fisherman's toast. She sounded so small and sad when she said it, too. His stomach growled, reminding him that neither of them had eaten in the last hour. Softy. Maybe he was, but that wasn't about to change. Sure. Naruto closed the pouch, then reached over to ruffle her hair. Guess it's on me. She batted his hand away with a smile. Yup, oh, and looky what else Payman found. With a giddy giggle she delved down into the chest again. Really? How deep was this thing? And came up with a polished polearm that shimmered in the afternoon sunlight. Though its metal was pale, its tapered tip glowed a beautiful blue and green. Easily larger than she was tall, the poor girl struggled to lift it, yet presented it to him nevertheless. Tada! Naruto blinked, somewhat taken aback by the sight of such a lovely weapon. What's this? Archon or not? Payman thinks you need a weapon. Huffing and puffing, she dragged it out of the chest. Here, you can have this one, it looks rare. The polearm, Kurama scoffed. Huh. Naruto crossed both arms before his chest and huffed in a rare fit of childish pique. I don't need Opponwe. Are you looking at me like that? Yes, you do. Her tone startled him. Payman doesn't want you to get hurt anymore. He felt a migraine coming on. Not this argument again. Look, I'm fine. You can't just punch your way through everything. Can and have. Only then did he notice the genuine concern in her eyes. She actually looked angry for once. Right, he'd not shown her his staff, his skills, or even a fourth of what he could do. He'd most taken down his enemies here thus far with quick punches and the occasional Rasengan. No need to show off. Unfortunately, that had left his little travel guide to languish under the misconception that was all he could do. Blast it all, now he felt bad. On a whim he held out his right hand. Fine, a long-suffering sigh escaped him. Give it here. Payman perked up. Really? Yes, really. Really. Fork it over before I give you a noogie. She did so with some effort, yet nevertheless managed to drag it into his open palm. His fingers closed around it, and a spark shot through his wrist, raced up his arm, and blazed into his right eye. Somehow knew its name the moment his fingers closed around it. Skyward Spine. The name emblazoned itself upon his brain. He held it up and felt strange faster for it. With his already considerable speed, that was saying something. Strange weapon. Strange, indeed. Huh, not a bad weight. He kicked its long haft, producing a hollow clang as he swung it into position. Balance seems good. No idea how to use it, though. It can't be that hard. Payman swirled around him. Just stick him with the pointy end. You do know I can fight without a polearm, right? I've been holding back. Now it was her turn to sulk. But Payman picked it out just for you. Great, turn on the guilt, why don't ya? Still, it couldn't be that had. Stick him with the pointy end, she said. A rueful smile tugged at his whiskered cheeks. Taking it up with both hands, he planted his feet and closed his eyes. Naruto focused inward. He could feel the wind. It threaded through his fingers and sang in his soul beyond his control. Now was as good a time for practice as any. He clenched his teeth and pushed. Almost immediately he felt the gnosis in his chest flare to life, burning with anticipation. It didn't hurt, quite the contrary. As if someone had laid a warm blanket across his upper torso, so too could he feel it. This tiny new piece of him ached for action. It longed to be used, to be given the purpose its last master had denied it. Like a small child wailing for attention. Use me, it seemed to say. Don't ignore me. His smile became strained. Was that why it kept acting up? Was it sentient alive? Thoughts for later, he supposed. He desperately didn't want to open that particular can of worms right now. Careful, Kurama cautioned. Be sure to hold back. As you are now, you might kick up a storm just by swinging that thing over much. Don't need to tell me twice. One step, one swing. That was all. Naruto stepped in. Metal was warm in his hands, the wind surprisingly happy to oblige. He flicked it out in a lazy swipe and something buzzed in the back of his hand. Completion. Purpose. Peace. Yo, those weren't his thoughts. What was that? Kurama flicked a tail in the seal. Don't look at me. I feel fine. Naruto tossed his head from side to side. It wasn't a feeling of wrongness, just something else. He felt utterly at his ease, his chakra intact, his spirit secure. His chest itched a little, but beyond that he confessed he didn't experience much in the way of discomfort. If anything, it felt pretty good. Payman coughed into a fist. Are you alright? You've been staring into space for a while now. I'm fine. Casting his doubts aside, he moved into a loose stance. Very loose, as in he had no idea what he was doing. Soon enough the polearm danced in his hands and the wind sang a joyous song with it. In no time at all he lost himself to the flowing currents of the wind. The rest of the world became a faded backdrop, ever present but muted, ignored in this singular moment. In no time at all he lost himself to the flowing currents. This was a life free from all worries and cares. This was freedom in the truest sense. This was peace. Before long he forgot about holding back altogether. He pushed his body to the limit and beyond, forcing himself through a wild whirl of movement that grew gradually faster as he became accustomed to his new tool. Odd as it might sound, the Gnosis almost felt pleased with him. Laughter echoed in the back of his mind, high and reedy, reminding him once more of a child. Distantly he became aware of Payman clapping, cheering him on. Go, Naruto, go, go, go. Her voice echoed his every swipe, each thrust and whirl. He leaped up and kicked the spear, obliterating a nearby stone. A thought and the wind yanked it back, sending it sailing into his grasp. His teeth parted in a grin as it tore through dirt, kicking up a small cyclone in its wake. Finally, when he felt satisfied, he finished the combo, ORAH, and whipped his newfound weapon forward. His new Gnosis sang and wind burst free with a cry to strike a nearby tree and the one behind it, then the one behind that. 3 might oaks evaporated in a shower of splinters, showering him and Payman with bark and sap alike. Tui Payman coughed and dusted herself off. Then she saw the ruin he'd wrought and gulped. Okay, yikes, Payman didn't know you were that strong. Naruto winced at the massacre he'd made. Oops, got a little carried away. Kurama groaned into a paw. Oops, he says. Well, Naruto hastily reassured himself, it was just a few trees. He doubted anyone would notice. From there he bound the polearm to his back, only to find it hardly weighed anything at all. Strange. Still, it benefited him so he wasn't about to look a gift horse in the mouth. Speaking of gifts, he wasn't sure he liked the look Payman was giving him. That one was free. He cast a cheeky grin Payman's way, noting her pallid expression. I'll charge you for the show next time. His remark snapped her back to reality and she huffed. Minnie, geez, she really did remind him of a small child sometimes. Maybe that was why he tolerated her and teased her. He supposed that was part of her charm. She certainly wasn't emergency food or anything. No, certainly not. How could anyone think such a cruel thing? Besides, she grumbled, Payman can't fight and you can, Suo. I know, just pulling your leg. He tried to rustle her hair again, only to laugh even harder when she darted out of the way. See if you can't rustle up a few more chests before we get Teyvat, was it called again. Mondstadt, she admonished, poking his shoulder with a tiny finger. Geez, for an anemo Archon you really don't know much of the city you're meant to watch over. Don't tell me you're a slacker. Right, that. Naruto snapped his fingers. Also, not doing what you said, it was no use. She was already darting on ahead, forcing him to trot after her. Slow down. She whirled back and stuck out her tongue. But you're so slow. Naruto twitched a little. Slow, was he? How little she knew it'd have to surprise her later. And don't go diving into a pack of hillchurls if you see them guarding a chest. He shouted after her. Wait until I clear the bad out first, yeah. She whirled back to face him as she flew and tented her fingers. Well, you made mincemeat of the last bunch. His brow furrowed. Payman, deep. She gave a startled cheer up and waited for him to catch up. Yes, sir. Naruto let his mind wander as they walked. At least their money problems were solved for the foreseeable future. But really, who left loot out in the wilderness that was just asking for trouble? He supposed the loot could have belonged to those creatures, but that was just unlikely. What need had monsters of Mora, and if it was theirs, why leave it out where anyone could stumble upon it? Really, who did that? Idiots, imbeciles, game designers. On a whim, Naruto pulled another, smaller pouch from a storage scroll, this one taken from another such raid today. Deft fingers undid the drawstring and appraised it most intently. Unlike the last bag Payman had given him, here were strange shiny gems scattered among the golden coins. More than he could count. Interlocked lines of rainbow-esque light teased his eyes, begging to be touched, promising something wondrous if he did. Almost like a wish. Naruto considered them for a moment, then bound them back to his belt. Probably not important, but he'd err on the side of caution for this journey. Shaking his head, he favored his traveling companion with a wry look. There was another matter that had been nagging at him for the better part of the day now. So, Payman, he said apropos of nothing, tell me about yourself. And she whirled around in the air to face him as they trekked up a grassy knoll, still maintaining her forward momentum somehow. Payman is Payman. Too cute. Must protect. You certainly are, Naruto hedged, but I was hoping to get to know you a little better. If I hadn't fished you out of the water, you'd still be there, you know. A faint bit of color hit the fairy's cheeks. Her mouth opened, closed again. Huh. She touched a finger to chin. Now that you mention it, Payman doesn't really remember much about herself. Curious. So you've got amnesia. She huffed and kicked out at his shoulder. Don't be a meanie. Wasn't being mean. He took the weak blow with a laugh. Just curious. He let Payman prattle on and turned his attention elsewhere. He could still feel the Gnosis in his chest again, pulsing like a second heartbeat. Any luck getting this thing out of my chest? Easier said than done. Kurama's retort proved almost waspish. It's in there pretty deep. His lips pursed into a thin line. Is it I dunno, doing anything? Not that I can tell by our little flare-ups. Say what you will about this gnosis thing, but it's made us more powerful. Naruto flung out a hand and the wind stirred. Seems like it. Might have to experiment a bit. A faint tingling built in the back of his head the moment throttled it back. Not this again. Paimon saw it at once. No, resist, hold it in. Naruto wrinkled his nose and reared back. I can't choo. Amber considered herself a good knight. Superb, even. She was quick on her feet, a fair shot with her trusty bow, and there was no one better when it came to wiping out camps of hilichurls. That was her given task today, eradicating a camp that had cropped up too close to the city. All said, she had fought and studied and trained hard to be a knight. None of her training could have prepared her for this. Choo. A sudden sneeze echoed somewhere in the distance behind her, deep within the wilds. That was her only warning. Amber whirled to face it with a frown. Then all hell broke loose. With mighty wail the wind sprang to life, clouds sweeping in to darken the sky. There was no transition between one moment and the next. She scarcely had time to blink before the wind swept her off her feet. She hurtled into the air with a yelp, cast aloft like some errant leaf. What in the woo world? Panic bleated through her thoughts. Alas, her startled shriek was snatched up by the winds, leaving her to tumble end over end. Glider, her mind flailed. Gotta deploy my glider, or I'm done for. But it was no use. The wind ripped it from her grasp and dashed her wings. She could no sooner tell up from down than she could left from right. And then, quite suddenly, the storm abated. With neither word nor warning, the forces holding her aloft dissipated. For a single moment she hung there in the air. Then the world took hold, sending her hurtling to the earth below. She spied a lake beneath her and winced, because there on the shores of said lake was that a person. No, she was going to crash. She flailed in the air, to no avail. Luaku awit paluru. The bystander looked up, eyes gone wide. Amber had all of an instant to admire them. Beautiful bright golden eyes, framed by an untamed mess of flaxen hair. A discarded fishing rod lay at their feet, forgotten now as the stranger tried to catch her. She really did try. She just failed spectacularly. Amber crashed. Headlong. Into her, they went sprawling, head over heels into the lake. Poor Lumine. Her time in Teyvat would be memorable if nothing else. But that's a story for another time. Every nation felt it. Indeed, how could they not? From bustling Liu to isolate in Azuma, frigid Snezhnaya and beyond. Each and every Archon in one form or noticed the sudden outburst of energy. Then he regarded the rapidly darkening horizon from a distant hill. Oops. A grimace touched the pale visage of the former god, now merely a humble bard once more. That looks unpleasant. Maybe I should have given him some lessons before I ran off. A beat of silence passed as he considered the raging windstorm, as he heard the distant shout of incredulity. No, he thumbed his nose. He'll figure things out, I'm sure of it. Shouldering his knapsack, he continued on his journey. Zhongli looked up into the clear, cloudless sky and savored his wine. A faint smile creased his face. And so a new chapter begins. It seemed they had a new addition to their ranks. The Raiden Shogun rose from her throne. Exception's enemy of eternity. Time to accelerate her plans. For crying out loud. Naruto winced, regarding the raging windstorm he'd inadvertently summoned in the distance. He could hear the wind howling from here. Even now he couldn't help but grimace as he watched the squall spend its fury. It would burn out quickly, his flare-ups always did, but the chagrin of losing control remained all the same. Trying to control it like this was impossible. He could only stare at it and hope it would fade before it hurt anyone. Because really, who would be out here in the wilds? Kurama groaned. You're impossible sometimes. A bead of sweat ran down his brow. Think anyone noticed? Paimon tented her fingers, looked away, and tittered nervously. Evahih. Naruto rounded on her, a muscle jumping in his jaw to pound alongside the vein in his temple. What do you mean? Why you? A sudden gust of wind hit, all but ripping those words away. Shadow and darkness came with it, summoning a sudden swell of malice on the wind. Naruto pivoted to face it, forced to duck as something impossibly large hurtled past. His head snapped up just in time to behold the source, a might azure creature bearing 4 limbs and burgeoned by 2 massive wings, alongside a flowing tail. Its claws were sharp, its eyes dark with anger that bubbled just beneath the surface, its maw gaping wide. There could only be one classification for such a creature. Not lizard, not a wyvern, and certainly not a newt. No, it could only be a. Paimon beat him to it by a country mile. That is one big dragon. Bah, we've seen bigger. They had indeed, the 10 tails made. This admittedly majestic creature looked puny by comparison. Still as he looked on, a mighty beast winged down and alighted upon the field before them. The ground quaked with his passing. The sheer power of its wings nearly blew Paimon away. Without looking back he reached out and caught her by the ankle, reeling her in as one might a fish. She plonked down onto his shoulders and latched onto his hair, clinging on for dear life. And then said beast parted its jaws. You are not Barbados. Its voice was a low churning storm, one in whose eye they stood. Where is he? Well, a talking dragon. Naruto whistled. That's new. Wait, Paimon tugged at his hair. You can understand him. Yup. He waved a hand from side to side. I've dealt with talking summons before. Some even larger than this guy. Granted, none were a freaking dragon, but beggars couldn't be choosers. Meh, Kurama opined. I can take him. Just say the word. As he gazed up at the winged terror, something in his chest Venti's noses sang at the sight of this great blue beast. Friend, it seemed to whisper in his ear. He craned an ear and the voice grew still louder in his head. Friend, friend, friend. Dvalan. One of the four winds. Ally, be kind. Naruto nearly recoiled. This thing was Dvalan. And yet, there was something decidedly off about this dreadful dragon. Negativity hung over him like a cloud to be sure, but there was another source that pressed at his sense. His gaze soon found the source. What were those two vicious spikes on its back? Two ghastly black spires stood in stark contrast to its teal scales. One lay between his wings, while the other lurked near his neck. They radiated malice, while the dragon before him felt weary, tired, stricken with pain. He flung his senses at the eerie thorns and winced at what he found there. Whatever those things were, they didn't feel natural. Tainted, that was the word. His marked palm itched, aching to remove them. Hey there, buddy, he began slowly, are you feeling all right? Do not test my patience, stranger. The beast growled in return. Speak, who are you? What have you done with Barbados? Well, if it's names you're after, I'm Naruto. He swept a hand up to the fretful fairy still perched on his shoulders like a child. This here's Payman. Say hello to the dragon, Payman. Nice dragon, Payman managed through chattering teeth. Good dragon, please don't make a snack out of Payman. Dvalan snapped his jaws at her and she flitted back behind Naruto's shoulders with a yelp. Not a nice dragon, and you must be Dvalan. He finished with a sigh. Just like that, the dragon forgot all about Payman. With the mention of his name and much to Naruto's chagrin, Dvalan only had eyes for him now. Mighty claws dug deep into the loamy soil, tearing great gouges into the dirt. He didn't much relish the idea of being caught by those. I sense his power from you. Has he sent you in his stead, and how do you know my name? Hey, his lips pursed in a frown. Nobody sent me to do anything. As for the last bit, said frown deepened, it's a bit of a long story. Payman swooped in like the little guardian angel she was. Basically, she clasped both hands behind her back. He met this crazy guy in green guy and got his power. Her head tilted just so. Maybe that's why he feels so familiar to you. A tentative smile plucked at her pale face. After all, he's the new Archon. The silence that followed was nothing short of ominous. Dvalan suddenly seemed to loom large over them. I beg your pardon. Poor choice of words there, partner. Naruto hissed through his teeth, never once taking his eyes from the corrupted creature before them. Very poor. She looked to him in blissful naivete, not quite comprehending the magnitude of her blunder at first. And then, realization dawned in her starry eyes a moment later, and she pivoted in the air to face a now snarling Dvalan. No, Payman didn't mean it like that. Too little, too late. High above, the skies began to darken. Wind swept in, ripping leaves from trees. Dvalan reared back, towering in his fury. Murderer. Wait a second, Naruto flung up a palm. This is all a misunderstanding. I didn't ask for this power. That damn bard gave it to me. Liar. Dvalan raked a claw through the air, forcing him to retreat or risk grievous injury. Deceiver, you hold his gnosis within you. If you won't tell the truth, then I'll destroy the city you seek to rule. You shall have nothing of his, even if I must destroy it myself. What kind of twisted logic was that? Kurama stirred. The logic of a poor soul twisted and corrupted by misery. With a yowl, Dvalan took wing. Naruto leaped up after him and latched onto his tail. Behind him, he heard Payman's terrified yelp. What are you doing? The blonde cast a glance backward. Follow if you can. Wind swallowed her cry as both man and beast hurtled into the sky. Perhaps Dvalan was faster than they looked, or mayhaps Mondstadt was simply closer than it appeared. Whatever the case, their tussle carried them upward into the clouds for all of a minute before Naruto found a proper handhold. The very moment he did, he unleashed Kurama. Gravity and the sheer weight of his partner did the rest. A giant fox smote the raging dragon from the sky and rode it to the ground. They crashed down in the city plaza like a meteor from on high. From a distance, Naruto heard shouts and screams, but he was too focused on the conflict to think of anything else. Kurama pinned Dvalan's wings, and that was the end of their flight. Without the gift of his wings, the enraged dragon had nowhere to go but through him. 9 tails of purest light slammed into the dragon's limbs as he wrestled it to the ground. Calm down, you damn dragon. I know you're upset, but you've got it all wrong. Hear me out. Artifice. Listen to me. Naruto grit his teeth as they grappled. I didn't kill your friend. That tone-deaf bard is alive and well. Dvalan's long neck twisted around and bit out at a golden arm, for all the good it did. One could not harm a body of pure chakra, much less poison it with tainted blood. His tail flicked out, tripping him for all of a moment, then he bowled back in and rammed him through a building. This time there could be no ignoring the bystanders or the damage he'd wrought. Will you just listen for a second? Never. What do you know of my loneliness? Claws raked and tore at him, to no avail. When have you been cast in the dark and left to rot? You know nothing of my pain. I know exactly what it feels like. Fiery breath bathed his face, causing Kurama to recoil. I've been where you are now. I've lived it. I know it hurts. A mighty fist caught the dragon in the jaw to cut his breath short and sending sharp teeth whistling through the air. I know you want to scream, but you can't let this beat you. So you can't find your friend. When the enraged beast tried to rise, he headbutted him for his trouble. Make new ones. So you lost your reason to live. Find a new one. That's what I did. Naruto's gaze fixed on the twisted spires jutting from Dvalan's back. Don't take it out on everyone else. A wordless roar answered him. His eyes narrowed. Those weird spikes have something to do with this. I just know it. In an instant he zipped out of Kurama and alighted upon the dragon's back. Teyvat cursed him. Said curse turned into a yowl of pain as he snapped off first spire of tainted blood, followed soon thereafter by the second in its wake. He whirled pressed his marked palm to nearest wound. Chakra raged at it, cooling the corruption there, drawing it out like poison from a wound. In that moment, the gems in his pouch pulsed with power. Naruto cast a wild glance at them. For the love of what now? Blinding light burned the world white, and Teyvat's bulk shifted beneath him, denying him the balance he sought. Unable to course correct in time, he toppled forward with cursed and struggled to blinking spots away. His hands grasped something and he heard a pitched contralto of a growl. His vision cleared a moment later and he found himself face to face not with a dragon, but a young woman, more a girl really in late adolescence. His eyes were startled slits of glowing sky blue, her hair a rich teal. Faint scales etched her face and arms, but most importantly, she hadn't so much as a stitch of clothing to her name. The girl looked at the position of his hand, frowned. Naruto frowned right back at her. Wide eyes widened further still. She looked down at her fragile, human form and made a noise that sounded like a hiss. At least he thought it was meant to sound like one. Instead, the noise that emerged was the sweetest of music. That only seemed to outrage her yet further. What have you done? The sound of her own voice seemed to surprise her, for her hands flew to her face. My wings, my claws, where are they? She flailed, kicking at him to no avail. Unfair, she cried. This is unfair. I don't know how to fight like this. Naruto blinked. Once, twice, thrice. Now, Teyvat. She absolutely snarled at him. Who else? Change me back this instant. Kurama coughed. Might want to move your hand. Preferably now. Heat suffused Naruto's cheeks and he retreated, taking his palm from her breast. He all but flung his jacket at her, if only to preserve her modesty. Someone coughed behind him. Only then did he notice the ring of steel surrounding them. Blast! How had he missed that? He stood slowly, somewhat alarmed to find a host of unfamiliar faces staring back at him, many of which held weapons in their hands. That said weapons were mostly pointed at him went without saying. All right, he temporized with raised palms. I know what this looks like, but I can explain. This is just one big misunderstanding. Teyvat made angry Teyvat noises behind him, clutching his jacket close to herself as she keened furiously. All right, he amended. That, I can't explain. She was a dragon a second ago, I swear. Everyone looked to the startled young woman. Back to him, to Teyvat once more. I have just one question. A man with an eye patch took the initiative and stepped forth. Who in the world are? Where's the dragon? Someone cried, cutting him off quick. Blow it up. Boom. Something sailed through the air, struck Naruto's back and exploded with all the force of a bomb. Fire rained. Smoke flared. It didn't so much hurt as it did sting, but the impact alone sent him stumbling forward nonetheless. Kurama muttered something less than pleasant, but he could scarcely hear him over the ringing in his ears. Naruto coughed once. Oh, no, someone wailed. I hit a person by mistake. At this point, the poor Jinchuriki wanted to cry. Would the madness never end? Stifling a groan, Naruto whirled and beheld the culprit, a young girl bearing pale hair alongside strange curved ears. Red eyes fixed on his, wide and startled, her arms still overextended from throwing whatever it was that hit him. Her expression became decidedly sheepish as his gaze pinned her. No, he heard someone shout in the background. Bad girl. Please, done for, the culprit wailed with teary eyes. I broke the rules. Whoa, hey, he flailed his arms, startled by her outburst. It's fine, you didn't hurt me. She sniffled. I didn't, but Uncle Kia just said. No, Naruto temporized with a raised hand. You didn't hurt me. See, his arms pinwheeled anew. Not a scratch. Ruby red eyes gazed up at him. Promise. Naruto's heart twitched. Yeah, he looked away, clutching at his heart. Sure, I'm all right. Okay, she peered past his legs. Do you know where the dragon went? Teyvat made angry noises anew. Naruto palmed his face. That's her. Not my fault. The strange child blinked. Why is the dragon a person? Finally, someone asking the real questions. How in blazes did this happen? All right, not missing a beat, the man with the eye patch sheathed his sword. Why don't we follow Klee's example and just calm down? His visible eye squinted at Teyvat's quivering form. Right. He stifled a sigh with the back of his palm. At least until Jean gets here. Oddly enough, the chaos sliced through the tension. It gave Naruto time to mumble an assent and step back, to see, to think. The weapons facing him lowered, allowing him to take in each of their faces in turn. Their appearances ranged from odd to outright eclectic in some cases. He beheld one in particular, a brunette clad in striking purple with grassy green eyes. Well, her gaze held his like lightning. She looked him up, looked him down, smiled. Aren't you a cutie? Wait, what cutie? Naruto couldn't help but gulp a little at that remark. Why is she calling me that, and why do I have a bad feeling about this? How little he knew. And before anyone squawks, please read this note all the way through. First, behold humanoid Teyvat. I'm fairly certain it was stated in the lore that dragons, adepti, and archons can change their appearance as they please. Well, the latter can while they still have their gnosis, but still. Once more, the Ember's rule remains. If folks don't like this story, poof, gone deleted for keeps. That's no joke, folks. I'm so busy these days, basically, I don't have time off. Not anymore. My free time is limited, and as such, I can't afford to focus on something folks don't like. Reviews keep me writing in these times, and keep the daily updates flowing. Silence only hurts. I hate having to beg for feedback, but without it, well, it feels like I'm not making an impact. Right then, as ever, reviews are love, reviews are life. Reviews keep me safe from any and all strife. So in the immortal words of Atlas, review, would you kindly? Every bit helps out. Some are very far out indeed. Hope you enjoy the taste of what's to come. Devalen scowled at her hands. My mind is clear, but what is this feeble form? Paimonial wrath. Her foe slumped, eyes rolling up in their head. Naruto quirked a brow. Really, that's what you're calling it? The little sprite waved the heavy tome and stomped a foot in the air. Payman's trying, all right. Puh. Razor's hand slapped down into his. Naruto couldn't help but grin. That settles it, you're adopted. Lisa touched one hand to her cheek. You know, I've always had a thing for single fathers. Pray, not for the gods or the betterment of others, but for yourself. Sorry, never been one for praying. Ouch, that's a mean kick you got there. Lady, aren't you supposed to be a nun? You want me to act like a nun? Fine. Rosaria lunged at him. False god, die for your sacrilege. He danced back, fending her off with one hand. Can't we talk about this? Look, I didn't ask for this power. You want it, try to take it. Go ahead. I'm waiting. What's wrong? You seemed so eager a second ago. Take it all. I confess myself curious. What kind of Archon do you intend to be? Will you be good? Will you be kind, or will you be cold? Will you be neither? The answer lies with you. Debate between gods. A little less shocking. And that's how we got here. Payman planted two tiny fists on her hips, lifted her chin just so and preened, hovering but a little as she finished regaling them with the tale. None dared to interject. More than a few gaped. Others stared. Silence reigned supreme and none dared to defy nor deny what she'd just said. In hindsight, Naruto really couldn't blame them. Not after what they'd witnessed. Ensconced in the headquarters of the Knights of Favonius, and wasn't that a mouthful, the wayward warrior found himself seated in a worn oak chair before a young woman and likewise surrounded by a colorful cast of characters. Somehow that cheery red Bernie girl Klee had wound up in his lap, balanced upon one knee like the child she was. Even now she hummed happily to herself as she fiddled with a tiny red sphere. It probably wasn't a bomb, but he wasn't about to ask. At least she wasn't looking at him like he'd grown a second head. Right. Naruto slapped his own when no one dared speak. Embellishment aside, that's the long and short of it. I'm not here to cause trouble. Yup, his travel guide chirruped in agreement, clasping both palms behind her back. We come in peace. Peace, she says. The man with the eye patch tutted softly. Funny way of showing it. Hey, Payman wasn't kidding. I see. Behind her desk, acting Grandmaster Jean steeped her fingers and laid her chin atop them. Then you're not Lord Barbatos. When he didn't immediately reply, she dared to press the issue. I wasn't there to see your fight with Devalen personally, but from what I've heard. Kia whistled innocently. Paimo poked her fingers together. Well, yeah. A muscle jumped in the Jinchuriki's jaw, throbbing alongside a vein his temple. No. He pinched the bridge of his nose in a vain attempt to stave off an oncoming migraine. No, and also, no. That bit with Devalen was an accident. And he still had to figure out why those gems in his pouch had done whatever they did. Don't call me Barbatos. Ever. Now that he knew what that name meant, as well as all the awful responsibility that it entailed, he wasn't all that fond of Venti's real name. I ain't a god. There. Payman patted his shoulder to soothe him. Payman believes you. Lies, you called me a god earlier. Naruto resisted the urge to roll his eyes. He was lucky she'd managed to find him after that wild flight. Unfortunately, she'd only made the misunderstanding even worse. He didn't doubt her words, but after that display in the town square, he expected most of Mondstadt would be singing his praises before morning. Might be best to move on before then. Belief was all well and good, but he didn't relish the idea of being revered for something he wasn't, or worse, feared. Kurama huffed and laid down on the seal. Welcome to my world. By the way, Payman put in suddenly, startling him out of his reverie. Payman wants to throttle that tone-deaf bard. He started all this. Kia guffawed. Jean choked on her own spit. Klee touched a finger to her lips. Tone-deaf bard. Exactly, the little fairy rounded on her, wagging one finger from side to side with intent. He sounds like an awful guy, so naturally, Payman gave him an equally awful nickname. She crossed both arms before her chest, smugly satisfied. Let's see how he likes that. Her brow furrowed as only a child's could. Mr. Bard's a bad person. Payman's smile was decidedly impish. At worst you should blow him up. MK. Kurama snorted. Fiery little fairy. Can we keep her? Jean found her voice at last. Klee, no. Naruto stifled a snort behind his palm. Just like that, he felt the ghost of a smile grace his weary whiskers. Say what you would about Payman and her love for all things Mora, but she certainly had a way of lightening the mood. Coupled with Keel being well, Klee, he already felt his spirits rising. And besides, unlike Payman, Klee didn't mind head pats. She didn't dodge them at the very least. I'll be sure to call him that the next time I see him, he said at length. Right before I kick him in the balls. Jean made flustered Jean noises anew. You can't just kick a god. Naruto squinted. Gonna do it again. Still, we only have your words to go on. Devil's advocate as always, Kia. How do we know he's telling the truth? Payman winced. Wooho. Naruto bridled. No. They were not doing this to him, absolutely not. Open your eyes, there's a statue to the guy in the middle of the city square. He flung up his arms with an aggravated cry. I look nothing like him, not a damn thing. Jean thumbed her chin and considered the matter further. In the legends, the gods have been known to change their appearance as their mood suits. Well, I can use transformation jutsu, that's beside the point. Sikiai's smile was nothing short of smug. There could be no doubt he'd done it deliberately. I'm afraid you'd be able to fool us quite that easily. That said, Barbara's going to have a fit. The dandelion knight groaned into her palm. Please don't remind me. Boy, I'm talking. Naruto felt something pop in his already clenched jaw. It felt like a tooth. Why that no good son of a, he knew exactly what he was doing. Was this his punishment for wrecking the square? Forget what he'd said about no violence earlier. He wanted to wring the scrawny bastard's neck. Eamon rounded on him before he could. You be quiet, Mr. Eyepatch. Kiya recoiled, touching a hand to his face. Eyepatch, Klee giggled merrily. Uncle Eyepatch. Just like that, the faint tremor of a tiny smile nearly betrayed Naruto all over again. Blast these girls. He wanted to be angry, but with them around it was almost impossible to hold on to his anger. You took down Devalen with your bare hands. Leave it to Jean to push the matter at hand. Who else can do such but a god? Naruto frowned. Speaking of which, where is that grumpy lizard? She's with Lisa and, as though summoned by those very words, the door leading to Jean's office flew forth from its hinges. A new figure crashed through the archway in a swirl of cerulean silk. They dragged the stunned figure of a young man behind them at great sufferance and dropped him at their feet. An accusing finger stabbed forth at the acting Grand Master. Your knight wouldn't stop poking me. Klee blinked down at the prone figure and waved from Naruto's lap. Hello, big brother Albedo. The young man waved a weary arm. Hello, Klee. Naruto ignored them both. Devalen. It took him a moment to recognize the transformed dragoness. Her long flowing hair had been found into a braid over her shoulder, contrasting nicely with her deep blue horns. Likewise, someone had stuffed her into a flowing dress of lovely azure silk, and she did not look happy about it. Not in the least. Even now she scowled at her hands. My mind is clear, but what is this feeble form? I told Albedo not to pry, but he just kept poking her. A new voice chimed as Lisa waltzed, hips swinging. Now, she said to Devalen, you look lovely. She bared her teeth. I feel like a fool. Naruto coughed into a fist. It was a mistake. Everyone noticed. Lisa ignored, saw him and waved. Hello again, sweetie. You look well. Devalen's reaction was decidedly less pleasant. There you are, slittled eyes focused on him. Change me back this instant. He shrugged. I would if I could. Do you think I planned this? Yes, her head butted against his. False god. Oi, enough of this. She brandished her hands like claws. If you won't change me back, I'll make demonial wrath. The hybrid slumped to the floor, eyes rolling up in their head. Naruto frowned and leaned past her to behold the culprit. Really, that's what you're calling it? The little sprite waved the heavy tome about and stomped a foot in the air. Eamon's trying. All right, she was going to attack you. Sure enough, Devalen stirred on the floor. I will have me revenge. Lisa stalked over to her, slapped a vial of pale blue liquid against the woman's lips and tipped her head back, pinching the hybrid's nose in the same instant. Devalen made an angry noise, but stunned as she was, her body betrayed her. She swallowed instinctively. Her eyes rolled up in her head and she slumped in the magician's arms. Kiya whistled. Klee applauded politely. There we go. The magician lowered her gently back onto the thick rug. I've dosed her with a sleeping draught mixed with a calming potion. She should be a bit more herself once she wakes. Albedo, be a dear and take her somewhere more comfortable. Won't you? One of the guest rooms will do. The man known only as Albedo dragged himself upright with a groan. Yes, I'll get right on that. Curious eyes alighted upon Naruto. His head tilted a fraction to the right. Fascinating, he murmured. Kiya ribbed him the moment he was gone. She called you a false god. Naruto's smile was all teeth. Want to say that again, Eyepatch? Must you call me that? Depends. You gonna keep calling me an Archon? Eamon hefted her borrowed tome. Maybe Paimon should use this again. All right, you win. The knight raised his hands to ward her off. I've had my fun. Naruto coughed into a fist. It was high time he cleared the air. Look, he began warily, I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea here. I'll be out of your hair as soon as I've gotten a good rest. He remembered Devalen and a spot of high color hit his cheeks, and changed her back. There's no need to fuss over me like this. His words did not have the desired effect. You can't leave. Naruto's gaze snapped down with a start. He suddenly remembered Klee was still sitting in his lap. She'd been on her best behavior, so much so that he'd nearly forgotten about her altogether. Not anymore. Earnest red eyes gazed up at him, shimmering with tears. Now she grabbed at his hand. We were supposed to go fish blasting. Is that so? Jean's voice turned eerily calm. When he looked up, her smile was a brittle thing indeed. First I've heard of it. Klee squeaked and squirmed in his lap. Meep, I'm afraid she's right. Kiya's words were a hammer blow to his confidence. Leaving is a bit more complicated than you realize. Called it, Kurama opined. Naruto bit his tongue to stifle a curse. And why is that? To put it bluntly, too many have seen you, including those of the Fatui embassy. When the blonde scowled at him, the icy knight stood his ground. It's going to be all but impossible to suppress word of mouth. They're already asking questions. Ish. Paimon winced a little. Can't those guys take a hint? I can defend myself. Naruto put in, not at all liking where this was going. I really don't need your protection. No one's denying that, Lisa temporized with a raised hand, but there's strength in numbers. If you just stay for a few days, let the people see you, and let them start worshipping him out of the question. He could see why Venti wanted to be rid of his gnosis and powers aside. They were nothing but trouble. Are you deaf? A rare bite of anger pushed itself into his voice. I said no. Jean rose from her chair. I'm afraid we must insist. Kia reached for his sword. Payman yelped and flitted behind him. Kia, Lisa hissed, put your weapon down. Oh, you insist. Too little, too late. Naruto's temper finally stirred. Well, in that case. With a mournful cry, the wind responded to his anger and hearkened to him. Slowly at first, lifting his hair just so. I'm afraid I must insist as well. He gave Klee a little nudge, causing her to hop off his lap. Go to Jean. She dithered. But, go on. Her planted a hand between her little shoulders and nudged her forward. I'll be fine. He waited until she scurried away before acting further. Without fear of harming her, the wind built in earnest. Within a matter of moments it began to pick up speed. Papers flew into the air. Books were ripped from their shelves. Kia stumbled back as one buffeted him about the head. Lisa drew back, seeking the shelter of the doorway, even as Jean balked. All the while the gnosis in Naruto's chest sang like a star. You can't stop me, he rumbled. If I want to leave, I'm leaving. Although he couldn't see his reflection, had he glimpsed his eyes, he would have been most startled. They burned bright, a startling shade of viridian, almost like that of a certain barred bastard. Payman saw them and cooed a little, even as the others recoiled. Naruto paid them no mind, his ire was focused firmly elsewhere. You think defeating Devalen was impressive? His voice rose, booming over the great gale. I've done things you can't even begin to imagine. Faced foes that would give you nightmares. Those words warped into a snarl as he recalled his greatest foe, his greatest failure of all. And you think you can keep me here against my will? He raised a hand, glowing gold with Kurama's chakra. Any of you want to try your luck? No one budged. Good. He dropped the wind tunnel with a sigh, releasing his chakra like now, I'm going to walk out that door and find somewhere to shack up for the night. No one dared to say otherwise. You want to help with that? Be my guest. Otherwise, he turned his back on them without so much as a second thought. A shimmering eye shone over his shoulder. Leave me alone. Amber came trotting and not a minute later, her new friend in tow. Grandmaster Jean, I found. She took one look at the frazzled faces and the utter disarray of Jean's office. Then she blinked. Once, twice, thrice now. What did I miss? Jean's head struck her desk. This is not my day. Wait a moment. Naruto stifled a sigh as someone called out to him in the street. Nope. Ignore. Suppress. Don't rise to the bait. He kept walking, even as Payman paused to glance back at the new arrival. When he didn't slow, she darted back to hover beside him, face wrought with worry. Are you sure you want to do that? Her whisper tickled his ear. Payman thinks this is all one big misunderstanding. Naruto nearly snapped at her for her concern. He would have too, if his conscience hadn't whispered in his ear. Payman didn't deserve his wrath. She'd been nothing but helpful to him thus far. He narrowly restrained himself at the last instant and settled for a quick nod instead. It's not your fault. He reached around absently to pat her head. I'm just tired. She didn't dodge this time. That alone showed her concern. Maybe some good food would help. He opened his mouth to say otherwise. The moment he did, his stomach offered a weak whine of protest. Right, he'd promised her a meal, hadn't he? Maybe some proper food would set him to rights. He was feeling a little hangry right now anyway. I did promise you a meal, didn't I? Starry eyes lit up as his little guide squealed happily. He remembered. One couldn't fake the sheer surge of glee that emanated from her in that moment. Of course I did, Naruto muttered. Now come on, there's gotta be a place to get some grub around here. Something or someone snagged his sleeve before he could indulge, jerking him backward. Oh, for the love of, he rounded on them with a snarl, and Payman proved just as quick to flit out of his way. What is it this time? In short order he found himself facing a familiar figure, hunched over, yet still clinging at his sleeve for dear life. Their fingers held firm, even as he tried to wrest his arm away. Making me exert myself, they huffed a little as they straightened and planted a gloved hand on their hip. Don't you know it's rude to make a lady chase after you? Blue eyes narrowed, sparking with a hint of balefire. It's also rude to follow someone when they want to be left alone. Easy? No. She took her hand away, raised her palms to show herself harmless. I come in peace. Naruto and Payman exchanged a bland look between themselves. The latter shrugged. Payman thinks she's a nice person. The purple lady smiled, quite pleased by that remark. I am. You should listen to your friend. Naruto scowled. Get to the point. As you wish. As he looked on, she feigned a curtsy and bowed her head low. I wanted to apologize for the fiasco back there. Then she touched a hand to her bosom. My name is Lisa, he finished, crossing both arms before his ruined jacket. I remember it, and the manner of their first meeting had stuck with him despite everything else thus far. Dance or no, one does simply not forget when a woman looks at you like a fine cut of steak and licks their lips. And you already know my name. Judging by the way her eyes brightened, it was the right thing to say. I'm flattered. Well, he wasn't about to admit Jean had told him. He'd never live it down. Look, he ran a hand through his hair as he sighed. I've had a bit of a day and I'm not in the best of moods at the moment. Did you need something? I'd like to apologize for that, too. Lisa clasped both hands behind her back and leaned forward just so. It did interesting things to her bosom. You've had a difficult time since you came to our fair city, and we haven't shown you our best side. Those grass-green eyes twinkled suddenly. I think a walk is just what you need to settle your mind. Kurama chuckled. Bold woman. Payman quirked a snow-white brow. Huh. Naruto mirrored her. Magician, say what now? A walk, dear Lisa clapped her hands together gently, holding them up before her face. I was just on my way to visit a student of mine, Wolvendom. Before he could hope to get a word in edgewise, she offered him her hand, palm extended just so. Be a dear and accompany me, won't you? Naruto's brow shot into his hairline. Really not in the mood for another walk at the moment. Lisa took it in stride, bless her. All right, I'll bite, she all but cooed the words. Where are you headed? Paimon wriggled in the air in thinly veiled anticipation. Well, we were hoping to get something to eat. Lovely. Lisa didn't waver in the least. I can recommend a place. She raised a finger, conjuring a purple rose above it. Good hunter's cuisine is to die for. Naruto frowned. Was this what he thought it was? No, surely not. He'd be the first to admit he didn't wholly understand women sometimes, but surely someone couldn't be this forward. It just wasn't possible, was it? Is this what I think it is? She let the rose wither away. Depends what you think it is. A date. A spark danced in those lively green eyes. And if it is, he planted his feet, refusing to budge. We barely know one another. Then this is the perfect chance to do just that. She flashed him a wink. First come, first serve and all that. Naruto flicked a baffled look at his partner in crime. She shook her head vehemently and floated away, arms flailing like twin pinwheels in the wind. Oh, but I'm hardly the selfish sort, Minyu. Lisa was all too quick to amend her statement, no doubt mistaking his silence for anger. I don't mind sharing. You're a god after all, no matter what you might say. You can't fool me. She touched 2 fingers to her lips and blew him a kiss. Tempting as it is, I could hardly hope to keep you to myself. Naruto choked. What the hell's going on? Hirama laughed at his plight. And here I thought you were mad. Thankfully, poor Paimon came to his rescue. She'd held her tongue until now, but those last words drew a confused squeak from her. All that went right over Paimon's head. She looked between them, eyes spitting. Are we getting something to eat or? Lisa flicked her a sympathetic look. Don't worry, darling. She patted her snowy hair. You're more than welcome to tag along. Paimon giggled and leaned in like a cat. Naruto bridled. Traitor. So quick as lightning the lady magician pulled her hand away and pivoted to face him. What do you say? She planted one hand on her hip, cocking her body to the right. Yeah, stop looking at her hips, we're both adults here. I'll understand if you're not interested, but I'd prefer you were upfront about it. Naruto blanked. Once, he would have sputtered and stammered, shouting like a foolish boy. But after the sheer madness he'd endured for the last few days, he'd been made an Archon, wandered the wilds with a treasure-releving fairy, grappled with a dragon, and somehow turned said dragon into one very angry girl. A girl with draconic powers, for crying out loud, and now the one city he'd come to wanted to keep him as some sort of figurehead to be worshipped. Compared to all that, a date was almost blessedly normal by comparison. He'd kill for a little normal right now, emphasis on a little, and he was starving. A small hand patted his shoulder. Paimon says go for it. What, really? Naruto's head snapped to the right. He physically felt his neck creak. You think I should? Yup, her head bobbed as she rubbed her hands together. Besides, if she's paying for lunch, then we can save our morale. She jolted a little as a spark shot through the air and struck her backside. Did you see that? Her little form whirled, seeking the source and finding none. Something just zapped Paimon. Is it the weather or? Lisa hid a smoking finger behind her back. Well, screw it, he shrugged. You know what, I think that sounds great. Lead on. Lisa's smile was lovely as lightning and only a little less shocking than love at first sight. It lit up her face like electro glow. He felt his heart skip a beat before he mastered it. Shall we? Then her voice hummed with a soft contralto, laughter narrowly suppressed. I do hope you're not afraid of witches. He didn't bother to hide his scoff. A witch, was that the best she had? I've seen scarier. She eyed him for a long moment, considering him as one might a fine cut of meat. He wasn't sure it was apt comparison, but her gaze certainly threatened to devour him. He met hers in turn and didn't waver. You really have, haven't you? Quick as a flash, she darted forward and looped an arm in his. I like a man who can back up his words. Naruto felt his face burn. Yeah, you're absolutely impossible, you know that. So I've been told. Lisa's smile was pure sin. It's one of my many redeeming qualities. This way, dear Archon. She beckoned on ahead. Allow me to give you a tour unlike any other. Paimon puffed her cheeks out in protest. Hey, Paimon's the only tour guide he needs. Of the finest restaurants this side of Mondstadt. Lisa finished. Paimon retracts her objection. Oi, Naruto scowled at Lisa, seeing the jab for what it was. Don't call me an Archon. I ain't. Whatever you say, dear. She sashayed on with a sway in her hips. This way. Lisa didn't walk as she led him to the diner. She absolutely strutted. Morax considered the letter before him with some trepidation. It wasn't even a letter really, more a blank sheet of vellum, its words yet unwritten. Of course it was. He had yet to write them, of course. Until then, the page would remain empty, unfulfilled. Perhaps trepidation wasn't quite the right word for what he felt in this moment. He confessed a certain anxiety about this most recent development, to be sure, but there beneath the stress lurked a different sort of emotion, one he'd not experienced in quite some time. This faint pounding in his chest, the ghost of a smile on his lips, one he couldn't quite banish, no matter how hard he tried. You see, a new Archon had been born. Even younger than that tiny deity in Sumeru, they were new to their station as well as the ways of this world. Just as he'd felt the moment this fledgling first unleashed their power, so too had every Archon. No doubt this new god was quite lost and confused. The storm he'd summoned was only the first sign. If they didn't gain mastery of their newfound powers soon, they would rage out of control. Was it not his duty, then, to impart some wisdom unto them while he yet could? He had plans for Liu, but those were yet far off. He had made no deals yet, given no oath nor binding words. The contract was not yet complete, the terms still left unsealed. He could still, perhaps it was more apt to say that Zhongli considered it imperative he did. After all, if his plan went through, if his goal succeeded, then Rex Lapis would die. At least in theory. In many ways Liu was his child. He wanted to see it flourish and grow, without or without him. And besides, he confessed some curiosity to the matter at hand. Had his old friend been slain, or had he given his gnosis away willingly? If it was the latter, then there was no need for him to fret, much less intervene. But if the former held true, would not let such an insult stand. He'd lost enough to the ravages of time. For a being who had seen all there was to see and known much of what there was to know, this was a breath of, do pardon the pun, fresh air for him. What was this new Archon like? It had been terribly long since he'd experienced something new in this dreary world. Perhaps he would travel by sea. Captain Beidou was a capable sailor. A thought plucked at him. Pursuing it, he set his quill to ink and began to write. Before long, words flowed like wine. Yes, he decided, it would be best to write this first and task someone with delivering it before he made his journey to the east. Experience told him a new god would likely look to expand their power base. Mondstadt had been the pride and joy of Barbados. It only stood to reason that his successor would see it out. Thus he would address this letter to the Knights of Favonius, in the hopes that they would deliver it to their new Archon. Another line came and went. "To you who walk among us." Zhongli hummed to himself. He rather liked that turn of phrase. Traveling by sea would certainly give his missive ample time to arrive. From there it was a simple matter to pack his things and depart the parlor. A soft voice called to him as he passed a nearby alcove. Going somewhere. He paused just over the threshold. An amber eye peered over his shoulder just in time to see a familiar pair of red eyes peering out at him from the gloom, framed by a cheery grin. The old god stifled a small smile. Ever curious, this one, ever inquisitive. Such an energetic child. Then again, many in Li were as children to him. I intend to leave Liu for some time. He saw no point in lying to her. I hope this won't inconvenience you, Director. What's the occasion? Hu Tao tilted her head, setting her long hair to swaying beneath her hat. Business. She steeped her fingers just so, unable to truly conceal an impish smile behind them. Or pleasure. Zhongli thumbed his chin. A bit of both, I suppose. She clasped her hands. Another client. If he's interesting, bring him back here, won't you? I'll suggest the idea to him. If he's amenable, I'll suggest your services. The little eccentric winked. That's all I ask. Now that Zhongli considered the matter further, perhaps a trial was also in order. While the rite of dissension was still a ways off, he had no way of knowing just how long he would be gone. Mayhap he ought to put this odd newcomer through a test, just as he intended to test Liu. The more he thought of it, the more his gnosis warmed to the idea. He'd have to disguise himself, of course, perhaps even wear another visage, however temporary. A mere trifle for him, yet an exciting one nonetheless. Too had been some time since he'd worn another form, much less assumed a second identity atop his already existing ones. He was rather rusty, but no matter. He'd cross that bridge when he came to it. Was this what excitement felt like? He'd almost forgotten the feeling. A hand waved before his face, snapping him back to reality. Zhongli, hello, anyone there? And golden eyes fluttered in a brief blink. I'm sorry, did you say something? It seems I was lost in thought. Excuse me, but I must be going. And don't forget to bring Mora with you this time, her voice called after him in parting as he left the parlor behind. People won't be so kind to you outside of Liu. Ah, yes, he'd forgotten about that. No matter, he was certain the problem would resolve itself. Eventually, in no time at all, a lengthy letter was penned, sealed, and sent on its way with a most trusted messenger. Morex departed soon thereafter for the docks. Long legs carried him on a meandering route through Liu. He took the time to savor the sights and bid his goodbyes to old friends. So passed the better part on an hour. Yet even in his fervor to depart, Rex Lapis remained ever alert. He did not fail to notice the figure that followed him. Indeed, he was perfectly aware of the shadow that stalked his every step. They kept a respectful distance and didn't approach, careful to maintain a healthy yard between the two of them at all times. They finally made themselves known once he reached the docks. Traveling abroad, are we? A jovial voice called out to him. How unlike you, Zhongli sighed. Ancient though he was now aware of the Fatui and their machinations. Indeed, there was a small part of him that tentatively supported what the Tsaritsa was trying to accomplish, even if he did dislike her methods. Still, this one seemed to bear him no ill will for the time being. Was there something you needed, Childa? He turned to face the harbinger in question. Nothing in particular, no. The cheery man crossed both arms behind his head, grinning from ear to ear. But you seem excited. Zhongli blinked. Whatever makes you say that? The harbinger chuckled. Well, you're smiling, aren't you? Was he? Zhongli blinked at that, touched a hand to his lips, alarmed to find a faint smirk lurking there. His fingers trembled a little. Not from fear, but something else entirely. I suppose I am. As ever, he spoke nothing but the truth where business was concerned. If you must know, I'm off to visit a certain someone. I see. Tartaglia's smile soured. More business then. Forget I asked. He turned to depart. I have no interest in the affairs of the week. Come now, a thought occurred to Zhongli and on a whim, he seized upon it. I wouldn't say that. They're rather strong. Child is stilled. How strong? Well, now he knew what this one was after. It had been some time since that storm. Time enough for the Tsarits's will to be made known to her harbingers. Of course they would take notice. Perhaps he could use this to his advantage after all. Few in Liu knew his true identity. Childa was not one of them. But it stood to reason he would jump at the chance to fight an Archon all the same. If this new Archon was strong enough to overcome a harbinger and protect Mondstadt in the same breath, if they were a benevolent deity who cared for their people instead of power, then they were indeed worthy of their station. If not, they would face the wrath of the rock, stronger than you can possibly imagine. Once more, he spoke with utter honesty. They command the very wind itself. His gaze sharpened, light so bright it could cut. Interesting. Coming from you, that's high praise. Unbidden, he recalled Hu Tao's passing remark. Don't forget to bring Mora. Ah, yes. How rude. Utterly unforgivable of him to do such a thing. He couldn't very well leave without his wallet now, could he? You are welcome to accompany me if you wish. Childa's once pleasant smile was all teeth. I think I'll take you up on that offer. In gods, I love writing those too. So much fun, worry not, we'll get the razor bit next, chappie. Congratulations, Naruto. Like it or not, a bit of Liu's coming to you. Zhongli's up to something and we all know how his tests are. And wouldn't you know it, he set things into motion. Once more, the Ember's rule remains. If folks don't like this story, poof, gone deleted for keeps, that's no joke, folks. I'm so busy these days, basically, I don't have time off. Not anymore. My free time is limited and as such, I can't afford to focus on something folks don't like. Reviews keep me writing in these times, and keep the daily updates flowing. Silence only hurts. I hate having to beg for feedback, but without it, well, it feels like I'm not making an impact. Right then, as ever, reviews are love, reviews are life. Reviews keep me safe from any and all strife. So in the immortal words of Atlas, review, would you kindly? Every bit helps out. Next time, then love at first sight. Some are very far out indeed. Hope you enjoy the taste of what's to come. Are you a rude one? Mark my words, vengeance will be mine. Naruto blinked. But I haven't done anything. You heard her. Payman planted both hands on her hips and chirped the words back at Eula. Mark my words, vengeance will be mine. Are you mocking me? Even if someone is powerless, they deserve a chance, Lisa. Everyone deserves that much. Even the weakest man out there can become strong if you just believe in him. Tepe jolted awake in his cot with a start, gasping for breath. Such a strange dream just now. And what were those words? When he tried to rise, something shifted against his lap. Not heavy, but a noticeable weight all the same. He looked down, frowned, coughed twice, now, rubbed his eyes with the back of both hands, pinched himself to hard that tears stung his eyes. And yet when he opened them again, the image before him did not waver. For there was an anemo vision in his lap. His eyes widened. Trembling fingers reached out, caressing the glowing sphere. It felt faintly warm to the touch, beating like a distant heartbeat. He held it close and cradled it to his chest. Thank you, Barbados. And he wept. The attack came just as he knew it would. He'd always know the Fadui would track him down sooner or later. It was not a matter of if, but merely when. This far into Liu, he'd hoped the Fadui would let him be, that they would simply follow the storm and ignore him completely. It was not to be. He was well prepared. How chained to your daily toiling you are. He stood with a sigh. Must you intrude on a bard's leisure time after all? It's more than language and poetry that flow with the wind. Where is it? Venny grinned. I don't have it. Senora absolutely seethed. You little rodent. Lisa stretched with a pleased hum. Well, that was lovely. Naruto jumped. Ghost, brother. Lumine studied her shoes. I'm sorry. From a distance, I mistook you for someone else. Don't look at Payman. Her arms flailed. Payman's just as confused. Won't you come in? Then love at first sight. Payman was one happy Payman. You see, not only was warm, safe, nearly full for the first time in ages, but right now, she could no stop laughing. No, she couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed this hard ever. Payman can't believe you actually did something that. She doubled over to clutched at her aching sides, little legs flailing in the air, physically convulsing as she fought down a giggle. And they didn't catch you. Nope. Naruto smacked his lips with audible pop and kicked one foot up onto the table while he polished off the last of his pasta. What can I say? His grin soon proved contagious. It had poor Payman snickering all over again. Those stone faces were just begging to be painted. Would have been a crime to leave him alone, you know. Miss Lisa finished off the last of her wine with a languid sip and tilted her head, smiling softly. Such a mischievous god. Payman agrees. Hoi. His eyes narrowed. I keep telling you I'm not a god. Payman tried to agree with that too. She really did. She just couldn't stop laughing. You had to be there to see it, I suppose. Lisa allowed with a shrug. I wish I could have seen what you looked like back then. You sounded like such a little rascal. Naruto looked left. Naruto looked right. Naruto made sure no one was in sight. Don't tell anyone I can do this. Lisa blinked. Payman joined her. Words trailed off into a startled yelp as the blonde twisted his hands and crossed his fingers. A plume of smoke went up and when it was gone, Payman found herself staring down at someone nearly as short as she. She had all of an instant to glimpse a cheeky grin before Lisa launched herself across the table at him. So cute. Her voice rose in a delighted cry as she all but hauled the baffled blonde him into her arms. Heck. He choked and the illusion shattered, leaving his face buried in her bosom. Let me go. Ah, the magician pouted as she did. You were so adorable, such a little troublemaker. Paimon had the strangest feeling Naruto might get along with a certain Oni. Achoo. Arataki sneezed. Somebody talking about me or something. The little fairy winced, eyes squinting as a bolt of pain hit her in the temple. How did she know what an Oni was? She'd never seen one before. Meh, probably not important. After all, she liked Naruto. Not like, she was much too young for that, but she enjoyed his company all the same. He asked her what she thought, didn't call her emergency food, and he treated her to all sorts of nice things. Sure, maybe he teased her a bit and he could be a bit off at times, but she could sense the gentle affection beneath his deeds. It's really not fair. Lisa tweaked his cheek, drawing a smile from Paimon. You really are the full package. The blonde bore her teasing with a patient sigh. So you've told me. It was then that Paimon knew. Naruto was a good person. Promises were important, right? Perhaps that made her simple, liking someone solely for the act of keeping their word. So what if her memory was a little fuzzy? Even if she couldn't anything about herself, she knew a whole lot about Teyvat. More than she should, really. Gods be blasted. Paimon was going to be the best darn travel guide she could for him. She could be nothing less. Paimon was Paimon, after all. Her gaze flitted to the bottle of wine. Well, she was pretty thirsty after all that food. Surely a few sips wouldn't hurt. Blonde. Lisa pushed her plate back, raised her arms overhead and stretched with a softly pleased noise. All the blood rushed right to Naruto's face. It almost sounded like a moan. Had to be on purpose. No way it wasn't. She took far too long to stretch, drawing out each moment. Kurama offered a low whistle. Well, that was lovely. She touched a napkin to her face, discreetly cleaning away a tiny crumb of food near her full lips. You were a consummate gentleman today. Her smile was just short of sly as she placed a bit of more on the table. As I said, it's my treat. Now, I think it's time to. She tried to stand, swayed in place, and fell back into her seat. Naruto and Paimon blinked. Oh, Lisa pouted. Seems I may have drunk a tad too much. Naruto felt his brow furrow. How much exactly? Well, her pale face was dusted with just a hint of pink. More than I meant to. Another attempt to rise was met with a second failure. How embarrassing. I haven't let myself go like this in a while. She sounded a little chagrined, even. I don't suppose you'd be willing to walk a lady home. A giggle escaped her lips before she could clamp down on it. I'll give you directions. She really is drunk. Kurama rolled his eyes. Not subtle at all. Naruto bit down on a sigh. He'd had a fair bit of wine himself. Who knew something so sweet could be so bad for you? And he could feel a flush in his face that had nothing to do with anxiety. Standing proved a physical effort in and of itself, but he managed through sheer willpower. Lisa, less so. He had to loop an arm around her waist to support her, and the moment he did, Lisa laughed and all but leaped into his arms. Princess Carrie. Hey, she was surprisingly light. Or perhaps he'd just gotten that strong. Thank you, she muttered against his chest. I'm feeling pretty powerless at the moment. Something in those words caught at Naruto's heart, a thorn of guilt pricking at his proverbial spirit. Powerless. Maybe she meant the words in jest, but they still stung him all the same. Even if someone is powerless, they deserve a chance, Lisa. He shifted a little, the better to balance her weight. Everyone deserves that much. The gnosis in his chest stirred a little, hearkening to that same nameless melody again. Even the weakest man out there can become strong if you just believe in him. She giggled. Sounds like you had too much to drink, same as me. But, mind leading the way, Paimon? A tiny hiccup greeted his words. Naruto rounded on it. Sure enough, when he turned to face his guide, he found her floating to and fro like a leaf in the wind. Was it possible to sway in the air? She was doing a damn good job of it. Poor kiddo looked absolutely sloshed. When had she gotten into the wine? And why did he feel like a bad parent? Why yeah, the little fairy hiccuped. Sure's your thing. Just tell Paimon where to go. Naruto rolled his eyes. Not you too. All right, where is? He turned and bumped into someone. Aren't you a rude one, stumbling into others like that? An arch voice scoffed. Mark my words, vengeance will be mine. In an instant he glimpsed bright eyes and pale blue hair. Thanks to his somewhat blurry vision he didn't see much else. What he did see was her scowl. And was that a uniform? Why was she showing off so much leg? A beat later, her words caught up to him. Naruto blinked. But I haven't done anything. You heard her. A tipsy Paimon planted both hands on her hips and chirped the words back at Eula, slurring a little. Mark my words, vengeance will be mine. The knight scowled. Are you mocking me? No. Naruto nabbed Paimon by the shoulder before she could make it worse. Don't mind her. We'll just be going. He turned and scarpered with both her and Lisa, refusing to acknowledge her shout. Eula stared after him. He's a strange one. Even if someone is powerless, they deserve a chance, Lisa. Everyone deserves that much. Even the weakest man out there can become strong if you just believe in him. Tepe jolted awake in his cot with a start, gasping for breath. Such a strange dream just now. And what were those words? When he tried to rise, something shifted against his lap amidst the sheets of his bed. Not heavy, but a noticeable weight all the same. He looked down, frowned, coughed twice, now, rubbed his eyes with the back of both hands, pinched himself to hard that tears stung his eyes. And yet when he opened them again, the image before him did not waver. For there was an anemo vision in his lap. His eyes widened. Trembling fingers reached out, caressing the glowing sphere. It felt faintly warm to the touch, beating like a distant heartbeat. This was wonderful. This was horrible. It would surely make him a target of the Vissen Hunt decree, and yet, despite that, he couldn't bring himself to care. Unbidden, he recalled the words from his dream. Even the weakest man out there can become strong if you just believe in him. How long had he prayed for this moment, hoping, wishing, fighting for a vision? Wind was the last element he'd expected to receive, but he felt blessed nonetheless. The Anemo god must have heard his pleas and granted them. With this, he could finally be useful, not just to the resistance, but to General Goru and Lady Kokomi, too. Tepe held his prize close, cradling it to his chest as one might a fine gem. "Thank you, Lord Barbatos." And he wept. Lisa's flat wasn't hard to find. Even with rambling instructions and a drunken payment to contend with, they made rather good time. The sun was only just starting to creep below the horizon by the time they reached her abode. He set Lisa down and she wriggled free with a sigh. A few failed attempts finally produced a ring of keys, one of which slotted into the lock. She lingered at the threshold, one leg crossed over the other. "I really did enjoy tonight." Same. He really had. Maybe a change of pace wasn't so bad every once in a while. She lowered her gaze, suddenly finding the floor far too fascinating for her own good. Her eyes were hidden by the rim of her hat, her emotions a tangled knot he couldn't hope to make sense of. Goodness. A hand came up to cup her cheek as she murmured to herself. "What's gotten into me? I always thought I'd be a bit bolder than this." Something told him he hadn't been meant to hear that. Curse these keen ears of his. "Lisa." She flung her hat at him. "Catch." Instinct compelled Naruto to move and he caught it with both hands out of sheer habit. Unfortunately, in doing so, he left himself wide open for the assault that followed. "Himwa." Something warm and soft brushed his cheek. Scarcely more than a peck, barely a feather's brush, so faint he almost thought he'd imagined it at first. It was only the faint scent of perfume, the feel of her body welded to his, that snapped him out of it. Lisa's hat fell from his fingers and fluttered to the floor. The gnosis in his chest sang, wind kicking up before he managed to wrestle it back down and get his feet on the ground. Lisa glided back, her face curiously red. "Why don't you come inside?" His brain misfired. "I'm not trying to trick you." She swayed a little on her feet and caught herself on the door. "Frankly, I'm not sober enough for that." "Forward." Heyman slammed a shoulder into his back. "It's cold out here and Payman's freezing." He stumbled. Lisa pounced, latched onto his coat, and hauled him inside. 000. The attack came just as Venti knew it would. He'd always know the Fatui would track him down sooner or later. It was not a matter of if, but merely when. This far into Liu, he'd hoped they would let him be, that they would simply follow the storm and ignore him completely in the countryside. It was not to be. Of course, he was well prepared. When he first saw the shadows crest the hill, he made no move to flee. He simply continued to sit beneath his tree. Why wouldn't he? It was only when the agents drew closer that he finally deigned to rise. "How chained to your daily toiling you are." He stood from a fallen log with a sigh. "Must you intrude on a bard's leisure time after all? It's more than language and poetry that flow with the wind." An agent flicked a knife at him. The knife shattered with every bone in that arm. Barbatos smiled as the man topped back with a shriek of pain. It was not a nice smile. "Come now." He flicked a hand out, summoning his bow. "Did you really think I would make it that easy? If you want me that badly, you'll have to work for it." Naruto woke to an unfamiliar ceiling. Crema-colored, all too ordinary, really, nothing to worry about. The initial raw panic and the pain of a hangover was muffled by the soft sensation of a warm body spooning into his side. He felt slim arms enfold him, the warmth of someone's breath against his neck as they slept peacefully. The wayward warrior exhaled sharply through his nose in a short, aggravated huff. "Please don't be who I think it is. Please don't be who I think it is." His eyes flitted left, now right, taking in his surroundings at a glance. It was a modest room, all things considered, just the sort one might expect from a refined lady. All maroon and cream colors, with little in the way of furnishings beyond the bed, an oak nightstand and a pair of cushioned chairs. He found Payman sprawled out atop one such chair, all but swaddled in blankets, dozing sleepily. A thin line of drool ran from her mouth as she muttered about food. Which meant, against his better judgment, Naruto rolled over and looked down. Sure enough, he found Lisa's sleeping face tucked into his chest. He looked lower. Still clothed for the most part. That disappointed him somehow, but for the life of him he couldn't figure out why. He looked up, squinting as dappled sunlight poured in through a nearby window. Morning, then. Where had the time gone and how did he end up here? Don't look at me. I wasn't the one who had too much wine. Lisa stirred against him before he could answer. Sleepy grass-green eyes fluttered open and blinked back at him. Widened now, as she realized where they were. They weren't undressed per se, but their clothes were certainly rumpled enough to suggest something had occurred. Something he couldn't remember. Naruto offered a sheepish smile. Morning. Shock faded, replaced by amusement. She leaned and kissed his neck. Morning yourself. So we didn't. No, I think not. She laughed. It'll take more than one date, dear. Said smile faded once she realized what she was still wearing. Ugh, slept in my clothes. Her brow furrowed. Not cute at all. Help me with this, would you? She turned and presented her back to him. Belatedly, he realized what she intended. Lisa wriggled her hips. It's a pain for me to reach. Unzipping her corset wasn't that a little intimate? His hands betrayed him, the traitors. So what now? Now she shook herself free and stood, presenting him with a tantalizing flash of dark lingerie when she paced away. I'm going to catch a quick shower, then I'll be off to visit my student. Her hips swayed as she glided toward what he could only assume was the bathroom door. Care to join me? A hand ran down her flank. I promise I'll be gentle. I'll pass this time. Your loss. She shrugged. Feel free to help yourself to the pantry downstairs in the meantime. Take whatever you need. His stomach growled treacherously. Might just do that. Good. After, you could stay here for a while. A lonely jade eye stole over her shoulder. With me. You said you needed a place to stay, after all. I won't even charge you rent. Suspicion reared its ugly head in Naruto's heart. It was almost too good to be true. Certainly too convenient. Lisa wasn't simply going out of her way to accommodate him. It felt like she was trying to seduce him outright. If so, she was doing a fair job of it. The beginnings of a frown touched his lips. Jean didn't put you up to this. Her hands glided across his shirt, and for a moment he thought she'd drag him in for a kiss. Nope. She held back and gave him a nudge instead. I'm not going to jump you, silly. Now shoo. I need to clean up. In the end, Naruto was left to his own devices downstairs. Lisa kept a tidy, if cramped, kitchen. Minutes passed as he rifled through the cabinets. There was fruit and grains aplenty, but nothing he could make off the top of his head. Perhaps that was for the best. He'd never been a terribly good cook. That was a skill he'd need to cultivate, and soon, if he wanted to survive in this world. Giving in, he settled for a score of apples and oranges. This should do. Might need more once we put this place behind us. A sleepy yawn cut through a muggy Mondstadt morning, informing him of Payman's awakening. We're leaving already, but Payman's still sleepy. He saw her drifted down the steps, heard yawn anew as she scrubbed at her bleary eyes. See, she hovered after them, looking about as haggard as he felt. That chair wasn't comfy at all. And we haven't had breakfast yet. Naruto plugged her mouth with an apple. Payman made happy Payman noises as he smiled. Feeling more awake now. Maybe, she muttered as she gobbled it down. Can Payman have seconds? Of course you can. He chortled. As soon as we get back. Oh, and you're buying this time. Cheapskate. Now, Lisa sashayed past. There was a quick shower. Adjusting her blouse and donning her hat once more. It's just a quick trip. The faint scent of shampoo tickled his nose as she strutted by, toweling off her damp hair. We'll be back before you know it. HMMPH. Payman huffed and crossed both arms before her chest, yielding at last. Fine, but Payman wants to sleep in a real bed this time. Naruto clamped a hand around his mouth to stifle a smile. She really was too easy to tease. Almost made him feel bad. He'd get her a gift to make up for it. I'll warn you in advance. The librarian looked over her shoulder as she marched to the door, razors a little odd. As luck would have it, Lisa's so-called pupil found them. They'd only just made it to the outlands known as Wolvendom when Naruto felt his sixth sense tingle. Not from any such ill intent, mind you, he detected none, but rather the sudden realization that someone was there, a presence that hadn't been there before, shadowing them. And against that presence, a faint spark in the back of his mind. Was he able to sense visions now? Oh, Lisa perked up, pulling him from his musings. There he is. A rough-looking boy materialized from the undergrowth only a yard to their right. Naruto took him in at a glance, red eyes and gray silver hair, all wrapped up in faded leathers. The youth seemed hesitant at first, but one look at Lisa assuaged his fears and had him stepping forward, bold as a wolf. Purple teacher. His voice was quick, if rough. You came. Payman squeaked. Where did he come from? Naruto's brow shot into his hairline. This is your student. You smell strange. The young lad sniffed once, like Fox, but also wind in sadness. Something came unspooled in Naruto's chest as the boy regarded him intently, as if he were waiting for something. But what blue eyes met red. Neither budged. Payman and Lisa looked on, yet neither dared speak for fear of breaking the sudden tension. Finally, Razor took a step forward. Naruto mirrored him. And then, his hand snapped out. Paw. Razor's hand slapped down into his. Naruto couldn't help but grin. That settles it. You're adopted. Lisa touched one hand to her cheek. You know, I've always had a thing for single fathers. Oh, those wild red eyes narrowed, noting his close proximity to Lisa. Teacher's mate, then. Lupical. Payman squeaked. Oi. Lisa hummed and tugged him closed. We're working on that. Wait. Naruto made to reply, but the faint scent of smoke reached his nose. Do you smell that? He looked back, alarmed. Cherry red light danced in blue eyes in the distance, smoke rising high into the air. Why is the forest on fire? Razor groaned into one hand. The red Bernie girl is here again. Naruto cocked a brow. Red Bernie girl, who's that? Lisa winced. I believe I know who she is. A-N-G, I wonder who that is. Once more, the Ember's rule remains. If folks don't like this story, poof. Gone. Deleted for keeps. That's no joke, folks. I'm so busy these days, basically, I don't have time off. Not anymore. My free time is limited and as such, I can't afford to focus on something folks don't like. Reviews keep me writing in these times, and keep the daily updates flowing. Silence only hurts. I hate having to beg for feedback, but without it, well, it feels like I'm not making an impact. Right then, as ever, reviews are love, reviews are life. Reviews keep me safe from any and all strife. So in the immortal words of Atlas, review, would you kindly? Every bit helps out. Next time, to be a god. Some are very far out indeed. Hope you enjoy the taste of what's to come. Hold on to your hats. Fish blasting. Naruto sighed, that's not how you do it. He held up his hands toward the water. Light built. This is how you do it. Human lives, so very fleeting. The abyss will have its day, one way or another. Rouse not the wrath of a wind, lets it tear you limb from limb. They were cold, unmoving, unliving, eyes lifeless and vacant. No, no, no. Come on, get up. Naruto turned his head. You've done it now. The gnosis sang in his chest, echoing his scream. I won't let you get away with this. His eyes blazed with light. I won't let you. The roar split the world. It was the last sound they heard. One does not doubt your resolve, only your intent. I can do this, teacher. All I have to do is deliver a message. No, rest assured, I will return shortly. One hopes not. You should see the world, little Shen. Spread your wings. You might find that Teyvat has much to offer you. No, this world has nothing to offer me. Not anymore. Master and student. Festering desires. Kaboom! The cry of a happy Klee filled the afternoon. An equally amused Naruto squinted against the sudden rush of heat and light, then raised a golden arm to ward off the ensuing explosion off water. It really was a very nice bomb. Thank goodness this one had gone off in a lake rather than the mountains. He found himself suddenly and terribly glad that he and Lisa had ushered her out here. Because now, rather than rubble, fish fell from the sky. Dozens rained down on high like holy manna, more than he dared count, each grilled to perfection. Rather than run around like a loon trying to catch each of them, he intercepted Klee's catch with a torrent of golden arms from his back. From there he deposited them into a series of large wicker baskets at his feet. One by one they were stowed away. Not a single tuna was missed. Klee wound up for another throw. Not bad, Kurama hummed from the shore, glowing with pride. But I think you can do better, don't you? Naruto agreed wholeheartedly on that front. Klee, wait, he called, unable to hide his smile. That's not how you go fish blasting. She lowered her arm, turned to look up at him in mild confusion. A tiny finger worried at her lower lip. It's not. Nope. He held up his hands toward the water. Light built around him, slightly more difficult with Kurama occupied, but possible all the same. This is how you do it. Watch closely now. Somewhere behind him, he heard Lisa gasp. With a merry cackle that was entirely feigned for Klee's entertainment, Naruto let the tailed beast bomb fly. At full power, it would have evaporated the lake entirely and annihilated the bedrock beneath. Thankfully he'd held back. Rather than detonate outright, the dark sphere skirted the water's surface for an instant, then plunged into the depths. A moment passed. Klee raised a hand. Nothing happened. Naruto held up a finger. And then, THWOOM. The water absolutely bulged upward in an expansive dome, then burst as his jutsu detonated. Scores of fish rained down, filling yet more baskets. They never stood a chance. Finding Klee easy, keeping her entertained even easier. Who knew if the deaths of a few fish were required to keep the little pyromaniac well? Their glorious sacrifices would be remembered. As with tonight's dinner, Klee glomped onto his leg, all but squealing with glee. You're the best. She squeezed a little tighter. Her grin was nothing short of contagious. Bestest uncle ever. Pure child. Must protect. A blond brow rose even as his spirits soared. Klee, sweetie, I appreciate that and all, but you do realize I'm not really your uncle. You are. She glared up at him with ruby red eyes and squeezed his limb tighter. I said so. No takebacks. Naruto's heart twitched in his chest. Uncle. He suspected Paimon might have something to say about Klee's phrasing just now. Strong words. Angry words. Words that involved a great deal of paimonial wrath. Thankfully she was very much occupied at the moment. Lisa's chin came down over his shoulder. Jean's not going to like this, you know we're doing this in full view of the city. He'd given that all the consideration it was due. Namely none. It wasn't as if they were harming anyone out here. And this way, folks got a little fireworks show before sunset. What was the harm? She can sulk all she wants. His gaze slid further down the shore in time to glimpse Paimon held by a laughing razor. Slide down Kurama's back, glide off one of his many tails and splash into the water. Thankfully it was far, far away from where they'd been taking their potshots. Let the kids live a little. Or swim. He winced when Paimon told Razor off for that. Ooh, she's not happy with him. The magician kissed his cheek, stepped back and sketched a false curtsy. As my Archon commands. Shuki. He clicked his tongue at her. Very funny. Klee tugged at his sleeve. Again. Veto. Paimon floated their way with an indignant squeak, sputtering as she shook herself dry. Paimon said enough. Can we go home now? Razor plodded after her at a more sedate pace, although his expression paled in comparison to hers. Small fairy is angry. Of course Paimon's angry. She rounded him with a scowl. You're too rough. Klee tilted her head. But I thought we were having fun. She huffed. You were. Razor kept dunking Paimon. Were we not playing? Naruto bit his lip to stifle a snicker. He must not crack. He absolutely must not crack. If he did, poor Paimon would go absolutely berserk. She looked so pitiful right now. Like an adorable kitten that had suffered one bath too many, so too did she look just shy of murder, not that she could do much in that field. Simir, you. Unable to conceal his smile in its entirety, he pulled off his jacket, ignoring the appreciative noise Lisa made, and padded over to Paimon. She saw him coming and tried to float back, only for him to loop an arm around her tiny shoulders and draw her close. "Hey," she squeaked as he began to towel off her hair. MMPH. Her head poked up for a moment before he began to dry that off, too. "What are y'all with it?" There. Think of it this way," Naruto temporized with a raised finger as she struggled. "If we preserve all this fish, you won't go hungry for a while." Lisa cottoned on and steepled her fingers. "I happen to know a few recipes you might like." Payman paused. Inevitably her mouth began to water. "All right, but this is the last time." Shen had never been to Mondstadt. To be fair, she'd not left Liu before either, so she supposed it should have been all one and the same. Should have. In theory, it wasn't. Not at all. The land of the Anemo Archon was not what she'd expected, all rolling hills and vast plains, scattered ruins alongside a great many trees. Less than Liu perhaps, but she missed the mountain peaks all the same. It was not the home she knew, not the land she loved. It was just Supin. Mondstadt was not without its beauty to be sure, and she appreciated its nature all the same. Even so, it wasn't hers. Shen felt vulnerable, exposed, as she hadn't been since she was but a girl. Where were the misty mountain peaks she so favored, the kinks and flowers, the quiet solitude? More than that, there were so many travelers on the road today, knights making their rounds, merchants bearing heavy carts, even the occasional wanderer leaning on a gnarled staff. Each stopped to greet her, and while she didn't much mind that, what she did mind was the way their gazes lingered on her. Not just the men, but the women, too. Baffling. Why were they staring so? Just thinking about it drew a scowl to her lips. Not for the first time, she wondered if she'd made a mistake in accepting this mission. An exhausted messenger from Rex Lapis had come before Cloud Retainer some days ago and presented a message to her master, who promptly entrusted her with the delivery of said missive in turn. No fool, Shen had seen right through HR ruse. Her teacher wasn't half as clever as she thought herself. She could have easily delivered such a missive in half the time it had taken her. No, this was an excuse. Cloud Retainer wanted her to stretch her wings, as it were, to venture forth and see the human world again, if only for a short time. Pointless, she muttered, clutching the scroll to her chest. There's nothing for me here. Nothing but wild hills and the occasional monster. Though she froze and left to melt in waning light of the setting sun. Shen had accepted this task, if only begrudgingly, because she knew if she hadn't, Master would have fallen into one of her moods again. No one wanted that. Definitely not Mooncarver or Mountain Shaper. Certainly not her. Rather than dwell on that unpleasant thought, she considered her map with a frown. I suppose this is the place. In truth, a map wasn't much needed. The city was quite visible to her from the hill she'd claimed for herself. The problem would be with what came after. Liu was large to be sure, but she at least knew her way around. Not so the city that sprawled in the distance. She would have to enter it if she wanted to discharge her duty. Her destination was simple. Head for the city and inquire at the cathedral within for this so-called Archon. To deliver a message unto a newly born Archon supposed it was a great honor. Truth be told, she didn't much understand the Pupros. A scroll was a scroll, just as an Archon was merely a powerful person. Perhaps she was oversimplifying it, but then again, she'd always had difficulty expressing herself. Perhaps the red ropes that bound her soul were to blame. She hadn't always been such before them. Still, standing here would avail her nothing. A distant explosion rang out, and Shen watched the surface of the Lake Royal, almost as if something were rising from within. Screams went up from the city. Her eyes widened. The scroll went forgotten, hastily stowed as she summoned her polearm. If there was a monster in the lake, she would deal with it, Archon be damned. She didn't walk towards the disturbance. She ran. As such, she didn't see the explosion. But she heard it. More cries went up. She moved fast. Long strides devoured the distance as she raced down the hill and toward the city. A stray hilichurl tried to bar her path and was summarily frozen for their efforts. She spared them no more thought than one would a leaf in the wind. What manner of monster was rising from the lake? Was it the remains of a dead god, something worse, or? It was only when she drew nearer, just within the tree line, that she realized her mistake. She spied a blond man sat next to a massive golden beast with 9 tails on the sandy shore. A brunette clad in purple and white was sprawled over him in a suggestive manner. Together, they watched 3 children toss strange sphere-like objects into the water. Each created a miniature explosion, but nothing like the first she'd seen. The lake was still now, glassy save the blasts near the shoreline. As she looked on aghast, the blonde raised a hand and pumped his fist into the air. That a girl, Klee. Throw it further next time. The smaller girl struggled with her sphere. Payman wants to try. Unless you have an undiscovered affinity for explosions, that's not likely. Lisa's a mini. More fireworks, please. All right, hold your horse's razor. The blonde raised his hand and the beast beside him yawned in response. Black light burst from its jaws and soared into the air, easily missing the city. It detonated high the clouds, spraying motes of sapphire and scarlet light about. Another cry went up from the city. Realization dawned. They weren't screaming in fear. They were cries of joy. He was entertaining them. Shen'o felt her eyes widen, the faintest hint of emotion breaking through. That was the Archon. Had to be. Who else could wield such power? Her gaze focused on the younger ones. She couldn't see them properly at this distance, but they were undoubtedly younger than the man and woman. Her heart lurched in misunderstanding. Family. This was a family enjoying their evening. A mother and a father and their 3 children. She could only assume thus. Judging by their smiles, they cherished their offspring. She hadn't been cherished. A memory broke through the red ropes, and with it came a rare flash of anger. "You are a cursed child." Shen bit her lip until she tasted blood. The pain didn't quite center her, but the awful taste did help her wrestle her focus back from the brink. This was none of her concern. She had a message to deliver, nothing more and nothing less. To let herself be weighed down by such foolish sentiment would surely prove her undoing. With a toss of her hair she stalked forward, making her presence known in body, if not word. "You, there." The blonde looked up at her approach first, a blonde brow quirked in query. "Can I help you? Are you the Archon?" The woman laughed even as the man coughed. "Much as I wish I weren't." His presence was warm. That was the best word she could think to describe him. Her vision, entwined in her hair, began to resonate, and she found herself struck by the sudden urge to sit and simply bask in the peace he exuded. What drivel! She ignored it. "Well, whatever the case, we were just about to have a fish dinner." He offered her a cheery grin. "Care to join us? There's more than enough to go around." Shen reached for the message cylinder bound at her hip. Paused as she saw the baskets filled with fish. She understood. He'd been blasting the lake to stun the fish, thereby forcing them to the surface. A cruder way of fishing she'd never seen. It was something of a humbling realization. Here was someone with great power that far exceeded her own. And yet for all that, he looked happy. Not restrained, not held back, nor limited in any way. No red ropes for his and him, no sir. He was unbound and happier for it. Damn the gods. They could live as they pleased, without a care in the world, while she, a mortal, struggled with her own homicidal nature stung. The woman must have seen some of her sorrow, because she patted the log beside her. "It's no trouble at all. You must be famished." She really was no resist. Shen slammed the scroll into his hands and whirled away. "There, I've done my part. Good day to you." The blonde burst to his feet and caught her wrist. "Wait a sec. What's the hurry?" Shen grit her teeth hard enough to crack a molar. "Come." She must be calm. "I do not want your pity." "It ain't about pity." He yanked her back with startling strength, drawing a yelp out of her. "I just want to talk. You seem upset." "Leave me." In her struggles, his hand slipped and caught on the red ropes. Such an innocent move. A simple touch. Nothing more. The moment his fingers brushed those scarlet tethers, she felt something spark. A breeze kicked up between them. Those scarlet tethers didn't simply come undone. They dissolved outright. Red ropes fizzled and sparked, burning away like a live fuse. Shen saw it, felt it, and flailed her arms, to no avail. She tried to pat them down, tried to extinguish the flames, all for naught. They smoldered away, and she was undone. Her emotions, her instinct, her desires long suppressed, came roaring back. Her eyes widened. A new emotion bloomed. Anger, incredulity. How dare he? Naruto stepped back. "Look, I really didn't mean to do that." With a snarl, Shen thrust her spear at his face. An unrestrained Shen, a jealous one at that. Oh dear, consider this. What she saw. A family, something she never truly had, something she always pined for. Someone burdened by terrible power, yet one who needs no such restraint. And then Naruto's gnosis acts up, damn it, Venti, and rids her of her red ropes. Canon Naruto would undoubtedly take a shine to her and try to get her to open up. That's his modus operandi these days. Once more, the Ember's rule remains. If folks don't like this story, well, I'll not continue it. That's no joke, folks. I'm so busy these days, basically, I don't have time off. Not anymore. My free time is limited, and as such, I can't afford to focus on something folks don't like. Reviews keep me writing in these times, and keep the daily updates flowing. Silence only hurts. I hate having to beg for feedback, but without it, well, it feels like I'm not making an impact. Right then, as ever, reviews are love, reviews are life. Reviews keep me safe from any and all strife. So in the immortal words of Atlas, review, would you kindly? Every bit helps out. Next time, to be a god. Some are very far out indeed. Hope you enjoy the taste of what's to come. Hold on to your hats. Chest heaving, she struggled upright. Hold still and let me stab you. He parried with his right hand and slid back. Can't we talk about this? Well, aren't you a sight for sore eyes? A woman in red and black disembarked the vessel at a languid pace, hips swaying. She was confidence personified, uncaring of who saw her. She paused at the edge of the wharf, saw him and tilted her head, regarding his torn shirt and his scars. Her lone eye narrowed. Naruto fidgeted. Can I help you? Nope. Beidou smacked her lips with an audible pop. Just admiring the goods. Behind him, Lisa hummed softly. Well, someone has a keen eye, and no shame at that, I like you. Beidou balked, but only for a moment. Then she threw head back and laughed. Feelings mutual. What's your name? They said more, but their words were lost as another woman with long hair descended the ramp after Beidou. It has been some time since I last set foot in Mondstadt. Her eyes met his, sharp and alert. And yet so much has changed. Naruto's jaw clicked open. His gnosis sang in his heart, sensing a long-lost friend. Beidou was smiling for some reason, like she knew some grand secret. He wondered what it was. Child looked left. Child looked right. Where did Zhongli go? You're like family to me. Or, well, the closest thing to family since I landed in this wild world. Of course I'm gonna protect you. Wait. Payman flailed her arms. Did you just say what Payman thinks you said? Naruto whistled a jaunty tune and kept walking. Hey, wait for Payman. Can you take his gnosis? She lifted her chin. He will surrender or die. It's tutted. Your arrogance blinds you, Senora. It's not fair. Why do you have what I don't? Why you? An enraged crane. A devastated damsel. Naruto could feel her pain. It was everywhere, in the air, in his thoughts, in his head. For the first time since he'd gained the ability, he wished he wasn't able to sense negative emotions. It had always been such a useful ability before, downright essential even, during the war. Not only did it allow him to ferret out friend from foe, but it had helped in a number of other ways, too many to count. More than once, he'd thanked Kurama for the gift. So many times it had saved his life. Now, it was going to get him killed. Just calm down. He held a hand out and nearly lost it as her weapon flicked out. I'm not your enemy. I don't even know who you are. You will. That vicious lance whipped itself at him with impossible force, howling for its head. His hand snapped up and slapped it aside, but that did nothing to stop the frost from forming on his palm. He spared it a black look and batted the snarling spear wielder aside. Away she went, tumbling across grass, only to right herself and lunge at him thrice as fast. Persistent little thing. On that, they were in agreement. He could barely think straight, much less focus. Because he felt it all. So much raw anger, wrath, pain. She was well past the point of no return. Her heart was ablaze, her very spirit set afire with wrath. Whatever those red ropes were, they must have been suppressing it. He could see why, see her sadness and sorrow like a living, palpable thing. A new emotion bloomed now as he kicked her away. Fear. Fear was the path to darkness. Fear led to anger. Anger led to hate. Hate led to suffering. But he couldn't understand why she was suffering in the first place. What had he done? Will you at least tell me your name? Shenhe. It was more a scream than a statement. She struck out at him and he retaliated in kind, skyward spine saying in his hand. Calamity Queller struck it head-on and created a shockwave, setting their spears to spark. Naruto grit his teeth and reached out with his free hand, grabbing a handful of her hair. A furious hiss pushed through Shen's grit teeth, peaking now into a yelp as he whirled and flung her over his shoulder. Cool your head. For all her wrath, Shen could not fly, much less react in time. Certainly not at the speed with which he'd thrown her. As such, she was utterly powerless to stop herself from smashing into the lake. She vanished beneath its glassy surface with nary a sound and barely a splash. A moment passed, then another, yet another. Naruto straightened, releasing a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. What got into her? He could feel Lisa and the others looking on from the sidelines, wanting to help him, needing to make sure he was all right. Payman was already making angry payment noises as she raced his way. Razor, he heard Lisa call, be a dear and go get the knights. Would you? I think Jean would like to have a word with our guest. Naruto didn't have a chance to hear the wild boy's response, because quite suddenly, Payman was upon him. Who the heck was that? She skidded to a halt in the air before him, her face filling his vision. Payman nearly had a heart attack just now. Are you all right? No, never mind. Let Payman check. She darted around him in a heartbeat, inspecting him for any injuries. Finding none, she flitted back to glare dark daggers at him. I'm fine, Payman. Wait, a crooked smile touched the corner of his mouth as he realizing something. Were you worried about me? Of course Payman was worried. She stomped a foot in the air. That crazy crane lady was trying to kill you. Somehow, her excitable nature soothed Naruto's seething spirit. Pure child. Must protect. His hand zipped out to pat her head and for once, Payman didn't try to escape. On the contrary, the little fairy leaned into his hand with a frustrated noise. Not a single excuse was given. It showed just how worried she was. On a whim, he dragged her into a quick hug. She didn't resist that, either. A tiny sniffle reached his ears. Wait. Was she? You're not allowed to die? Got it. A tiny hand pinched his cheek, unable to do any real damage. Who's gonna protect Payman if you croak? Her emotions really were too pure. He read them like a book and understood her unspoken plea. Still, calling poor Payman out on it would have embarrassed her, so he went a different route. You're like family to me. He let her go, grinning a little when it looked like she wanted to jump back into his chest. Or, well, the closest thing to family since I landed in this wild world. Well, would you look at that, she really could blush. Of course I'm gonna protect you. Lisa cooed from the shore. Adorable. Wish I brought my camera. Wait. Payman flailed her arms. Did you just say what Payman thinks you said? Depends on what you thought I said. Poor girl. She really was far too easy to tease. Naruto whistled a jaunty tune and walked back to the lake. Hey, wait for Payman. Stay put. He turned to face her and held up a hand. I'll go fish her out. She's after me, not you. An awful crack echoed behind him. Payman yelped. It was his only warning. Naruto whirled as a towering shadow fell over him to blot out the sun. Blue eyes pulsed green as his gnosis sang. Payman squeaked and huddled behind him. Skyward spine swept up, bisecting a massive chunk of frozen ice that fell. From the heavens. No, he realized as the giant halves hurtled by. Not from the heavens. It had been thrown. He spared a glance for the water, only to find a fractured sheet of ice there. I'm not done. Shen stood atop it, sopping wet and snarling fit to burst, one arm still extended from her throw. Realization dawned as his gaze trailed across the once pristine surface. She'd frozen it solid. Not all of it, but enough to give her a pathway right back to him. Enough to freeze a portion of the lake and launch it at him like a missile. Under any other circumstance he might have admired her persistency if her emotions weren't trying to drown him. Look, he raised a hand as she stalked back his way. This is all a big misunderstanding. Whatever I did, whatever you think I did, I apologize. Can't we let bygones be bygones? A thin mist of blue miasma trailed off her shoulders. Why were her eyes glowing crep? Repent with your life. She leaped at him, trying to deliver a flying dropkick to his head. He caught her by the ankle and dunked in the lake a second time. She came back up sputtering, faster this time. Yet more of the bay froze over. He sighed and moved to meet her, steel ringing against steel. She was fast, but he'd seen faster. Strong, but he'd fought stronger. It was only a matter of time until she slipped up. At this rate, he would have to wound here or worse. And so he did what he'd done all his life. He endured. Shen saw red. Red, red, all of it red. Every bit of it. Her thoughts swam in an ocean of red. Her soul drowned in a torrent of seething scarlet. Her emotions sank into a crimson abyss from which there was no escape. She could no sooner control herself than she could stop breathing. It just wasn't possible. Everything had flew out of her hands, like a crane on the wind, and she was powerless to rein herself in. Years of emotion, decades of restraint, all ruined in an instant. She hated it. No, wait, that wasn't quite right. She hated more than that. She loathed the one responsible for this. The man who had burned away her red ropes, and with them, any hope of controlling herself ever again. The man who had the one thing she never had, the man who even now was batting her about like a child. Hate, hate, hate. Negative emotions clashed against one another in a vicious cycle. Festering desires made manifest, an endless feedback loop that only grew strong with each passing moment. Perhaps, had her been given a chance to explain himself, had she not stumbled upon this scene, things might have been different. They might have discussed things like rational individuals. RAARGH. She struck out at him and his spear stopped her again. Blasted thing. The mere act of wielding it seemed to make him faster. Sparks flew as they clashed. Calamity Queller, her beloved weapon, drank in her rage and grew all the more powerful. She surged forward, polearm dancing in her grasp. He gave ground readily, never once letting her land a telling blow. His family cheered him on from the sidelines, and she wondered if she ought to hate them, too. It wasn't fair. Why did he have a family when she had been denied hers? Why was he happy when joy itself had forsaken her? Remember, little Shen. Cloud Retainer's voice filled her mind, hearkening from a distant lesson. You must never lose to your emotions. Should you do so, you will become little more than a beast in human form. You must keep the red ropes on you at all times, even when you sleep. She couldn't. They were gone, and her control with them. She wasn't even sure she wanted to anymore. You are a cursed child. Father's words welled up, drowning her once more. Your life brings nothing but disaster to us all. I wish you were never born. Shen missed a step and faltered. She clutched her head in her hands and grit her teeth against it, to no avail. Anger bubbled up, causing her to bite her lip until she tasted blood. The pain didn't help. It only served to exacerbate her misery. Master, her vision blazed. Frost crept across the ground at her feet. She threw her head back and screamed. It's not fair. The words escaped her in a wail, the cry of a little girl trapped in a woman's body. You have all that power and yet you're just fine. No anger, no urges, nothing. Just as quickly her head snapped down to glare at him. And yet too was cast aside by my own father. Forgotten, forsaken. Why, I'm sorry to hear that. Pity gleamed in the eyes of her most hated foe. You've had a rough life, haven't you? As she looked on aghast, he lowered his weapon. We don't have to fight. A hand rose, outstretched to her as no human ever had. Why don't we just sit down and talk this out? Hey. No, not that. Anything but that. It was those eyes. Those damned eyes. Don't look at me. Their spears clashed. Wind ward against ice, shards of deadly glass flying with every blow. Hold still and let me stab you. He parried with his right hand and slid back. Can't we talk about this? No. Is it because you're a god? She growled at him. Because I'm mortal, I hate it. All of it. Answer me. It's not fair. She struck again, hoarfrost blasting out from her spear. Naruto swayed out of its path. A shard of ice flashed by and slammed into the little red girl's shoulder. She cried out and recoiled, clutching at it. Just like that, Naruto the Archon went still, terribly, horribly still. Focused on the fight as she was, lost in the eddying currents of her rage, Shen paid it no mind. An accident, nothing more. Why was she in the ground? Not on, in, slammed down into it, nearly one with it. Reality reasserted itself with a start, and with it came sensation once more followed by pain. Pain, as a snarling sphere smashed into her lower torso and slammed her down into the ground. Agony as she arched her back and coughed blood. Torment, when a booted foot stomped down, pinning her in place. Where was her spear? Where had it gone? That's enough. Her foe loomed over her, one hand poised to deliver a mortal blow. I've let you vent and tried not to hurt you. But don't you dare hurt the kids. They're mine. Clouds gathered high above, darkening what had, only a moment ago, been clear skies. Something in his chest glowed a deep verdant green, turning his eyes a most startling shade of jade. The wind sang with it, a loud and furious dirge that promised pain. Still, it howled. You think you can get away with that? No, not here. As though a great were speaking with him. Through him. Back in the castle, Devalen felt it. She lifted her head. Here it comes. The gnosis sang in Naruto's chest, echoing his scream. I won't let Yao get away with this. His eyes blazed with light. I won't let you. Jean peered out her window into the chaos below. It really was him, no matter what he said. Barbados. No more games. He raised a glowing hand. and the heavens answered their master. The Tsaritsa felt it. No doubt every Archon had. The storm was stirred, his wrath awakened. She reclined upon her throne of ice and smiled softly, sadly to herself. And so it begins. Fall. Shen didn't see Naruto move. There was no transition between one moment and the next. She was laying on the ground, the next she was airborne again. Wind lashed at her, shredding her defenses alongside her outfit, buckling her body, tearing cuts opening across her arms and shoulders. Just as quickly she was cast down, wasted and spent. Still, the storm did not abate. High above her the clouds began to shift and funnel, giving birth to twin tornadoes. Those terrible twisters touched down on either side of her to hem her in. Neither budged, held in check by his will alone. She looked up and found those awful green-blue eyes glaring down at her. Was this the power of an Archon? She'd heard the stories from her master, but to witness this power firsthand, to feel it carved into her body. Movement in her peripherals. A fist struck her cheek and hurtled her away. Trees burst before her back, which then struck the ground, carving a righteous furrow through the dirt. Sanity broke through for a blessed instant. Am I going to die? An awful sensation stirred in her. It felt like fear. It was all she could do to rise now, to prop herself up on her battered spear, face the maelstrom, and stand fast. Wind howled in her ears, threatening to deafen her. Tears stung at her eyes as she squinted at her foe. He wasn't smiling anymore. Somehow, that terrified her more than anything else. Chest heaving, she struggled upright. It will not yield. He didn't deign to answer. There was no need. His hand snapped out and glowed a sunny green. Shen felt her vision twitch in her hair. Confusion broke through the haze of rage. Wait, no, he wouldn't. He couldn't. He could and he would. An eerie Anemo symbol pulsed in his palm. With a keening white her vision ripped itself from her braid, destroying it in the process. Left undone, her pale tresses fluttered down her back. She scarcely noticed. The sudden surge of weakness drove her down to her knees, taking her elemental strength went with it. Her polearm felt heavy in her grasp, near impossible to lift. Her vision smacked into his open palm. So close, yet so far. Here at last he looked down at it, nonplussed. Wonder if all Archons can do this. His words lit a spark of defiance in her. He already had so many things that she didn't. Now he took her vision, too. Her curse weighed heavily on her shoulders. Fate was laughing at her. She could hear it. A thin line of blood ran down her forehead and into her right eye, staining her world scarlet once more. Back. Those glowing eyes beheld her. No. She lunged at him with a shriek. Give it back. He moved to meet her, raising the twin tornadoes with a hand. Time slowed in her mind's eye. Death. This was death. She was going to die here and now. Shen shrieked her fury, screaming at him until the rage became something else, threatening to morph into a sob. Stop. A flash of red caught Shen's eye and her body betrayed her. Her feet physically dug into the ground, bringing her up short. Likewise, Naruto the Archon stopped short of unleashing his attack. Glowing green eyes ebbed back to blue as he looked down at the responsible party. Flee. No more fighting. Though her right arm bled, Shen watched the girl's left hand clench into a fist. Families don't fight. Fighting is bad. Say you're sorry. Both of you. Shen's throat closed. Family. Enough of that. Naruto choked out. You're bleeding. See me and let me heal you. The blonde knelt and touched a hand to her injury. It healed at his touch, and the little girl gave a happy cheer-up. Then her eyes narrowed upon Shen. Auntie. She physically flinched. Hey, excuse me. You're an auntie now. The little red hellion thrust a finger at her. Naruto's is Klee's uncle, so that makes you an auntie. There. She crossed both arms before her chest, supremely satisfied with herself. You're part of Klee's family now, so you can't fight. Not allowed. Klee, Naruto put in, you can't just decide something like that. Klee can, and Klee will. She turned watery eyes upon him and he winced. Silence passed between the adults. I will give this back to you. Naruto held Shen's vision just out of reach, if you promise to behave. She managed a trembling nod. Here, then. The new Archon opened his fist. Her vision floated back to her, to land in her trembling hands. She tried to breathe and choke. Her knuckles whitened around it. No, she mustn't cry. She was an Adepti disciple. She was stronger than this. She would not falter until her body betrayed her, like everything else. Tears spilled free, rolling down her cheeks, dripping down her chin. A fresh wave of misery hit her, but this one proved more powerful, more poignant than ever before. She tried to speak, but managed only a faint whine. Her knees buckled anew, driving her to the dirt. This time, she didn't have the strength to rise. Just like that, the word escaped her in a sob. After all this, you'd just make me a part of your family. Klee tilted her head as only a little girl could. Isn't that what the crane lady wanted? Naruto's head whipped away as Lisa made a pleased noise. Well, I suppose I wouldn't mind a bit of competition. Shen scarcely heard it. Deep down, a tiny little voice in her heart cried out. She wanted a family. To be cherished, loved, to see others having what she did not, what she could not, and then be denied it, such had wounded her more than words. Still to see spent at last, her fury faltered and her soul cracked. She didn't cry. She wept. Her body shook with great heaving sobs. With her anger spent, a new emotion welled up within her, joined by another, and another, then yet another, pure, bright, and powerful. I'm sorry. She bawled the words out, unable to control herself any longer. I didn't mean to. I was just so angry. She had meant to at one point. She definitely had. But she daren't say that. Those keen blue eyes read her like a book regardless. Oh, geez. Distantly, she heard the Archon sigh, saw him crouch before her through teary eyes. Don't cry. He laid a hand on her shoulder and drew her hurt into his chest. Shen jolted. The motion startled her. She hiccuped softly, more so when his free hand began to stroke small circles against the small of her back. No one had ever done such for her before, not even Cloud Retainer. Was this something family did for one another? It made the tears burn all the more. How could someone so powerful be so kind? Only moments ago he'd been ready to kill her. She truly believed that. And yet now, there, he hummed softly. You're all right. Let's just let bygones be bygones, eh? It flipped Shen a switch and she lost control once more. She slammed into him, all but tackling the blonde in her haste to embrace something. Anything to push this awful feeling away. Naruto had absolutely no chance. He toppled back with a startled squawk. She drove him down to the ground, uncaring of her ruined attire. His arms closed around her body to catch her, likely to keep her from dashing her head against the rocky shore, and that was it. It was the final straw. She latched on for dear life, and latch hard she did, nigh on burying her head into his shoulder as she bawled like the child she'd never been. I'm sorry, she mumbled into his shoulder, babbling in her haste. Sorry. Hey, now, she heard him cough. You're close. I can feel your Lisa made a startled noise. Oh, dearth here quite visible. Payman squeaked. Somebody get her a jacket. Perhaps had Shen been in a more coherent state of mind, she might have tried to cover herself. At this moment, she was far from sane. Because you see, she felt warm, safe, protected, a curious feeling, one she'd never thought to crave in all her days. Yet now that she knew its touch, she wanted nothing more. She didn't care about anything else, anyone else. Nothing would move her right now, not even Rex Lapis himself. Her heart had quieted, but in the absence of her rage, a new feeling persisted. It felt like Ish didn't know what it felt like. Good, pure, regardless. She was never going to let it go. Naruto must have realized it too, because he stopped struggling. You're not going to let me up anytime soon, are you? Shen wasn't sure how much time passed after that, how long she simply clung to him. Until her tears ran dry possibly. She might have drifted off in her exhaustion. She wasn't sure. Who could say how long she spent like that? Seconds, minutes, hours, but surely time must have moved on, because she heard a sudden sharp noise behind her. It jolted her back to reality. Look. She craned her neck to find Klee pointing at the bay. A ship's coming into port. She all but hopped in place, eyes shining with glee. A really big ship. I wonder who's on it. Edit, yes, ships can come to Mondstadt by water. It's just a long, winding path. See the map. Sorry. Shen stole the show this time. There we go. Once more, the Ember's rule remains. If folks don't like this story, well, I'll not continue it. That's no joke, folks. I'm so busy these days, basically, I don't have time off. Not anymore. My free time is limited, and as such, I can't afford to focus on something folks don't like. Reviews keep me writing in these times, and keep the daily updates flowing. Silence only hurts. I hate having to beg for feedback, but without it, well, it feels like I'm not making an impact. Right then, as ever, reviews are love, reviews are life. Reviews keep me safe from any and all strife. So in the immortal words of Atlas, review, would you kindly? Every bit helps out. Some are very far out indeed. Hope you enjoy the taste of what's to come. Hold on to your hats. And you are. Morax Zhongli hummed softly. It had been some time since such a disguise was required. Nevertheless, the part was well played. No one suspected a thing. Call me Morem. She coughed into her fist to hide her slip. Knave will do. Naruto laughed. The day you learn how to use your strength for the good of others is the day you can truly become part of human society. Your master said that. He tapped her on the nose when she nodded. All right, let me add something to that. Listen to your heart, but don't ever let it control you. Do what you think is right, you know. Shen sniffled into her flagon of ale. You sound like my master. He smiled at her. She sounds like a very wise woman. Shen scooted closer, brushing her hip against his. Ever drank before? The ghost of a smile touched Naruto's mouth. Once. Good. Beidou all but purred the words. Then you won't mind a drinking game. In the background, Shen tilted her head and contemplated bloody murder. Her eating fork stabbed into the table. Cloud Retainer tutted once. Perhaps someone needed to retrieve little Shen. It has been some time since one wore the guise of a mortal. She craned her long neck to make certain no one was watching. Danyu was far from here. Likewise, those old fossils Mountain Shaper and Moon Carver were also away, doing whatever it was they did. Content that none were present to witness her flight of fancy. She drew her wings around herself and hummed softly. At her call, light burned, impossibly bright, obscuring her form from view. Wind sang, stirring the flowers around her. As the luminescence faded, died, bare feet settled upon the ground. Human feet. Full lips pursed, considering her naked skin as she blinked with stark silver eyes. One may need to acquire clothes. Klee touched a finger to her lips. Does this mean I have another auntie? Naruto toppled back with a wheeze even as Lisa giggled. She couldn't allow herself to die. Not yet. There was so much to live for. So, any chance you know this Archon guy? No. Childa blinked. No. Lumine scowled. No, I don't trust you. The Harbinger physically flinched. Ouch. So mean, girly. Pray, not for the gods, nor the betterment of others, but for yourself. Faithless, Childa disembarked quickly. It wasn't as if he wanted to, of course. In truth, he would have much rather stuck around the docks to see if the Archon showed in the fireworks that followed. But as much as he might have liked to linger, he knew it just wasn't possible, couldn't. The Fatui didn't exactly have a good reputation in Teyvat these days, not even in a free city like Mondstadt, and he knew he'd have to tread carefully. Thus, the moment the Crux docked, he made his excuses and slipped away. Zhongli must have done the same beforehand. He hadn't seen that sly bastard anywhere before leaving. Didn't matter. If there really was an Archon lurking in this city, it'd smoke them out soon enough. He suppressed a tiny smile at the thought as he slipped through another alley, dodging another patrol. Faye, and they called themselves knights. What a shame. This lot didn't even have visions. None of them were good for a bout. Just gotta be a little patient, he hummed to himself, skirting a barrel. Won't be long now. Anemo Archons were supposed to be strong, right? If so, he'd have the fight he desired. That was all he'd been searching for, really. A proper battle, a true foe, a worthy prize. If this one was strong enough to hold onto his gnosis and fend him, then that would be that. He, Childa, would die. He'd go to his grave without regret. But if he wasn't, then the tables would be turned. Snagging an apple from a nearby cart, he flung down some more and sauntered deeper into the city. A hearty bite helped to lift both his spirits and his stamina. It also gave him time to think. He couldn't exactly go herring off hollering for the Archon to show himself. Best save that option for last. He'd not brought any men with him on this voyage. He had nothing to rely on save his own strength and arms. It would be enough. He was hardly about to ambush the bastard. Signora would have done that in a heartbeat. Not him. He needed that fight, craved it like the air in his lungs. Right, then, priorities. First have to ask around, find out what he looked like, then get him away from the city. And wouldn't you know it, where was someone to ask right now? His gaze alighted upon a little slip of a girl over there by the diner, all bright eyes and brighter hair, wrapped in a pale dress. There was another girl with her there, a brunette in red, but he paid that one little heed. She wasn't his target. Hey there, girlie, he called out to the former. Got a sec. The blonde turned, doe-like eyes blinking. Are you talking to me? Yup, Huey polished off the last of his apple and tossed it into a nearby bin as he sauntered over. Any chance you know this Archon guy I've heard so much about? She hung her head, fists balling at her sides. Did you call me girlie? Awfully hung up on that, this one. Yes. Her gaze rose to scowl at him. No. What? Well, that was fast. Childa blinked. No. Lumine scowled right back, fire and fury wrapped in a small package. No. You insulted me. Oh, dear. He didn't like that look in her eyes. It wasn't an insult. Lies. Now what? Just a sec. Her elbow nailed him in the ribs. The Harbinger doubled over with a groan. Why me? In the background, Amber palmed her face. Why do I feel like I'm being ignored here? Rosaria didn't hold much faith in the gods. Barbara wouldn't be much pleased to hear that, but there it was. The truth. She didn't particularly hate them per se, but neither could she bring herself to love them as most did, either. Why should she? Archons were strange figures, powerful yet distant, a reminder of the gap between humanity and the divine. Gods were ancient, cruel, foreign. They lived as they pleased, caring not who they trampled underfoot. Yet they demanded respect, love, and adoration from those beneath them. She liked it not. Honestly, if the gods cared more for their people, then so might she for them. But they didn't now, did they? As far as she was concerned, the world of Teyvat would be better off without them. One had but to look at the nations to see why. Sumeru's deity was a naive little thing who kowtowed to corrupt advisors. The less said about Snezhnaya and its Tsaritsa, the better. Inazuma played host to a petulant shogun who pushed her will upon the people and stripped their visions away. Liu had a reclusive lord who showed himself only once a year at best. Mondstadt had Barsabatono. Wait, it was Bartobas. All right, maybe she couldn't remember his name. Didn't matter whatever his name. Mondstadt's oh so precious god of freedom had abandoned his people long ago. Freeba, probably free to slack off and drink wine somewhere, just thinking of it made her clench her teeth. God's children, more like. They went and did as they pleased, and to hell with the consequences. Today's quarry was no different from the rest, no matter how much he might claim to be. Bloody blonde bastard, walking back into the city without a care in the world, and was that an adeptus on his arm? She looked like one. Had he really befriended her that easily? Only a few minutes ago they'd been trying to kill one another. How had he managed to tame her? It didn't make a lick of sense. He'd even managed to deceive Clea and Lisa, the bastard. Sister Rosaria, there you are. Cold eyes drifted shut with a tired sigh. Rosaria was not one for prayer, but in this moment she prayed. Please don't be Barbara, please not Barbara, for the love of any god out there, don't let it be. She turned, looked down, and found earnest blue eyes gazing up at her. You up? The gods were assholes. Barbara, did you need something? She spoke in a languid manner, hoping she would take the hint. Whatever she wanted, she didn't have time for it. The idol of Mondstadt flinched beneath her gaze, tented her fingers and stood her ground. Blast. Well, it's about the ceremony. I've told you already, I don't go in for that kind of thing. I've got more important matters to attend to. Every second she spent talking with this silly girl was another moment for her quarry to get away. You're wasting your time here. But this event has commemorative significance. Blasted girl didn't know how to take a hint. The church hopes that all sisters will be present when we lay the foundation for the statue. Rosaria nearly choked on her spit. Statue, it hadn't even been an hour after that display and they were already kowtowing to that blonde bastard. No. She wouldn't have it. She refused to accept it. Every fiber of her being rejected the very concept. Hope, she bit down a snarl. That's odd, cause I don't recall a fulfill the hopes of others clause in my job description. Barbara faltered. I mean, sure, but what? Rosaria pounced with a wolfish smile, seizing the moment of weakness for what it was. You're the event organizer, aren't you? Do you not find it the least bit odd? The girl dithered and she pressed the attack. Someone sent you out to get me at this hour. Even if you turn around right now, I'd wager you'll still miss the opening ceremony. Unlikely if she ran, but still possible. Who knows, maybe this is someone's grand plan to make a fool out of you. Her eyes widened. That can't be. People aren't like that. The bandit Rosaria once was scoffed at her naivete. They really are, little girl. Barbara didn't know the true face of this world. Then he loved her for her innocence, her purity, but sometimes it frustrated her to no end. How evidence decides what people are like, not your feelings. Maybe you're a little too trusting of other people. The idol made a piteous noise, and so too did Rosaria. Take pity on her. Don't fret. She reached out to pat her head when it hung. Nobody's gonna blame you if you go back empty-handed. I can't imagine anyone else was delusional enough to think I was gonna show up. Barbara made one last pitiful stab at it. But, commemorative event. VSH, she scoffed. If this is about Barsabatos, then I'm doubly uninterested. Barbara's face flushed. You shouldn't disrespect the Lord Archon like that. Then why don't you ask him? Our new Archon, he's right over there. She jerked a thumb over her shoulder. This time the sneer she wore wasn't entirely feigned. Who knows, maybe he'll only throw you into the lake. Barbara squeaked, no doubt recalling the spectacle they'd seen in the bay. Gotcha. Rosaria went in for the kill. But if you dally any longer you really won't make it. It was the final straw. Barbara mumbled an excuse and scarpered. Rosaria watched her go with a sigh. Foolish girl. If she tried to bother that one, she'd regret it. This Naruto didn't strike her as the sort to enjoy worship, let alone needless questions. Stop. She tapped clenched knuckles against the side of her head to quell such maudlin thoughts. You're working. Focus. She leaned back out, following her target with watchful eyes. Despite Barbara's interruption, or perhaps in spite of it, hadn't gotten too far into the city. Maybe his entourage was to blame for that. She didn't know, didn't care. He was headed to the harbor now, with the rest of them well in hand. So calm, so carefree, it made her sick. But she'd seen his true colors. Everyone had glimpsed them in that moment of fury down by the bay. She wouldn't be fooled. No, she refused. Still, he seemed Sachiper now, a far cry from the fell-ire she'd seen beforehand. When his merry band rounded a corner, she hastened after them. No matter what some Barbara included might think, this newcomer was not their god. Poor Barbara was all in a tizzy about that, unable to decide if he was the genuine article in disguise or merely some impostor with clever tricks. But what this individual lacked in divine right he more than made up in power. That in turn made Rosaria wary. Careful, she chided herself. Don't get caught. Who knows what he might do. She watched him for some time now, observing his movements from afar ever since he'd taken down Devalen. It had taken every ounce of her skill to remain hidden. No one thought to question a sister of the church. Why would they? Most of Mondstadt knew her eccentricities by now. They'd chalk it up as nothing, unaware of her true work. Her identity was her armor, her shroud, a clever cloak with which to conceal herself. For if fear was a sure bet, then so too was suspicion toward a stranger such as him. This man swore he had no ulterior motives, yet he'd worked quickly to ingratiate himself with the Knights of Favonius. Likewise, she'd seen his power, Archon or not, she would be a fool to face him head-on. It made her all the more paranoid, but she couldn't well leave him alone now, could she? He was clearly a danger. But to whom, himself or the world, or none of them? Rosaria wanted to know. More than anything, she had to know. Who was this Naruto really? What did he want? Would he become a threat to Mondstadt in time, like Albedo? Or perhaps, after all, she wasn't one for trust. She would rather hunt in the wild than settle into a life of dutiful service as a sister. As far as she was concerned, the golden sunlight was not so much cleansing as blinding. It wasn't that she couldn't trust others, rather, she was just choosy about it. In a way, her current quarry reminded her of old man Varka, but brighter. He lived in the light, while she dwelled in the dark. It was better this way, but sunlight hid shadows of its own. He looked back suddenly. Their eyes met. Her soul froze. How did he notice me? And his gaze swept past. Cheeky boy, mocking her like that. She'd show him. But his smile had been pure, good, honest, impossible. Such purity couldn't exist. And if it did, the red ropes were gone. Cloud Retainer confessed a certain concern to this, if only because she hadn't thought it possible. One could remove them, of course, as little Shen had done a time or two, but one had not expected that they could be destroyed. She'd made them herself, and thus felt the very moment of their unraveling. Now one found herself fixed. Though she wished for her pupil to see the word, to do as such promised disaster. Her emotions might well rage out of control, bringing devastation in her wake. Cloud Retainer tutted once. Perhaps someone needed to retrieve little Shen. She lifted a wing, considering herself. It has been some time since one wore the guise of a mortal. She craned her long neck to make certain no one was watching. Left, right, nary a soul in sight. Ganyu was far from here. Likewise, those old fossils Mountain Shaper and Moon Carver were also away, doing whatever it was they did. Content that none were present to witness her flight of fancy, she drew her wings around herself, closed her eyes and hummed softly. At her call light burned, impossibly bright, obscuring her form from view. Wind sang, stirring the flowers around her in a gentle breeze. As the luminescence faded died, bare feet settled upon the ground. Human feet. She twisted her hip to one side, running a hand down her flank. Full lips pursed, considering her pale, naked skin as she blinked with stark silver eyes. One may need to acquire clothes. Is that nun still following us? Hirama uttered a jaw-popping yawn. Yup. Naruto valiantly resisted the urge to look backward again, but only just. He could feel Rosaria's gaze glaring a hole between his shoulders, sizing him up, trying to get the measure of him. To look again was to damn himself well, and truly, he wasn't sure he could keep his tongue still if he looked her in the eye a second time. She's still muttering to herself, or am I imagining that bit? Nope. Naruto blew out a sigh and kept walking. Well, so long as she doesn't try anything. You're kidding, right? His partner's retort was nothing short of caustic. I can taste her frustration from here. She's not best pleased with you. Why, he resisted the urge to fling up his arms. I haven't even spoken to her. I know. You seem to have a unique talent for setting folk off in this world. Well, he bit out, she hasn't attacked or tried to seduce me. Frankly, I'm content to leave it at that. Uncle, a faint tug on his hair pulled him back to the waking world. You're making a scary face. Why did we stop? Familiar red eyes framed by pale hair filled his vision as his charge dangled herself over him. Aren't we gonna see the ship? Right. He'd given Klee a piggyback ride. Evidently that wasn't enough, because she'd decided to perch herself atop his shoulders. Maybe he's spacing out again. Payman took the chance to flick closer in a whirl of starlight. Hello, anybody there? I'm still here, he sighed and nudged the girl back with his free hand. Relax, you know, I've not forgotten anything. Her smile was nothing short of smug. Then you remember the 3-course meal you promised Payman? Naruto knew had said no such thing, but he decided to humor her. A faint tug on his right arm took his attention elsewhere. Unfair. He looked down with a sigh. Did you say something, Shen? Rather than answer, the Adeptus disciple buried her head into his shoulder. Lisa cooed softly behind him. Adorable. Where did I put my camera? I need a picture of this. Why was she enabling them? Naruto blew out a sigh. Trapped. He was strapped and there was no way out but through. Shen hadn't released his arm or his hand for that matter since their return to the city proper, and it didn't look like she would be anytime soon. He could escape from her at any time, of course, but he had the strangest feeling doing so unprovoked would hurt her. At least they'd managed to patch up her outfit for now, thank the sage for small mercies. Creation of all things was a pretty handy technique. But all the power in the world couldn't save him from this predicament. If only Sasuke could see him now. He wasn't sure if his old friend would laugh at his plight, or simply scoff. Likely the latter. Sasuke seldom laughed, and only ever laughed in his darker moments. Wherever he was now, hopefully those emotions were long behind him. Now do you see, he could just imagine his old friend chiding him. This is what I had to deal with. Every day. As a body he'd been madly jealous of his rival. Indeed, back then he had craved the raw attention and adulation his Thenemesis attracted. Bastard seemed to get it just by existing. You know he'd wanted that, craved the affection he gained just by being him. He'd wanted folks to look at him, too. To see him, admire him, you know. But now he didn't know what to do with all this attention. Shen on one arm, Klee riding his shoulders, and Payman floating ahead of him, all while a bemused Lisa looked on. Honestly, if Razor hadn't run off to fetch the knights, he would have been here, too. Somehow, without even realizing it, he'd formed a nice little family, for himself on the outside looking in, it might well appear as such. While the bonds he'd forged weren't quite that, all this attention was a little much. He couldn't even begin to explain it. Payman had crashed into him, Lisa had come onto him, taking Razor and was a whim, and Cleewell, she'd declared him her uncle and that was that. He didn't rightly know what to make of Shen either. So long as she didn't make trouble he was content to let her have this moment, even if he didn't rightly know what this moment was. But he couldn't well ignore her, not when she was pouting like that. Best do something about that. You alright? You've been pretty quiet. The cran in training made a conflicted noise. For now, those bright, radiant eyes rose to meet his. I'm not sure if I'll lose control again. No worries. Naruto laughed. You won't? But what if I do? She glared at him. What if you're not around to stop me next time? All right, a fair question deserved a fair answer, he felt. Then you face those feelings head on, ask yourself why you feel them, and accept them. Shen went silent for a moment. And then, the day you learn how to use your strength for the good of others, is the day you can truly become part of human society. Naruto blinked, somewhat taken aback by the sudden philosophical turn. Pardon, she looked down. My master, she said that to me, once. Did she? Now he tapped her on the nose when she nodded. All right, let me add something to it. He tugged his hand from hers, ignored the displeased noise she made, and reached around to wrap it around her waist with infinite care. She stiffened for a moment, then relaxed and nuzzled closer, leaving them side by side as they walked. Listen to your heart, but don't ever let it control you. Maybe if he kept his chin up she wouldn't see him blushing like mad. Do what you think is right, you know. Shen sniffled, unwilling to look him in the eye. You sound like my master. He smiled at her. She sounds like a very wise woman. She scooted closer still, melting into him and leaning her head against his shoulder. Forced to change pace, Naruto slowed a little, but kept walking. This close, he became intimately aware of her presence and the faint scent of herbs. Warm. For someone who wielded a cryo-vision, Shen was so incredibly warm. When she looked up at him, he stiffened. Paimon seized the ship. The moment shattered like so much glass. Shen glared bloody red daggers at her, but the little fairy paid her no heed, already racing ahead. Klee all but leaped off his shoulders to race after her. There was again that surge of parental concern. Paimon was small, tiny, even. She might be learning to defend herself, but still. Well, she'd probably blast anyone who tried to hurt her. Still, that didn't mean he wanted to see her get hurt. Good girls. Must protect. Yeah, that about summed it up. Oi, he cried out after them, hastening his pace. Don't run off. In short order they reached the harbor. Naruto didn't have much experience in the realm of ships. He would be the first to admit it, of course. He knew which was the front, what was the back, and that was about it. He'd only ever been on the sea a handful of time in recent memory. One to the land of snow. Fond memories there. Hopefully Koyuki was still doing alright, and a few other miscellaneous missions that escaped him. Hell, he wasn't entirely surely how a ship got into the bay in the first place. Supposedly the waters of Mondstadt opened out into the ocean further north or some such. Who knew? It didn't change the fact that a ship had come in. Large and sleek, it rested against the dock, dwarfing all other vessels. A ramp had been flung down some time ago. One could see sailors swarming about it, unloading cargo and like. And there, just now coming down the ramp. Never quite get my land legs back after a long voyage. Shen stilled against him. That was his only warning. A woman clad in red and black disembarked the vessel at a languid pace, hips swaying, dark hair flowing in the breeze. She was confidence personified, uncaring of who saw her. She paused at the edge of the wharf, saw him and tilted her head, regarding his torn shirt and his scars. Her lone eye narrowed upon him, and he found himself thinking of a sea dragon he'd seen once. Even with one eye she was a beauty to behold. He could say that with full confidence now that he knew what true beauty was. Damn it, Lisa. Life had been so much simple when he was blind to such things. Speaking of which, children aside, why did every vision wielder look like a supermodel? It was a question that bore pondering. A question he didn't have time to answer, because the captain he could only assume such was upon him. There was no escape. Well, aren't you a sight for sore eyes? She planted a hand on her hip. See something you like? Naruto saw several things, but he kept his eyes firmly on her face. A blonde brow quirked. Can I help you? Shanna squirmed free of him and muttered something under her breath. It sounded more than a little like a curse. The captain followed her with a questioning look, only to earn a baleful one in return as she stormed past. Naruto watched her stalk away toward Paimon and Klee, shoulders tense, chin held high. In the end she thought better of staring her down, as did he, and turned her attention back to him. Nope. She smacked her lips with an audible pop. Just admiring the goods the way you were admiring my ship. Right. Goods. Ship. Naruto coughed into a fist. And you are Beidou, captain of the Crux. She extended a hand to him. Nice to meet you, Naruto. Without a second thought, he reached out to grasp her hand. Her fingers bit down against his immediately, testing his strength. Instinct demanded he return the gesture in kind. He found himself treated to a rare widening of her eye as his palm crushed against hers. And yet she didn't yelp in pain. He could have shattered every bone in her hand, and yet her smile didn't waver. Not in the least. Quite the grip you got there. Her tone took on a teasing edge. You good with your hands? Even he couldn't miss that. Color flooded his face as he released her hand, feeling positively scalded. Hey, relax, she swatted his shoulder. I'm just joking. Couldn't help myself. Was she? He wasn't so sure. Her emotions were like a storm-tossed sea, none of them negative. He couldn't even begin to discern what she felt. Behind him, Lisa hummed softly. Well, someone has a keen eye, and no shame at that. I think I might like you. Beidou balked, but only for a moment. Then she threw head back and laughed. Feelings mutual, she cast the magician an appraising grin. What's your name? Lisa made to respond, but her words were lost as another woman with long hair descended the ramp after Beidou. Naruto's jaw clicked open. His noses sang in his heart, sensing a long-lost friend. Right. Beidou was smiling for some reason, like she knew some grand secret. He wondered what it was. Almost forgot the reason I came here. I've got someone who wants to meet you. I do apologize for the untimely arrival. A new voice intoned, thrumming in a low contralto. Clad in a flowing amber robe, the newcomer was the very picture of stoicism. She was the same height as him, no, maybe a little taller at a stretch. Keen eyes met his, bright and alert, framed by a curtain of dark tresses so long as to nearly touch the dock itself. When she moved he glimpsed the pale expanse of a slender thigh beneath by the log. He hoped she was wearing something under that, yet every stride was measured, collected. There was something about her, something odd. It has been some time since I last set foot in Mondstadt. Those peerless orbs met his, sharp and alert, singling him out. And yet so much has changed in more ways than one. He didn't like the way she was looking at him. If Beidou was a predator, then this person was a force of nature. As if he stood in the shadow of a looming avalanche, like the very earth prepared were to throw itself against him if he said the wrong word. Well, if she wanted to fight, she wouldn't find him wanting. He found himself standing that much straighter, squaring his shoulders, lifting his chin to look her in the eye. In his peripherals he was vaguely aware of Lisa stepping forward to stand beside him. For the first time, he noticed the complete and utter absence of her signature smile. "The heck are you?" Morex Zhongli hummed softly. "Call me Moram," she coughed into her fist to hide the slip. "Maeve will do." She reached out, clasping his hands in hers. "Might I have a moment of your time?" Hey, Naruto's brow furrowed before he recovered. "Look, lady, I've had a really long day. Unless someone's in danger, whatever this," he waved a hand, I ain't in the mood for it." "I see." Her eyes flitted to his ruined clothes. "It seems I've come at a bad time. Tomorrow evening, then." It didn't sound like a question. Who on earth was this Maeve anyway? And why did he have a bad feeling about this? Felt nice to do other perspectives, the better to show how Teyvat is changing. This guy's Zhongli is a snake, Eki Zhongli, Beidou teases, and Shen is jealous. Kazu is around, you simply haven't seen him disembark yet. Viseria wants nothing to do with Naruto, Childa wants to fight him, Barbara is terrified of him, and Zhongli. What does Zhongli want, I wonder? Once more, the Ember's rule remains. If folks don't like this story, well, I'll not continue it. That's no joke, folks. I'm so busy these days, basically, I don't have time off. Not anymore. My free time is limited, and as such, I can't afford to focus on something folks don't like. Reviews keep me writing in these times, and keep the daily updates flowing. Silence only hurts. I hate having to beg for feedback, but without it, well, it feels like I'm not making an impact. Right then, as ever, reviews are love, reviews are life. Reviews keep me safe from any and all strife. So in the immortal words of Atlas, review, would you kindly? Every bit helps out. Some are very far out indeed. Hope you enjoy the taste of what's to come. Hold on to your hats. Morex drank deeply of the wine. It had been some time since such a disguise was required. Nevertheless, the part was well played. No one suspected a thing. So why was the blonde one staring so? Did you need something? Who are you, really? Aren't you just adorable? Can I keep you please? Ass. Galeko payment is not a toy. Nice to finally meet you, Lumine. Ever drank before? The ghost of a smile touched Naruto's mouth. Once. Good. Beidou all but purred the words. Then you won't mind a drinking game. In the background, Shen tilted her head and contemplated bloody murder. Her eating fork stabbed into the table. Maeve quirked a brow, but continued to sip at her wine. Klee touched a finger to her lips. Does this mean I have another auntie? Naruto toppled back with a wheeze even as Lisa giggled. She couldn't allow herself to die. Not yet. There was so much to live for. Maeve smiled. What say you to a wager? And just like that, all Lisa's joy turned to ash her mouth. And as far as I'm concerned, the things I deal with are far simpler than living the life of a traditional sister. Snickety-snick. Payman, what are you doing? SHHH payment can be useful, too, just watch. Why in blazes would I want to go to Liu? I'm told they make excellent what do you call it ramen. Naruto twitched. Just a little. I find myself sorely tempted. You're interrupting us. Please leave. Amber eyes flashed. I will. Have. Order. And the heavens answered. For what it's worth, I enjoyed the conversation. Now about the bill. A bead of sweat ran down Zhongli's brow. Yes, about that. Dilek twitched. So you're the one, then one is most amused. Naruto made a face. One thinks that one speaks most strangely. That only made the woman laugh harder. Do be kind to little Shen here, one might have to kill you. Pray, not for the gods, nor the betterment of others, but for yourself. Sorry, never been one for praying. Ouch, that's a mean kick you got there. Lady, aren't you supposed to be a nun? You want me to act like a nun? Fine. Viseria lunged at him. False god, die for your sacrilege. He danced back, fending her off with one hand. Never mind, don't act like a nun. For the last time, I'm not gonna fight you. I've fought enough people today, buzz off. Yes, that smile was still friendly, but now it had an edge to it. You will. He blurred. Naruto grabbed his spear, using it to slap away the offensive attack, pushed Payman out of harm's way, then stopped the second sword with his elbow. The impact rattled his arm, but he held firm, scowling even as it bit into his arm. Still clutching the spear in his offhand, he put both together in the perfect position to summon a shadow clone. A faint flicker of surprise was all he saw in his face before said clone swung. Did he relish the crack of bone that followed? Maybe. Just a little. His attacker stumbled back, clutching their ribs. So you've got some skill after all. Then he raced back in. How did you acquire that gnosis? What will you use it for? Good, evil? That is the answer I wish to know. I would have your answer. Offer and accord. Angel's Share was a fine place for a drink. Refined yet rustic, it hosted a wide variety of wine and liquor, many of which they were all too happy to partake of. That said, Naruto still wasn't sure why he'd come, much less accepted Maeve's invitation tonight. He and his party, sans Payman and the kids, who'd fled upstairs the moment bottles appeared, found themselves seated across the enigmatic Maeve and her associate. Was that Beidou's purpose here? Semantics, he supposed. Regardless, the captain was here now and didn't seem keen on leaving. Quite the contrary, if anything, she still seemed inordinately pleased with herself for reasons he didn't understand. Shen scooted a little closer to him, hip brushing his under the table. Naruto shivered, and not at all in a bad way. Ignore it. She's just being friendly. Lisa less so on his left. Her free hand traced his thigh and gave it a comforting squeeze. Friendly. Sure. Right. He coughed to stave off an impending lust attack. So, the reason you wanted to meet. All in good time. Maeve smiled and sipped at her wine. First, let us thank the proprietor for letting us use your venue. Diluc muttered something less than pleasant under his breath, but prepared another bottle for them nevertheless. Naruto winced his way. Seemed a decent fellow, that one. At least he wasn't falling over himself to worship him like all the rest. Good to see a sensible sort in this crazy city. Just how much money had Maeve thrown at this man, or did she have something else over his head? Of course, Beidou wasn't about to leave him be. Ever drank before? The ghost of a smile touched Naruto's mouth. Once. Good. She leaned across the table, all but purring the words. She'd been drinking this entire time, the absolute lush. Then you won't mind a drinking game while we wait for our friend. In the background, Shen tilted her head and contemplated bloody murder. Her eating fork stabbed into the table. Maeve quirked a brow, but continued to indulge herself. This is no osmanthus wine, but it is a fine blend nonetheless. Now, then. Wakely leaned down over the railing from the second floor, touching a finger to her lips. If you're playing a game, then does this mean I have another auntie? Naruto toppled back with a wheeze even as Lisa giggled. Maeve merely smiled. Such a lively young girl. I quite like her. What say you to an additional wager? And just like that, all Naruto's embarrassment turned to ash in his mouth. What kind of wager we talking about? He dragged himself back up to the table with a snarl. You trying to distract me? Perish the thought. I merely see no need to waste good wine with sour talk. Much to his chagrin, she remained unreadable as ever. Beidou, at least, he could get a beat on. Easily, at that. She was in this for the laughs, some amusement, maybe a good time. Maeve, though, who was she, that she could mask her emotion or intentions from him so thoroughly? I like the way you think. Naruto sighed. Beidou, you're drunk. Clearly not enough. She winked. There's still only one of you. Heat hit his ears. That could mean so many things, more so when shadow clones were involved. Lisa touched a finger to her lips. Now there's a thought. Shen blinked. Whatever is a shadow clone? Where not think this conversation? Beidou flashed him a cheeky grin, snatched the bottle from the table and slammed it to her lips. Her good eye drooped in half-lidded bliss as she drank deeply and kept drinking. When Naruto made to speak, she held up a hand, forestalling him. Just how much tolerance did this woman have? She'd give Tsunade a run for her money. She slammed it down with a pleased purr. That's much better. Actually felt the burn on that one. Shen clenched her teeth hard enough to spit sparks. Naruto could then grinding from here, already feel her emotions spiraling down. A quick pat on the head put paid to that, but not in the way he would have liked. Rather than decompress, she latched on. Latched hard. Firm fingers clamped down onto his arm and her head kissed her shoulder. Was she clinging to him? He would have found it adorable if she wasn't brimming with killing intent towards Beidou. Lisa, of course, cooed happily at the sight, unflappable as ever. Naruto felt his shoulders slump. He knew where this was going. This is going to be a long night, ain't it? But before we begin, a question. Maeve set her wine down. I would ask you. Eyes of spun gold met perplexed blue. One force unto another. What do you intend with that gnosis? Naruto's blood ran cold. What? Cut. So our boy is tempted when Maeve Morax makes their move. Time will tell if he'll keep the disguise or just cut off a piece of himself to remain as Maeve. Someone asked about that, if I recall. I wish this could have been longer, but so many were complaining, and I wanted to silence the critics. Next chapter will be thrice the length, at least. Once more, the Ember's rule remains. If folks don't like this story, well, I'll not continue it. That's no joke, folks. I'm so busy these days, basically, I don't have time off. Not anymore. My free time is limited, and as such, I can't afford to focus on something folks don't like. Reviews keep me writing in these times, and keep the daily updates flowing. Silence only hurts. I hate having to beg for feedback, but without it, well, it feels like I'm not making an impact. Right then, as ever, reviews are love, reviews are life. Reviews keep me safe from any and all strife. So in the immortal words of Atlas, review, would you kindly? Every bit helps out. Some are very far out indeed. Hope you enjoy the taste of what's to come. Hold on to your hats. Parry, is that all you can do? I came here for a fight. Clenched knuckles barreled up, trailing golden light. The world became stars. Ooh, the ground felt pretty soft. That answer your question? Come on, get up. I'm gonna take out all my frustration on you. Rosaria barred his path. Answer my question and I'll let you go. What would that be? Are you a threat to Mondstadt? Something ancient stirred in his eyes. SH, dear girl, it almost sounded like something were speaking through him. If we were, you wouldn't be able to stop us. Now, move. Kid's tired. In the end, his savior came from an unlikely source. He was so annoying, Master Diluc. A little blonde girl. Naruto held back a chuckle. The poor redhead cast him a long-suffering look as the little blonde continued to rail at him. Something told him this was a common occurrence. Help me. Nope. He held up a hand. You're on your own. Aren't you just adorable? Can I keep you, please? Ass. Galeko payment is not a toy. Nice to finally meet you, Lumine. He woke up in a bed. Offer the love off, not again. This time, both his arms were trapped by two people. Please don't be Maeve. Please don't be Maeve, for the love of the log. Well, what say you? A bargain. What do you intend to do with that gnosis? Naruto's blood ran cold. What? All around him the world slowed as his mind speed up, racing. Kurama understood the danger as well, his stomach burning dimly as whatever liquor that lay in his system smolder away, giving him his full wits and then some. She knew about his gnosis, how only Payman was aware of it. The knights had the faintest semblance of an understanding. With her recap of the matter to the knights, Payman had charmingly referred to it as a doohickey. He thought as good of them as to believe that they didn't think that to be the actual name, but all the same, they were not aware of its true name. And after the blowout between them, Naruto did not stay long enough to feed them such detail. Maeve smiled at him, betraying nothing. If she was knowledgeable enough to know about his ventisno, his gnosis, then she was as dangerous as he thought her to at first be. But what did she want? Did she have some issue with the gods, an issue with Venti Barbado's issues with those parading as gods, which he wasn't trying to do, mind you, but still. She bears one. He blinked, somewhat taken aback. Bears what? A gnosis. Lovely. She does. How do you know? I sense it, just as our gnosis senses it. I can feel it calling out to her. His mind leaped to a particularly unpleasant conclusions. Wait. She's a god. Or a god hunter ... or maybe she's like us, ladled with holding on to it. Kurama paused for a moment, perhaps deliberating over the issue himself. Don't be rash here, Naruto. We'll survive her, but the others may not. Blast. The others. He'd almost forgotten. He took to his left, where Shen clung to his arm. She looked about as ready to bail as he. Seeing to his right, he saw Lisa, who seemed curious, yet alert. Quick to note his stare, she gave his thigh a gentle squeeze under the table, message clear. She deferred to him. If he fled, she'd follow. If he fought, she'd follow still. Across the table sat Beidou, who seemed more interested in her bottle of liquor. Maeve brought her along, but certainly hadn't informed her of as much as Naruto first thought. She seemed innocent of this all. The most innocent of them all lay above them, Payman, Razor, Klee. Their guiltless laughter rang in his ears, louder as the alarms ringing in his mind. This was a trap. It made sense now, that she would allow him to bring as many people as he'd will. That she held their discussions be in the heart of Mondstadt. That she chose a place tended by a man that held no love for any Archon of an emo. This bar was a pretty cage where he could not fight as he'd best choose. But Shesh could slaughter at her will, should he not abide. He wanted to growl something cruel, and more than a bit crude. A darker part of him wanted to reach across the table and, don't. Kurama's warning rooted him, and the fox was right to do so. He could go feral, be like the coyote that snapped wildly, gnawing off its leg to chance freedom. But he was not the one in danger here. He was the only one not in danger. His eyes flashed towards Maeve, colder, harsher now. She remained unvexed, tranquil, steady. Well, what say you? She repeated the question again as if he hadn't heard her the first time. What do you intend with that gnosis? His brow furrowed. Who are you? I believe I asked a question first. Her smile didn't waver in the least. I'd see an answer to it, and, in redress, I'll give the answer you seek. She handled him as if they were making a deal. Like she hadn't sauntered in and threatened to uproot his newfound life, as if she was not at threat of being slain for his greater good. But if that was how she wished to play it, then so be it. If she wanted to negotiate, then he'd follow along. Should we be having this discussion here? He planted one arm on the table and leaned forward. Now perhaps the two of us could find a nice alcove to the coast that came out too close as a growl. Or so Kurama thought. If the shock of energy sent coursing painfully through his body was indicative of as much. I am fine here, thank you for the offer though. The smirk Maeve gave was too coy. It gave her face a punchable quality. The walls are thin and the people chatty. Naruto gestured over to Dilek and the drunken adventurers he was showing a table to. Whatever Maeve did to get Dilek's favor, it was enough to get the bar cleared out. Not enough to stop new arrivals. Her smile proved decidedly limpid in its sincerity. You of all should know, this conversation will only be for those you'd wish to hear. Whatcha mean by that? Did she intend to kill anyone that so tried to eavesdrop? Sound is carried on the wind after all. She moved quickly to clarify. Oh, he paused, looking deep into himself. Grabbing a hold of his gnosis, he tugged and the wind responded. Air picked up in the vicinity much more than would be possible in a place where windows were shut so snugly. You needn't try so hard. Maeve's voice broke above the winds. Would Naruto stopped cold, now noticing how frightened patrons had eyes on him, noticing how Dilek had a glare pressed towards their general direction. In the end his savior came from an unlikely source. A little blonde girl slammed her glass down on the counter behind the redhead. He was so annoying. Master Dilek, hey, are you paying attention to me? I wasn't finished. With a long-suffering sigh, he turned to face her. Blue mine, please, I think you've had enough. No, she kicked at his shin from her stool. I'm not done. Naruto held back a chuckle. The poor redhead cast him a long-suffering look as the little blonde continued to rail at him. He noted her flushed cheeks and half-empty glass. Lightweight, much something told him this wasn't an uncommon occurrence. Help me. Nope. He held up a hand to stall him. You're on your own. Have fun with little Miss Tipsy. Little Miss who now? Payman made the mistake of floating their way just then. The blonde girl's eyes flashed. It was her only warning. Poor Payman. She never saw her coming. Aren't you just adorable? Can I keep you, please? Ass. Daleko Payman is not a toyee. Meh, she'd survive. With the wind gone and their host distracted, Maeve's voice quieted as she spoke her next words. The gnosis is not a mere tool, nor is it shy. It's a part of you for now. He didn't much like the way she tagged on the for now, but bade to allow her to continue her talk. It's an extension of you, much the way a muscle is. But as long as you view it as apart from you, as long as you force it, you will only get such wild results. It pained him to agree, but he saw reason, so he followed her calling. Calming himself, he drew into himself and welcomed the gnosis deeper within. He felt it sing, as if in celebrating finally being allowed to belong. He smiled the smallest of smiles. He didn't know why, but the Gnosis joy felt as his. But with a better hold, he tried his hand. First, outwards, he called forth noise far beyond his ear's reach. We shouldn't play this too reckless. His presence could help turn the tide with our Fatui dealings. Jean, spoken from her office in the headquarters of the Knights of Favonius. Fair play will let Lisa have her way, though I get the strangest suspicion she's doing as she will beyond the Order's best interest. Tia, so they still schemed on him beyond his wishes. I do hope Lord Barbados takes kindly to this renewed effigy. A discussion amongst nuns off towards the way of the cathedral. He didn't like the sound of what they were planning. Midnight phantasmagoria, the battle cry of a warrioress, fighting hilichurls far to the south of Mondstadt, accompanied by what sounded like sparks of lightning. Stupid Archon. That declaration was two-toned, one coming like a whisper from their scarlet tender beyond the bar, the other from just outside, by a window sill on their left. Why did he get the feeling that it was the same nun that trailed him so? Next, he tried to do the inverse, stopping noise in its approach. Hey, Beidou, what do you do to see my shirt gone? Indecent. Shen pinched his hand hard. But he weathered it and would weather the bruise to form as he focused on the hard-edged brunette. The Crux captain's lone eye went wide as the bottle slipped from her lips. She rambled on, likely something explicit, but they would never know as no sound made it to them. You're learning, well done. Maeve gave him a smile that crushed his good mirth. Her praise felt like venom in his veins. But with the games over, he focused on his actual task. The sphere to make their talk soundproof formed up around them, thereby ensuring that their talk could remain private. Weren't you looking for an excuse to take this away? Damn it, why'd you let me go through all that? I'm busy enough between trying to hold you back from making this a conflict and preparing the energies for when you do. Where's the faith? You'd not wish to be a god. Remember. Shut up. Naruto turned back to Maeve, who continued to wait for him. She got what she wanted, so she could be as patient as she wished. Where were we? Our discussion was moving towards your gnosis. Naruto sighed. This woman was relentless. Why is it that you care? You continue to ask questions before answering my own. Here at last, her smile thinned. If you want an answer, then be so willing as to grant me mine first. Why you find he flung up an arm, thumping the table. It didn't make a sound. Strange. I don't know what to do with this thing. A bit of energy rushed to his eyes regardless. Had he a mirror handy, he would have seen them a bright green. In case you haven't noticed, I'm not this place's Archon. Venti Barbados, whatever you'd call him. I'm not him. Maeve's head bobbed in a nod. I'm well aware. You are. Naruto felt overjoyed. Finally someone that believed him when he said he was just some guy. Not just humoring his denial as Payman and Lisa did. And not someone that just didn't care about Archons, as with Diluc. He could almost forget his growing disdain for this woman. I am, she clarified, and yet here you are, holding his gnosis. Why? He could almost forget. Not by choice. Cheeky little bastard gave me this gnosis, shoved it into me to keep it safe. Ran off before I could slam it back in him the hard way. I want to chase him down and have him take it, but I can't begin to figure where I'd find him. There's a part of me, a small part, that wants to keep it though. I'm as strong as needed without it. He clenched his fist. But this is a new type of power. The powers that the gnosis offered him didn't make him any stronger than he was before, not yet at least. But it offered a new paradigm, expanded his toolbox, gave him options that Futon alone could not account for. She tilted her head, a strand of dark hair falling across an amber eye. Do you find it addictive? Nope, he scoffed. The moment I see Barbados Venti, he'll take back up this yoke. Its burdens outweigh the perks. Well, no, she frowned. Pardon, nope, he repeated, taking some petty pride in the scowl that followed. An answer for an answer, remember. Very well. Maeve took the jab in stride and folded both hands in her lap. You'd wish to know who I am? No. As your mind shifted so suddenly, the gnosis of Anemo suits you. Enough of that. Naruto growled and earned himself another shock of energy to rattle his bones. I'll frame my question better, so you don't try to evade. Her smile was sly again. Projecting, perhaps. Naruto took that on the chin, not to be distracted. He drove his inquiry home. Why do you care about my gnosis when you have one for yourself, Miss Archon? Maeve bristled. For all she was, for as calm and in control as she tried to be, she bristled. Everyone else present was just as shocked. Lisa was agape, likely thinking to be in the presence of two Archons. Darn her for not getting it through that cute head of hers that he didn't count as one. Beidou was speechless, and not due to his gnosis doing. She actually put the bottle down proper, turning to Maeve with an accusing wag of her finger. Shen was perhaps the weirdest in her reaction, balancing between keeping a hold of him and going into a bow, saying something about Rex Lapis. What was he to do with these women? Am I projecting now? Still he felt triumphant, getting one over on this woman, at least. You are. Maeve leaned in, resting a hand on her chin. I would have revealed as much without you altering the question. Bullshit. Believe as you will. Maeve reclined once more, back pressed to her chair. But I'm in a similar boat to you. Unlikely, but he gave her bait a tug. Enlighten me. I am a vessel for an Archon's gnosis. She held up one hand, revealing a faint, if dusty glow across her fingers. Although I was granted it only for the purpose of meeting you. It'll be back with Rex Lapis the moment I'm back in Liu territories. Why, I am normally meant to stay by my Archon's Rex Lapis side. Even the other Adepti might not be aware of me. Shen spoke up suddenly, speaking out in swift motion, using words too esoteric for him to care to grasp or remember. Maeve returned in kind, smoothly responding with a phrase all her own just as mind-numbing. It seemed to edge Shen on to say more. She snapped something, and Maeve again returned to her reply. Shen pressed, and so Maeve humored. This went on for what felt to be too long before Shen nodded at last. Indeed, she is an adeptus. That calmed Naruto a bit. He didn't know much more about the adepti, only what he could glimpse from Shen's meager explanations the night prior. But he was made aware enough that the adepti served Rex Lapis, whose letter Shen had delivered. This guy is thorough, sending so many people to forewarn his arrival. He tried to sound casual, knowing that those of Liu might be just as fanatical about Rex Lapis as Mondstadtians were for Barbados. But he did not bother to veil his frown. This Rex Lapis felt more and more like a man-god that thought too highly of himself. If he wished to talk, then step forth already, although he would grant him so thanks for introducing him to Shen. Neva not so much. That is what I have been trying to say. That your Rex Lapis. Lisa slipped that with flawless grace, the smooth criminal that she was. Maeve took the remark in stride. As much as he is Barbados. So you are, Lisa chirped happily. Hey, Naruto bit out, but the woman gave him a look, as knowing as it was sultry. Yet she knew nothing at all. He would have a word more to the woman but thought better of it. He'd not be distracted, so he cut his losses and turned back to Maeve. Carry on. Thank you. Maeve gave him a smile that felt genuine for the first time, happy to have the focus once more. I've been sent by Rex Lapis as his proxy. He's grown weary in his age and with the right of dissension and fast approach, felt it best to leave this matter in my able hands. Should things go well here, he'd see you for drinks in Liu. Was it weary or paranoid, but it was all fine to him. The longer he could stay from the side of a god, the better. And he thinks you able to deal with me. He'd hope that I not have to find out. Long lash fluttered in a slow blink. Despite what you believe, I have never intended any harm at any point, yesterday or now, nor do I wish for conflict. You have a funny way of showing it. Despite his callous remark, Naruto found his shoulders slumping, just a touch. His guard still held high, but he allowed himself to recline in his seat. Lisa fell back with him, her ease going the way of his, much to Shen's naked displeasure. All the same, he gave me his gnosis. Maeve hastened on, seeing no need for it on high and thinking that it would validate my authority as his hand. So what now? Now I'd ask for your gnosis. And all pretenses were gone. Skyward spine shocked to life behind him and he readied to grasp it. Lisa's spell book was afloat before her and Shen's spear was already pointing, not at him but Maeve. It warmed his heart that she'd side with him, but wouldn't that cause her problems? Beidou for her part bared forth a bottle, a grin that could split steel on her face as she chugged away. Finally, some entertainment. But to all this, Maeve raised a steady hand. Please allow me to explain. Be quick about it, he growled, and he received no shock from Kurama. Instead, his old friend growled with him as well, as did his gnosis. They were all on board for murder. You said it yourself. For all the fury facing her, Maeve didn't flinch. That you are holding on to that gnosis only for the sake of Barbados. Yeah, he bit out, so you've no right to it. And of the Archon, Rex Lapis and Barbados are noted for their closeness. That's true, Lisa hummed, drawing a black look from him. Of the Archon, Lord Barbados has had conflicts with many, but Rex Lapis and the Raiden Shogun have been said to be close confidants of his in the past. Though I'm not sure how he'd react to the Shogun's sudden shift, but of Rex Lapis I think that's the closest friend that anyone could name for our Archon. What's that to do with anything? He'd sent that for Maeve, but Lisa seemed to frown at his dismissal. He'd make to apology later. It means that in lieu of being able to find Barbados, entrusting it to Rex Lapis might be the next best bid. Maeve's assurance did little to cool his anger. He'd hold it safe until it may return to the proper hands. And if I want to hold it until I can see it to Barbados, then you'll suffer the consequences. Maeve leaned back, not because of some supposedly vicious barb, but because the spearhead of Shen's calamity queller was all but in her throat. Golden eyes flicked to it. How unfortunate. It would seem that you continue to misconstrue my words. No, it would seem that you're just bad at using them. Lisa's quip was so dry that Naruto thought to offer her a drink if Beidou hadn't drunk at all. But the buxom seafarer was off to the bar for another bottle, only after realizing that Dilla could not hear them from here. What are these consequences you're on about? Naruto asked as he rubbed at the small of Shen's back. He appreciated her loyalty, really he did, but if she took the life of an adeptus she'd no longer be welcome to Mondstadt and likely be wanted in the wrong way in Liu. She calmed at his ministrations, her spear vanishing to the ether. Maeve made a noise caught somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. The gnosis has many purposes, too many to name, but one such is that it makes lesser gods more, makes them into archons. She held out a hand, conjuring an image of a shining figure in her palm, resplendent with great golden light. It's subtle in its beginning, but the longer it remains the more permanent the hold takes. Before long only a fellow archon will be able to undo what is done. Barbados's hand may not be enough. That was a sobering reality, and it needn't Kurama's melding to come across. Oi, I'm no god, he began, but Maeve merely shook her head in stoic disagreement. I mean not to lay claims at what you are, but a gnosis cannot be tossed around flagrantly. Her fist closed around the figure she'd conjured, crushing it. Its might burns away at those unworthy and unprepared. Only a god of sufficient might could hope to house it, yet more call upon its ability with such ease as you've displayed time and again. Not even the Allogenes could not hope to bear. Allow it no. Demigods, Kurama supplied. Wanna run that by me again, furball? That term she used it refers to those of divine, yet mortal birthing. I'd dumb it down to demigods for you. Apologies. They've offered, not aware of the conversation Naruto already held. I suppose more common term is vision wielder. Mic drop. Hush, and how do you know what an allowance it is? I've existed for 1,000 years and actually listen when wise men speak. Take a guess how'd I know? Right. As one of his closest friends, confidant, and fellow shittalker Naruto could forget that Kurama was old enough to be a grandfather many times over ere if he had been a human at least. Though the context here about the allogene vision wielders gave him more of an impression of this world. In the people's eyes, those that wielded visions were already demigods, so of course, someone that could trump their demigods in scale would have to be the authentic article, a proper god. It all, allogene Lisa hummed. What a pretty term, the first time hearing of it though. Naruto deflated. Never mind, it still didn't make a lick of sense. You'd have to believe me, his grunt was full of defeat, yet he persisted. I'm no god. Perhaps not before, but the Gnosis has a way of changing matters. Maeve eyed him with no contempt or expectation, but with a gaze full of curiosity regarding him the way that a caring adult would spy on a child as they carry out their whims. In the way he'd watch over Klee or Razor or Paimon. Naruto missed when she'd try to be more impossible to read. The more they talked, the more she showed herself and the more Naruto found himself wishing to be rid of her. Do tell me, what does godhood mean to you? This opportunity is quite hard to come by. Morax did not much enjoy it when her own machination came into play against her. Tartaglia was to be her wild card, a chaotic force that would put a challenge to the fledgling Anemo Archon. One that would call Naruto to action, not because she so explicitly willed it, but because battling and pursuing strong enemies was the only way Childa knew to live. This was why Maeve allowed for such a tag-along. Had she known that the new Archon already faced his own form of challenge, she would have left the Harbinger to continue his Tsaritsa's will in Liu. Naruto was a peculiarity, an outlander for what could he be except thus that held his own preconceived notions of what it meant to be God. And in the face of those beliefs, he vehemently, categorically refused to take on the title, even as the Gnosis inside him called him more and more to uphold the new rank bequeathed to him by Barbatos' doing. She had no belief that Barbatos would take the Gnosis up again. She and the former Anemo Archon were indeed close, birthed from the fact that he too was a reluctant Archon. In the 2,000 years that the installed Archon of Mondstadt had been called to serve, he spent just as much time traveling and in slumber as he had watching over the City of Freedom. No, rather, it had been more. Many of those years were spent in Liu, for amongst the 7, she'd been the one most likely to suffer Barbatos' company. Makoto Beelzebub had also been swift friends to the Lord of Anemo, when she lived, rest her soul. Wabal the Shy Mouse had closed herself to all of them after the cataclysm. Had Morax and Barbatos not been in their own mourning for Beelzebub and more perhaps they could have stopped her from her self-imposed isolation. All this to say, she was well aware that Barbatos would remain a former Archon lest Naruto proved to be truly incompatible with the duties within. Say as you would, but Venti a new name for him to take was someone that would not allow Mondstadt to fall to ruin, but as long as it thrived without his aid. He'd pass on the torch of protector to any taker, to Devalen, to Andreas, to Venessa and her knights, and now to Naruto. Rather, if Naruto would prove as valiant of a protector of those last pulled into the role was yet to be seen. But for now, she'd aid in stopping him from committing murder. Were you supposed to be? Naruto shot the question as Childa was already upon them, sauntering into the bar. The Harbinger of the Fadui's eyes cut across each of them, taking them all in quick order, his eyes lingering on her for too long, before settling on Naruto. And the spear that swayed too close to the blonde to be anyone else's. No vision? Tartaglia asked as the boy pulled his spear back into the ether, not taking kindly to how Childa's eyes beheld it. I have no need for it. Naruto put it as simply as that, not caring to elaborate, yet that seemed to only interest Childa more so. Conjuring a weapon without a vision, that's a bit unheard of, don't you think, my friend? I'm special, a regular all oddball. Got a problem with that? Nothing of the sort. Childa laughed a hollow laugh. A dangerous laugh. The odd ones are the best after all and considered to be the same in my homeland. Perhaps we could compare oddities. Naruto leaned away from the Harbinger, whilst little Shen seemed to take affront to Childa's yearning, grasping at Naruto's arm and casting at glare youngest Harbinger. Maeve found the whole show an amusement hadn't had such since taking this form. Young Tartaglia's battle lust could be taken as a lust of a different sort to the uninitiate, which seemed to be what was occurring at this moment. Who are you? The question was asked again by said blonde, now more incredulously. A business associate. Maeve chose then to step in, for the sake of the Archon and the Harbinger both. Oil and a match these boys were, and without someone to step between them, the results would be as you'd expect them to be. He's the moneybags that funded this trip. Beidou tagged on, plunking down onto the bench. But don't get the wrong idea. We're not with him. The dauntless captain of the Crux fleet felt no allegiance to the Fadui and chose now to make that known. I would have cast him overboard a few times if it didn't mean I'd have to return the deposit. Beidou really wished for her distaste to be known here. And here I thought we'd formed a bond, Captain. Childa's was only hurt so much as to be theatrical about it. The Harbinger knew better than to think that anyone in this part of the world would accept his ilk. And you, his eyes returned to her for the first time since coming to bother their little group. I do believe this is the first we've met. Nonsense, I was certain that Zhongli made introductions between us before now. Childa did not look to buy it but shrugged regardless of that. Maybe he did, that geezer rambles on for eons, so maybe you popped in once I stopped listening. Cheeky brat. But if you're with him, then maybe you've seen him. I've not caught wind of him since the first leg of our travels. I'm afraid that he's fallen ill. The seas are not his friend, so he'd taken to the deeps of the Alker to rest. Maybe I should visit him then. The Harbinger eyes warned of being onto something. Maeve had no fear of him actually figuring out what he thought he might know. Beta would sooner have the man's head than allow him to take a free purchase of the Alker's innards. Worse to worse, she really did have the body of Zhongli and wait in the Alker's depths. Maeve, Zhongli, Rex Lappy's Maeve was not lying when she called herself a vessel for a god's gnosis. A deity that was more X was an amorphous one as all Archon were. The vessels that they took on were only for the convenience of interacting with mortals. All of them favored to impose their consciousness one vessel at a time as she, he, or it depending on the vessel's criteria, but managing two vessels was not beyond the might of Morax. They chose to become Maeve for this venture, so as to have a fresh slate in her dealings with Naruto. But calling Zhongli to order to placate Childa's whims if only momentarily was within their wheelhouse of options. But for now, she would stay as Maeve, and as Maeve, she'd say, he'd welcome some osmanthus wine to bring on some comfort. Perhaps you'd fetch me a flask while you're at it. A delicacy to Liu and Mondstadt. His eyes sparked. It would have been better to bring that along instead. No. She smiled. Are the funds of the Fatui too shallow to deal with such a matter? An appeal to pride was all it took to drag Childa away from further questioning. I'll see the barkeep about any imports that might have been made. And off he was, unknowingly slipping from the bounds of their sphere of privacy to speak with Dilek on a drink that Mondstadt proper did not hold. She'd know. She spent the night prior trying for a proprietor who'd grant a cask to them so as to keep her own reserves stashed. It had cost Childa a pretty penny and a trip to the deep cellars of Dawn Winery to find it if Dilek would wish to part with them at all. Associating with the Fatui, Lisa let her voice be heard. I thought better of the Adepti. Rex Lapis does not offer more freely, even to his own underlings. At truth, she saw currency as a means to endow value to contracts. That value would deflate if she tossed coin at her every whim or the whims of her Adepti. So the Fatui can find value in Liu just as they do with the Order of Favonius. That jab was a needed one, lest the Electro Witch not notice the hypocrisy of condemning them for a shared ally. Is it wise to carry on this talk with him present? Shen's question was rhetoric. All discussion of Archons and the obligations of God of a divinite oblige would end here for today. We can talk more of this later. An alcove to the coast. Naruto's offer was one that Maeve might humor another time, but for now, she gave it only the lightest of acknowledgments. For now, let's see to drinks to edge off our earlier dealings. Here, Beidou was off to grab more booze, moving with gusto, shoving a bartering Childa to the side. You really are a sly one, you know. Naruto beheld her in a different way now, bright blue eyes intent upon her own. Cheeky boy, I truly mean no harm. My only desire is to carry out the will of my lord Rex Lapis, to ensure the lands of a dear friend are in good hands. I don't claim this place as mine. He touched a hand to his chest, which pulsed with green light for a moment before stilling. Then he's gonna take his place back even if I have to drag him kicking and screaming. His words aside, Naruto seemed calmer now. At peace perhaps, to know that it was not her desire to force his hand here and now. I'll show that tone-deaf bard what for. Tone-deaf bard Maeve bit her lip to hide a smile. We'll take about that future and what aid I might offer in it, once properly free of the Fatui scion. Still on about that, Beidou returned to them arms filled with bottles and mugs. Her constant visits to Dilek seemed to have worn at the pyro user enough for him to just offer the bar or a good portion of its inventory to the eye-patched woman. I've come here to drink and I'd have it we'd do that. She poured up 2 tall pints and offered one to Naruto. The latter leaned back, eyeing it evilly. What's this for? She grinned. Our drinking game, obviously. Lisa made a pleased noise and nudged him with an elbow. Right, forgot about that. Naruto turned to Maeve with a sigh. Still want to put up a wager? Maeve hummed. I'll leave that to my colleague. She rounded on Beidou. The already drunk brunette grinned with much glee and mischief. Shen felt all warm and fuzzy inside, and it was completely at the fault of the wine. Yup, all the wine's fault. As the disciple to the Adeptus that most exemplified wisdom and knowledge, liquors had always been a curiosity for which she'd ever been only granted limited interaction. Half a glass of osmanthus wine on exceptional occasions was the most she was allowed within Cloud Retainer's purview. Alcohol rotted the mind, dulled the senses, distorted the soul, and all that. But, oh boy did it take the edge off. And Shen had a lot of edges that needed to be smoothed, to be soothed. The new additions, the hopefully temporary additions to her Naruto's entourage were people whom she could not find peace with. With the Fatui, she dealt with them enough to have an unkind opinion. They trespassed on sacred grounds without care and had met her spear for such transgression. They were like bugs. The moment she squashed one group, another will have taken their place by the next day. Their constant annoyance had impressed her with the idea that their only use was as impromptu compost, feeding the earth where she buried them. So as one of their leaders, that Harbinger boy was outside of her good graces to start. Then there was Maeve. She grilled her, honestly, rushing to the depths of her mind to dredge up riddles and rhymes that only the most stalwart of Adepti would have a response for. Maeve met her with practiced ease. If she was not an Adeptus, then she was a trusted friend of the Adepti at the least. That didn't mean Shen trusted her. Not in the least. For as many truths as Maeve revealed about herself and her reasons for coming, she kept much more silent than Shen could ever abide by. By the end, Naruto had formed a tentative camaraderie with her, but not even a big heart that he was granted her the same level of kindness he did with practically anyone else. That was enough for Shen to be willing to strike her down the moment Naruto decided that she must be dealt with. The Adepti be damned. Rex Lappies be damned. And Beidoubt worst of them all. A blowhard drunkard more focused on the bottle than any other matters at hand. Naruto seemed to actually like this one, so Shen hated her all the more. Even now the wretch eyed him with the foulest type of intent. Shen wanted her head for it, and she'd have it if Naruto wasn't so eager to stop her more murder-happy tendencies. She'd been invited to force to that woman's ship to finish the night of drinking. It was a part of the wager. Should Beidoubt have won, they'd leave the bar for the captain's cabin. The results of the duel, or more so how they came to them, were enough to make her blood boil and spear come to bear, but again, Naruto stopped her. He seemed intent to keep his promise of quelling her violence, and she didn't know how to feel about that. There were some people that just deserved death, weren't there? The whole of everything saw to it that she had polished off a bottle of sweet wine of Valberry mixture on her own. After which, Naruto thought that she should walk it off, so she was accompanied by a shadow clone, a perfect doppelganger of her Naruto, as he saw the children home. For an imitation, the Bunshin wasn't a pale one. She'd be confused as to who was whom, hadn't she not seen it appear in a puff of smoke. The walk did ease her. First, all the way out to Wolvendom to see Naruto's wolf child to his hut. Then to Lisa's apartment to see Naruto's fairy child to bed. Now only his fire child remained, and that saw them towards the innermost parts of Mondstadt. She hoped to find a seat soon. All the walking was starting to get to her, but more so she worried about what became of Naruto without her to safeguard him. Hey, she perked up as his voice called to her. She looked to see that his clone was staring at her, having stopped in his tracks. His fire child stared as well, hand in his, bouncing at her heels animatedly. What's it? She drawled in a manner that she did not enjoy, snapping at her brain to kickstart and make right the words she uttered. How unseemly. You okay? He seemed properly concerned now, which concerned her in turn. Why, she'd meant to say something like I'm fine, why are you asking? But some of her words failed her and others came out much too slow. Just that you've been quiet since we've left the bar is all. Naruto grasped her hand then, willing her forward as he and his fire child kept towards where they were going. Thinking. She gave up on proper sentences. A sage nod came from him then. He remained quiet then for a block or more before speaking again. You shouldn't worry. Why? Boss, we were not to be trifled with. He waved a hand, flailing for words before finding them. A goddess, or that's what everyone called her. She tried to screw with us. She suffered for it. Sealed her right up into the moon. I tell you, he grinned at her, pleased with his blasphemous deed, and she was, in turn, happy for him. She ruled all and could make and unmake time-space on a whim. Archons, well, with them ruling only one land and needing aid at Thathier small by comparison. Issy Shen didn't really. Her addled mind wasn't so good at connecting dots right now. What I mean to say, he pulled her in close, arm looping at her waist. She pressed herself into him, finding comfort in the hold. Is that I'll follow my own beat, not theirs. They won't make me do anything I don't want to. And I'll not go anywhere I don't want to, and even if I did leave Mondstadt, you're welcome to come. Her heart fluttered as it hadn't since she was a girl. I am. Yep, he beamed, heedless of her racing pulse as they stumbled along. You can stay by my side as long as you want to, anywhere I go, in any way you want to. She looked up at him. Anyway, Naruto gave her a determined nod that had her head spinning, thoughts emerging that she'd not at all be adverse to. They arrived at the spot while she was stuck in thought. Albedo, Naruto's fire child, rushed to the side of this Albedo, who was making his way free of a massive building, the supposed headquarters to the Knights of Favonius. The sight of him made her do a double take between him and Naruto. Just how many children did he have already? Did you have fun? The fourth child of Naruto asked. HM, the fire child chirruped. Uncle and the aunties had a super secret talk, but I'm not supposed to tell you about it, in payment and Razor and I played goldfish while we waited. I see. Albedo nodded his head kindly to the fire child's ramblings. Uncle. Now he and Naruto meet eyes and the boy passed on a smile. I would say that it'd make you my uncle as well. Not you too. Naruto's arms flung up. Shen felt the urge to pull at least one back down to her waist, but she held the instinct at bay as little Klee clambered up the steps. Be nice. Wave to the child. Smile. I jest. Albedo laughed as his charge clambered inside. I thank you for looking after Klee. She's less mischievous with people to hold her attention. No problem. The blonde barked a dry chuckle of his own. She's a joy to have. I wonder if he'll be saying that once she brings out the big bombs. A bead of sweat ran down his brow. She has bigger bombs. Only when her mother sends in special supplies, but you'd better be off. Albedo cast a glance over his shoulder then, as though expecting someone to materialize from the mists of the night. Jean did ask for us to alert her when the Lord Archon is next near. I think she wishes to give another meeting a try. For the love of Naruto rolled his eyes at that, and Shen's heart stilled a little. This Jean ... Was she another annoyance to be dealt with? She'd taste her spear? No. Down Shenhe, she was starting to stop herself. Naruto's influence at work. Tell her my name is Naruto and that if she and anyone else wants to speak they'd best get used to calling me that. And only that. Albedo granted him a nod. I see that she's informed. Thanks, L. Also, let her know that when I'm ready, if I ever am ready, I'll send word by Lisa on where to meet. I'll see it done, Naruto. Take care. The two shared a warm goodbye after that, but Shen couldn't care any less. Her mind was already spiraling downward. Naruto was planning to play nice with another woman that wasn't good. What if she too fell for him? No, Naruto was unparalleled. There was no what if to it. She would fall for him as every woman before her save Maeve did. And what of other women that he would meet beyond this Jean? How long would it take before a veritable army stood forth all vying for his attention? Not long at all, Shen's drunken mind gathered. It could not be. It must not be. Shen. Yes, her attention snapped forward and focused on Naruto. Let's go. He gave her a nudge. The others are waiting or probably not, he amended with a rueful look. Beidou will drink the king's share if we don't make for port now. Oh, how she wished there weren't others, but she yielded, swathing herself in his embrace. Naruto. He slowed his pace to turn to her, and she chose now, as it felt to be now or never. If liquor was liquid courage, then she'd need it at this moment. You, she swallowed once to comport herself, cursing her dry mouth. You said that I could stay by your side, in any way I so chose, right? Sure thing. He didn't hesitate, damn him. Not even a little. In any way you want to, for as long as you want. While Shen whirled to the front of him with a grace ignorant to her drunken status. Her arms flowed up and looped behind his neck. And she flew up. Really, she'd been trying to pull him down, but he was too mighty of a man as to be dragged, even by one such as her. The results were as she wished them to be, all the same, his arms swooping out to support her. She took his lips and didn't favor letting go. He was at first stiff, but as she showed no attempt to break away, he began to return in kind. His head shifted to better accommodate her, lips parting to better take hers on. She felt a new type of daze come to take her, not wholly registering his tongue as it tangled with hers. To kiss him felt as to kiss fire, but Shen let it burn her without trepidation. If it reduced her to ash, then she'd die happy. This fire, she knew now, was the only thing she could have ever wanted in her blood, in her veins, on her chest, in her mouth, on her tongue. To the deeps of her soul, her lungs breathed in a fire. This flame that had come to her, it was one she hoped would stay. It lingered and roared on even as he pulled away. He was speechless at the end of it all, so she was the one to first speak. What if I chose this to be the way that I stay? His mouth opened, closed, opened again, and finally he found words. That'd be fine with me, truly, I'd like that a lot. Good. Joy joined flame and overwhelmed her, her vision blurred. Otherwise you'd meet Mispia. Shen tumbled to sleep there, falling to his shoulder. The last thing she saw as her consciousness bid fair was his brilliant, shining eyes and his warm and charming smile. She'd cheated, and it hadn't shamed Beidou, not one bit. She was a woman that knew what she liked, what she wanted, what she needed. And never once had she doubted herself. So when she'd been given the right to set the stakes, her decision was clear. She wanted him on her ship and for him to be shirtless as he offered. But the latter would be fulfilled by the assurance of the former. She'd been casual in her wink to Lisa, the rest probably saw it was a simple flirt, but the Electro Witch got what she meant and carried out their unspoken scheme flawlessly. When they'd begun to down the booze, a delicate mead, she'd been neck and neck with him. He was unused to the drink, and that much was certain. She'd seen enough inexperienced drinkers to pick one out when they'd be so close. But for all her experience, he had guts, did too, mind you, but the man was on another level. He forced the sweet honey booze down his gullet with a determination more befitting the scene of a proper battle than anything else. But as they neared the finale, Lisa, the sweet thing that she was swept into, warmly blow into Naruto's ear. She'd make the act so sensual that it even gave Beidou pause. Even, but for poor Naruto, the lad had fallen to pieces, coughing mid-chug and nearly spilling the contents of the pint. It was room enough for her to handily finish her own serving. Naturally, he'd demanded a 2 out of 3 and then a 3 out of 5. He'd won one round, Lisa having only managed an assist twice over before Shen caught on. Neither Electro user wanted the end of her spear, so they played fairly under the penalty of death. Hadn't mattered. That's only went so far, and by the 4th pint, it was all Naruto had to keep his stomach in order. The pint was left half-finished. And for having to double and redouble the bet, she'd won a jacket and a shirt too. Naruto was the type to wear an undershirt, thought bastard. Nah, it was a tight thing though, form-fitting, so not a total loss. And just as it bared down to swallow me whole, I struck, cut it right across its neck. Power and lightning coursed through my veins then, and off came the last of its heads. Beidou reclined on the arm of her couch, one of many in her cabin, her legs splayed across Naruto's own. She was comfy in his jacket, comfier still with him being trapped under her. When I next came to, I had this Electro vision at my side. She showed them it then, a pretty purple orb embedded in gold, the symbol of Electro glowing, dimming off its glassy surface. How harrowing, Lisa giggled, both at the story and at Naruto's attempts to unlodge Beidou from him, but every time he shoved her thighs off his, she'd just return anew. He made for too good of a rest to give up. It was becoming something of a game. To survive the wrath of a dragon, a hydra at that, for days on end. I suppose the gods showed their favor to you. Beidou waved her pint, away with the thought. The gods have a crappy way of showing favor, if that's the case. They grant visions to those who are already accomplished and those that would have grasped this world by its horns without a vision. It feels more like throwing a bid in with a winning lot, not a real blessing. Can we not talk about them disgruntled and unafraid to show it? Naruto grumbled on. She batted her eyes at him. You say that as if you don't count amongst them. I don't. His reply came as a growl, anger burning in his eyes, and as the boat rocked more than a little bit, Beidou knew the cause to be the wind, just as she knew Naruto to be that wind. Yet for how obvious it was, for what Maeve had to say, for what everyone as it so seemed had to say, Naruto seemed to loathe the prospect, the core idea of it. Try as she might, Beidou couldn't peg why. For all that Naruto seemed to be, he held little darkness in him. It was there no one was pure, and Beidou'd be damned before she believed as much, but even compared to the noble types that she found herself so often in the company of Ningguang, Ganyu, Kazuha, Maeve, Naruto felt purer still. She had the knack for telling this sort of things, of shining a peering light into the darkness of the soul, had the eye for it ever since she'd gotten her vision a perk of the electro element perhaps. Yet the annoyance, the hatred and the sorrow as well that emerged when mentions of anything divine came about, drew forth all of Naruto's blacker feelings. It was unfocused and widespread never for the person who so uttered the phrase, but towards the general existence of gods and any speak of them. None of that mattered though, not for this moment. Beidou found her concern drift towards the Alker, currently in danger of capsizing should she not get this damned Archon to calm himself. Hey, before she could say do anything, Lisa drew Naruto's attention, cupping his cheeks flushed with anger and alcohol and dragging him forth. She captured his lips, pulling him deeply into her. It frazzled him, his arms flying up unsure of where to go, but in time moved to land on the hips of the Electro Witch. As they fell deeply into each other, the boat calmed. The sight was so hot. Beidou wished that to be her. Taking up either spot would have been fine for her. But as soon as it started to steam, it ended, Lisa pulling away and Naruto following if only for a moment. You need to calm down. She said so in a whisper, urging rather than demanding, gentle over stern. Then come, he whispered back to her. She gave him a look that said many things, none of them being that she believed him. That's not what I meant and you know it. He clicked his tongue and looked away. What would you have me do? People keep saying. That you're a god, what of it? Their words. And I respond to them with words. Naruto bucked up. You respond to them with aggression. Lisa spoke as simply and calmly as ever, eyes trailing over the contours of Naruto's enraged visage. And what good does it do? Does it make you feel strong in control? Oh, she was frigid there. Even Beidou felt cold. Tell me, is this who you really are? Quick to anger and threats of violence so that it'd make you no better than the worst of them? Gee, don't say it. It came as a whisper, halting Lisa as hatred and rage and scowl melted away, leaving on a sorrowful frown marred to Naruto. I've not had good experiences with them gods. Obvious. Beidou scoffed, taking in a glare from Lisa now. The librarian of Favonius probably thought her attempts as meaning to derail the conversation, but she only wanted to get her 2 cents past. What I mean, Tase, is that it's clear that you have an issue with the whole god business. Just that, like she could have used her words better there. This is what she got for trying to help with emotional crap. Smooth. If underwhelmed was a person, it'd be Naruto right now. What I'm trying to say is that you're on a ship with 2 mature beauties that are giving you the time of day. If there's a time to talk, it's here. So talk there. She worded that one a whole lot better, or so she thought. For Naruto, he just stared at her and to Lisa and back to her. Seeing as neither woman made to say more, he just reclined into the couch. His hands braced her knees, a long-staying gust of air blowing from him. From the moment I was born, gods and people calling themselves gods have made a mess of my life. Beidou quirked a brow. Lisa egged him on. And my father gave up his soul to a god of death so that he could save our village from a threat too big to bear. He winced even as he said the words. And not 12 years later that same god took the soul of my village leader, one of the few people that gave a shit about me at that time at least. Well, damn. Beidou could already see why contempt would form. Living sacrifices towards the gods were not something she'd ever get behind. If they be so omnipotent, then why did it cost a mortal life to show proof of that omnipotence? But he wasn't done. The next I heard anything of a god, it was after a mentor of mine, Juri, was struck down by this god, all because he wanted me my life. A hollow look flitted through his eyes, and she didn't like what she saw there. Thankfully it lasted only a moment before he rallied. He destroyed my home to get my response, and once he had his way and I saw him thrashed, he became all apologetic. A small, hoarse laugh bubbled out of him, neither angry nor bitter. Just said, he restored the lives of the people he killed but not the old sage, and neither did he live long enough to help repair the destruction he caused my village. I forgive him for all he did, or I tried to, but I couldn't forget. Shit. Alright, this was getting a bit heavy for her liking. He was done, now right. Not by a long shot. And you'd think that'd be enough. Yeah, blue eyes met hers, flecked by green light. But even after all that, there was this pair of idiots that declared war on the whole damn world in a mad attempt to become gods and lord over everyone. This hole just went deeper still, didn't it? The worst part is that they won, they got their way, but only long enough for him to end up possessed by an actual goddess. He leaned back and gazed at the ceiling, idly tracing a circle on her thigh, didn't even realize he was doing to her. And with her awakening, it was revealed that all the wars and conflict and bullshit that my world had dealt with for centuries was all made through her and her underling keeping up conflict. All of it, a part of her plan to break free of confinement and take the world for herself. That is, quite a bit, Lisa said, despair and worry in her gaze. Is that how you ended up here? Nah, he waved a hand, assuaging her. The bullshit that got me here happened just after we stopped here and all that's for another time, but my point is that gods have never meant me any good. His hand continued its wayward path, drawing a shiver from her. And if there be a god out there, one that'd call themselves benevolent, I'd curse them more than the evil ones I've dealt with. Why would any anything that call itself good allow such malicious gods to roam the world? Right, then, time to Chan. I would have thought you'd take a liking to Barbados, then. What's that supposed to mean? Naruto gave Lisa a look of confusion. For the first time since they'd met, Beidou found herself believing him to be from another place and time. Who in Teyvat didn't know the tale of Barbados? Not he, apparently. Lisa was all too happy to give it. Barbados was not the first god to rule over Mondstadt. That dishonor belongs to Decarabian, the god of storms. He thought himself much beloved by the people of that age, giving them eternal peace, but that peace was achieved by entrapping the people in a barrier of storms, too thick and fierce for man or god to bypass. He forced the people to be content with the small paradise allowed to them, unable to see the world beyond the storms, unable to take in nature for themselves. The Decarabian was a foul one, Beidou would be the first to say such. She hoped to never see a day where he made a return. It was said that even the sight of birds were foreign to the people. Unable to bear this, some stood up in revolt, aided by the smallest of wind spirits, who chose to stand beside mortals despite the Decarabian's terrible might. And on the day the Decarabian fell, that wind spirit stood forth to ascend into godhood, become the Archon we call Barbados. It was all a tale that spread on winds to every corner of Teyvat. Barbados' ode to freedom drew many a man's admiration, especially of sailors, who relied on his winds to uphold their own freedom. He did not become an Archon because he yearned for power or control, but so that he might protect Mondstadt from those who'd wish to take hold of it, people like the Decarabian. Yet, he does so from afar, giving the people free rein to live their own lives. That's the reason why people are so sure of you being Barbados. Sweeping in just as Storm Terror was about to claim so many lives and refusing the praise for your deed. She thumped his leg with a fist. That's exactly what Barbados would do. Don't you see? Naruto looked away. I never knew. Lisa tilted her head. Had you ever bothered to ask? He winced. And now maybe I should be asking more questions. Maybe you should. That's swell, and all Beidou saw no harm in the Barbados worship. It should be expected of someone born to Mondstadt, but her view was just a bit too rose-tinted for her liking. But what's freedom when demanded of you by a god? And what do you mean by that? Oh, that edge on Lisa's voice was as sexy as it was threatening. She should word herself better or try to at all. Gods are flawed, I'd say. Now it was her turn to favor the ceiling with a long, lasting look. I'm not a devote or follower to any of them, so a god with a light hand is the only type I'd care to live under. But them vanishing off until they decide they're needed, that's just cruel. How long did the people of Mondstadt go enslaved before Barbados chose to step in? All because it was people, themselves, doing the slaving instead of a god. His aid is too shallow, and you've got to admit that. For all the crap I could put to Rex Lappy's his Adepti's feet, at least they're there. When nature nearly ended life in Liu, they helped us. When famine would have taken us, they feed us. And when other gods tried to see Liu sunk, they stopped them for us. They're a dubious group, those gods, and I frankly don't think they're much needed in every matter, but they are needed. A god whose own people can't recognize him feels more like he doesn't care at all, if anything. Then I think we'll just have to agree to disagree. Fine by me, Beidou shrugged, not one to force her opinion on other people. If anything, she'd call Lisa's admiration for a god that didn't do too much of anything a good boon. It meant that she wouldn't be finding herself associated with another woman that constantly told her to get back to work. But, on Naruto, and what about you, Loverboy, what's your take? Naruto paused, considered, sighed. I think that I'm too drunk for this. Here, Beidou cheered with a bottle of wine in hand. Where'd that come from? Even she was left to wonder from where the booze materialized at times. She'd not complain though. Let's get back to the partying. She slipped her legs free of Naruto's, only for the sake of taking his waist, instead straddling his hips and stirring up a fluster from him. Her actions had the unfortunate mishap of shoving Lisa away from Naruto's side, but the woman would live. Beidou suffered such deep conversation about gods and the morality of their existence, so this much was owed to her. Oi, get off, he shoved, but her grip remained firm. Don't worry, uncleaned. As much was true, she was no maiden of purity, and she'd not been much past her teens before having a taste of the flesh, so to say. But she didn't much sleep around. She knew what she wanted, sure, but that also meant that she didn't settle for just anyone. If anything, Naruto should be honored to be offered a place in her sheets. Wasn't every day she did something like this. That's not the problem. Oh, then what would it be then? Ria, cherry boy, she leered, pressing her forehead to his. Saving yourself for someone special, maybe. That riled him up, just the way she liked them. It ain't that. Then prove it. She ducked down with a grin, nearing up on him, deciding that it was her time to see how an Archon tasted. But as she pinned him down, he inexplicably gave way. Smoke and air blew past her, leaving her with only Lisa's company. She looked around, but Naruto was nowhere in sight. The hell? Lisa giggled, finding enjoyment in her misery as it seemed. It does seem that we've been duped. Why'd she get the feeling that the only one to be duped was her? Hell, they all heard Beidou's miserable cry from outside, sitting high up on the deck. It does seem that you've been found out. Maeve hummed as she sipped at her drink. Serves her right. Both of them, really. Imagine trying to cheat a ninja. Naruto returned, having seen the kids and Shen to bed. On a whim, he decided to see to the company of Maeve and Childa. Beidou and Lisa were likely to try things in their drunken states, so his two least favorite comrades actually proved a good distraction. It's not as difficult as you'd think, my friend, in check, Childa declared as he moved his piece towards taking Maeve's queen, or maybe that was the king. He could only pick up so much from watching them play, particularly seeing as his mind was so unfocused by the mead and other matter. He's speaking from experience. Naruto looked to the harbinger while Maeve busied herself with studying the board. Well, the fad we do have many business ventures, some of which see me to lands where the shadows have eyes, as you'd put it. Don't assume that I'd put anything anywhere. Naruto frowned, taking in the game anew. There, he pointed to a piece of Maeve's and trailed his finger along a path. Maeve nodded, quickly taking the piece and sending it on its merry way to victory. Checkmate. That's against the rules. Childa's fuming about outside interference met a shrug from him. I don't follow rules. He wagged a finger. Ninja, remember. I don't want to play anymore. A shame, but I suppose that means you can return to your osmanthus quest. Maeve gave Childa an expectant stare. Naruto was not under the illusion that she cared much about the wine. A faint waft of fermented osmanthus somewhere on the premises, finding his nose too acute for a normal man's nose, but a man who normal. He felt that enough to be true. I'm going, Childa made to dismount the ship. Once he was back to land, Maeve turned upon him as well. And shouldn't you be off to attend to your ladies? It wouldn't do for little Beidou to tear her own ship apart to find you. You talk like an old man, you know. So I'm told. But that brings to question, why spend time with this old man-like woman when young, wanting one so desire your attention more? Naruto regarded her for a time, saying nothing much at all, just staring at her. She stared back, her eyes, they were like an abyss. Just try and I'll figure you out. She laughed. Older and wiser have tried. He wouldn't have met defeat that easily. And did they succeed? I'll tell you when you're older and wiser. She gave him a smile and it made him feel like a child. She had that air about her, an old man's disposition, even if she had the assets to say otherwise. Well, I'm off, if you won't budge. He sighed, knowing full well that pissing off lightning users long enough would only lead to a fried rear. And they're not my ladies, he shot back even as he made his way down. You keep saying that? Geez. Perhaps the god of denial will become your moniker. Leave it to her to get the parting shot. As if his murmuring was for himself, but Maeve was likely to have heard. But, gods, the memories of his clone bounced around in his mind. Lisa and Beidou each held their own opinions about the gods. As did Rosaria and Dilek and Shen, Maeve, Jean, Kia, Pema, maybe even little Klee had something to say. He hadn't bothered to ask those he met about the gods, too wrapped up with convincing all that he was definitely not one. When Beidou asked him his clone about such thoughts at the end there, he really didn't have one. He hadn't bothered to form any. Caught up with his own opinions about who gods were, he didn't bother to wonder what they might mean for other people. But guess ... he supposed gods might be just as varied as humans were, that they could be capable of good, but he wouldn't know that for sure until he started to ask and see for himself. And should he see something he didn't like, should they prove themselves every bit the monsters he thought them to be, then these gods would go the way of Kaguya before them. That much was a promise. Right then, time to face the music. He reached the door and nudged it on him. So you finally arrived. Lisa's eyes were on him the moment he entered the room. He crossed both arms behind his head with a chuckle. So you picked up that it wasn't me before the little minx? Of course, she had. I figured I'd play along. Her smile was full of dark promise as she crossed one leg over the other. That you'd reward me with something nice if I said nothing. She leaned forward then, and his mouth went dry. After all, if our own personal you is a punishment, then I'd love to see what you'd call a present. This woman. So you're back? Beidou, all dauntless and headstrong, stood and made her way to him, hips asway. Thought better than to miss out on all this, Good lord, you could bounce a quarter off. No, focus. You know we just met, like, literally yesterday, right? That did nothing to stop the captain of the Crux fleet. If anything, it urged her forward at a quickened pace, as if she was trying to stop him from going up in smoke, which was valid. Your point. She pushed herself up against him, perky bust threatening to spill from her battle dress. He wondered if it was too late to go back to Lisa's apartment. Shen would wake with a fury if she found that he left her. Paimon would likely have him face her paimonial wrath for leaving to deal with an enraged adepti apprentice. But leaving now might prove difficult. My point, he coughed. Well, you hardly know me. I could be a demon sent to do all types of horrid things to you know. Well, are you? It wasn't until his back hit that wall that he realized that he'd been in retreat. Damn it all, the only demon here was her. Probably not. Good enough for me. Her arms went up to rest against the wall to either side of his head. Her knee came up and pushed to the wall as well. How cartoonish must they look? The woman was half a head shorter than him, but more than that, she was too close. And so, it was official. If he wanted out, he'd have to fight his way through. He looked to Lisa, maybe she would. Nope. The sly sorceress swirled a glass of some wine or another in hand, watching them with a yearning excitement in those emerald eyes. What was she? She some type of voyeur. Last chance. Beidou's lips brushed his ear, sending a shiver shooting down his spine. Come on. Don't you want to live a little this close? He could smell her, the faint scent of the sea whisked away with whiskey. It was intoxicating. Relax. Her lips ghosted across his neck. For once in your life, just let go. Screw it. His body exploded into motion. In the same instant his hands betrayed him. He took her by the hips, grabbing a fistful of her rear and all but snatching her up, maybe because he wanted her so bad, or maybe just to see if she was up to the task. Probably the booze talking really did wonders for his inhibitions. Beidou didn't prove herself wanting, hands lacing into his hair as their lips met, one leg twining against his to keep him from running away. Not that he would now. It was an experience to say the least. With Shen kissing her, it felt like a union, both of them guiding each other to greater heights of pleasure. With Lisa, he'd been in a daze, so he'd given her the lead, allowing her to take him where she chose. But for Beidou, it was much more of a battle. He liked it. Their weapons were their tongues, and neither felt content with yielding. His hands groped freely, and so did hers. He heard his shirt tear and retaliated in kind, ripping at the black fabric just above her breasts, exposing her full bosom to the night air. Even though he held her, she threw her weight around freely, mostly at him, leading them to twisting and turning, just so he would not tumble to the floor. A gust of wind swept up to keep him footed more than once, but eventually they found themselves tumbling to one of the couches. He pinned her there, to which her legs locked him in place, fingers still gripping his hair, urging him to keep on, and so he did. For a moment, Naruto almost hesitated. Almost. Should they stop to catch a breath? What's wrong? Beidou cooed at him. Don't tell him you're chickening out. Her words peaked into a gasp as he dipped down and kissed her bare breasts. Drunk or no, he wasn't about to put up with her teasing. No, this was much more preferable. He felt her hands fumble at his trousers, heard his belt buckle come undone. He kicked them aside with a grunt as Beidou lifted her skirt, and then Lisa's arms draped over him. Now, her breath brushed his ear. Don't forget about me. The rest of their night soon descended into wild, vicious, maddening carnal bliss. Cut. As ever, big thanks to Ronin. Wouldn't be here without him. If this chapter didn't make it clear, Maeve and Zhongli are both one and the same, and yet not. Two sides of the same coin, so to speak. Once more, the Ember's rule remains. If folks don't like this story, well, I'll not continue it. That's no joke, folks. I'm so busy these days, basically, I don't have time off. Not anymore. My free time is limited, and as such, I can't afford to focus on something folks don't like. Reviews keep me writing in these times, and keep the daily updates flowing. Silence only hurts. I hate having to beg for feedback, but without it, well, it feels like I'm not making an impact. Right then, as ever, reviews are love, reviews are life. Reviews keep me safe from any and all strife. So in the immortal words of Atlas, review, would you kindly? Every bit helps out. Some are very far out indeed. Hope you enjoy the taste of what's to come. Hold on to your hats. You have a choice to make. I pray you choose wisely. In his dreams, he heard it. A piercing crash and sounds of elements clashing. The panicked screams of people calling. Out to his gnosis, to him. He woke up in a bed. Off for the love off, not again. This time, both his arms were trapped be two people. Please don't be Maeve, for the love of the log. Payman wasn't happy come morning. Why'd you leave Payman alone with Shen? She's all grumpy and woozy, and Anne stopped messing with Payman's hair. She windmilled her arms to no avail as he tousled her white tresses. Payman is not a pet. Maeve sighed softly. Children, the lot of you. Naruto's head snapped back in a shower of blood. His eyes sparked green. Good hit. Then he struck back. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.